Sup, my fellas. Don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. A cave appeared. It was heard that the leader had died. His club was now his. Raising his hands up, the goblin shouted that he was now the leader here, to which he was answered that nonsense, all this is nonsense. The monster suddenly jumped up and shouted that he would be the leader. His eyes lit up and he added that he could go to hell. The goblins began to fight. Looking to the side, the monster said that the leader had untouched prey, they would take it. Looking straight ahead, he added that but the guy protecting it. The monster took a step forward. It was heard that he was about to return. The goblin walked straight. Looking at him, the monster shouted that it was him. It was he who was protecting the prey, a disgusting creature, covering his body like a man. He knows where the prey is hidden and wants to grab it for himself. The monster's eyes lit up. It was heard that they were after him. They would take away the prey. The monsters looked angrily. It was said that he should wait a little. Some had already gone there. Looking straight ahead, the goblin heard that they were strong. They would wait until they started fighting, to which he thought, what the hell? Rushing forward, the goblin heard that he was coming to help, that he should not touch him. He frowned, hearing that he should fall behind. The exit from the cave appeared. The monster stopped abruptly. It was heard that someone, she does not want to have children from goblins, let them stop. The monster looked away. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. Sitting on the ground, she screamed for help. Looking straight ahead, the goblin told them to move away from her. Standing in front of him, the monster replied that again he, the leader died, so now she is his. Looking straight ahead, he added that if he dared to take her away from him, then. The goblins rushed forward. It was heard that he would die. They began to attack him. The monster's eyes widened, thinking that damn, fucking goblins. They struck. The thought appeared that he could not believe that such low-level goblins. Gritting his teeth, the goblin shouted that he would not die here, he would survive. Suddenly, the monsters looked at him in amazement. The creature was lying on the ground. Gritting his teeth, the goblin said that if he did not let him pass, he would die. The monster looked at him in amazement. They began to run away, shouting that they were running. He had a weapon, they would return. The goblin was breathing heavily. Sitting on the ground, the girl said that he was like, thank you for saving her again. He does not harm her and continues to protect her. He really is very different from the other goblins. Just let him not die. The goblin opened his mouth and thought that he was different from the others. A notification appeared in front of him. A thought appeared that actually he used to be a human too. The goblin was sitting on the ground. It was said that the chief, he was alive. However, he did not expect that instead of meeting a god after being hit by a truck, he would be transported to another world with a system. But even though he had one, it was not fully activated yet. A notification appeared in front of the monster. A thought appeared that he did not even have any functions except for viewing some statistics. However, he had not been idle for the past few days, and he received some information from what this girl told him. The gods appeared. It was said that in this world created by the gods, there are many different monsters, but humans still won their place on this continent thanks to their strength. A crowd of monsters appeared. A thought appeared that goblins are considered the weakest and most vile among all the monsters in this world. Looking at the statistics, the protagonist said that his characteristics are really weak now. Even ordinary goblins can kill him. There is still a way to become stronger. The girl sighed. The thought appeared that it is to mate with females. The goblins walked forward. It was said that they have the ability to become stronger due to constant mating and reproduction, but there are no females among them, so they use women of other races for reproduction, and this is what makes them constantly rob. But, sitting in front of the girl, the protagonist thought that he was once a human, and to do something like this somehow. Frowning, the girl shouted that he should not worry. Having spent these days with him, she understood everything. He is completely different, and does not want to live with the rest of the goblins, right? Rick silently looked at her. He rolled his eyes when he heard that he shouldn't worry. When the knights came for her, she would tell them that he had been saving her all along. Knights were always fair and just. She was sure they would agree to let him live in the village, to which he thought that it wasn't that she was wrong since the system hadn't fully activated yet. He just needed to hold out until the humans came and he could get their protection. That way he could survive. And then he would gradually figure out how to activate this thing. Suddenly, they heard loud noises. Looking to the side, the hero thought, damn, they were coming back. Looking at the girl, he yelled at her to hide, to which she responded approvingly. The protagonist stood in front of the monsters. Rushing forward, the goblin yelled that human, she was here, he wanted her, getting stronger didn't mean dying. Rick clenched his teeth tightly. Suddenly, he struck at him. Looking to the side, the hero shouted that it looked like people had come to save her. Rushing forward, the girl said that most likely it was the Holy Order. Great, they would take a look. The ground suddenly shook. The guy struck with his sword. The hero looked at him in amazement. Looking to the side, the knight said that damn, vile creatures, they tore the cloak of the Holy Order. Looking at him, the protagonist thought that this was the first time he saw such high indicators since he came to this world. He was definitely a human. Raising his hand up, the girl said that they were here. the thought arose that he had dealt with the goblins so easily. Suddenly Rick looked in amazement. The girl's eyes widened. The hero abruptly threw her aside. They fell to the ground. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist wondered if he was here to save. Why did he attack her? Maybe the cave was too dark and that's why he mistook her for a goblin. Holding the sword in his hands, the knight said that it was a shame the goblin was able to dodge his attack. Looking at him, the girl screamed that it was her, Kate. Looking down, Luke replied that he should shut up, he knew it was her. Sitting on the ground, the girl heard that she had already been defiled by goblins. Perhaps she even carried one of them under her belly. It was ridiculous for such a dirty creature as her to expect mercy from him. Let her go and repent of her sins before the great Holy Mother. Taking his cloak, Kate screamed that he should stop. Even though the goblins had kidnapped her, they had not defiled her, all thanks to him. Pointing at the hero, she added that this goblin protected her. The knight swung and shouted that she could have made up something more convincing. She thought he was a fool. Let him go to his end with these worthless freaks. A thought appeared that she couldn't believe it. Suddenly the protagonist rushed forward. Throwing the girl aside, he shouted that he should run. There was another exit. Standing in front of the knight, Rick thought, damn, I didn't expect this outcome. A glow appeared in the cave. The hero's eyes widened. Standing behind the knight, the man told him to stop. The girl closed her eyes and said that this goblin seemed a little strange. Sitting on the ground, Kate shouted that he should save her. She was kneeling in front of her and asking for help. Stretching her hand forward, Eva asked that he understand words. Looking at her in amazement, the hero thought that she was the Holy Virgin Eva, a representative of the temple he was told about. If he wanted to survive, then she was his only chance. With his eyes wide open, he shouted that yes. Standing in front of the girl, the protagonist asked that she was called the Holy Virgin. He was right. In fact, he was not a monster. He used to be a man. He became like this because of one incident. He would be able to explain everything if he went with her. Frowning, Luke said that he would be smarter than the rest of the goblins. What a rarity. To which Eva replied that usually goblins are stupid and inferior creatures. They are not able to think and speak so fluently. Perhaps he was sent to them by the Holy Mother herself. Closing her eyes, Eva asked that this goblin really did not harm her. To which Kate replied that yes, he did nothing to her. On the contrary, he protected her from the rest of the goblins and gave her food. The girl grinned and said, okay, he looks like he's special. They'll take him with them. They'll study him thoroughly before making any decisions. Looking at the hero, she asked if he agreed. Looking up, the hero said he agreed, he'll go with them, and then thought, finally, someone here is capable of listening to reason. Since staying here means death, he might as well go with them and prove his innocence. The girl raised her hand up. The protagonist looked at her in amazement. Walking straight, Eva said, well then they'll go. Walking next to her, Rick said that he thanked her for her kindness. Let her be sure that he would repay them. Grinning, the girl said that of course. Suddenly, Luke plunged his sword into the girl. The hero turned around in fear. He was looking at the dead girl. The protagonist froze in amazement. His eyes widened. Grinning, Eva said that when they returned, he would repay them well for everything. The bell in the street rang. Standing in front of the people, the knight said that the last goblin raid brought great harm to this bright city. Frowning, he added that the goblins attacked from behind and killed 30 residents. The people raised their hands and shouted that damn goblins, blood for blood, an eye for an eye, humans and goblins are mortal enemies. Stretching his arms out to the sides, Luke shouted that, however, the Holy Order had carried out the temple's order and destroyed these goblins. They had avenged the fallen. The girl stepped forward and said that they should continue to visit the temple. Closing her eyes, Eva said that they would always protect their followers. An office appeared. The scroll was lying on the table. It was heard that today's sermon had been quite successful, the same stupid people as always. Grinning, Eva said that now they would pray even more and bring more offerings. Looking straight ahead, the goblin turned. The girl looked away. The protagonist's eyes widened. He was chained to the wall and said that she was a creature. Looking at him, Eva said that he was still alive. Well, tenacity. No wonder they still can't get rid of them from the continent. She lowered her head and added that well, they would see how the poison affected the goblin. Rick gritted his teeth and shouted that she had deceived him, deceived everyone and killed Kate. Looking straight ahead, he added that this was their vaunted holy order. This is what they called human justice. Suddenly, a blow flew at him. Standing in front of him, Eva said that how dare he, such a weak, lustful and worthless creature, as he decided to talk about human justice. Kate was bewitched by him, dared to speak for him. This betrayal of humanity and the holy order, death was her atonement. Smiling, she added that goblins were the real pests on this continent. She was doing him a great favor by talking to him now. A glow appeared around the girl and she said that he should be grateful and bring his small, disgusting body. Stretching her hand forward, Eva added that as an offering, in order to contribute to human experiments. A pentagram appeared under the goblin. The hero looked up and thought that he was going to die anyway. How he didn't want to. The knight stood in the cave. The thought appeared that all this was his fault. How stupid, being a human. To be reborn as a low-level goblin, he foolishly relied on human compassion, thinking that they were righteous and kind. The girl stood in front of the hero was told that he was too weak and naive, and this played a cruel joke on him. After returning to the village, Luke and Eva tortured and played with him as they pleased, not believing a single word he said. A bright glow appeared around the protagonist. The thought arose that he could not hold out for long, because one bastard hounded him to death. If he was given another chance, he would never trust people, he would definitely. The hero froze and thought that he had ground all their bones and drunk their blood. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Looking at his hand, the protagonist asked that he was still alive. Where did he end up? A notification from the system appeared. Looking at it, Rick asked what the system was, and then thought that his personal system, it was activated only after death. Frowning, the hero asked that it could also bring him back to life, said that but it seems he will be reborn as a lower creature again. Looking at the message, he added what would happen if he pressed yes or no. A message about his choice appeared. Raising his head, the protagonist asked that he would retain his memory, returned a week ago. Smiling, he added that he understood everything now, and then thought that this was an opportunity to take revenge on Luke and Eva. Rick clicked on the notification. A glow appeared around him. Looking straight ahead, the hero thought that Goblin Life 2.0 was starting. The movement to the Goblin Cave began. Stretching his hand forward, the hero grinned. Grinning, he said that it really was a little, but better than nothing, he thought. Looking to the side, the protagonist said that as he thought, the order was still here, he should be on guard. A map appeared, he heard what it was capable of. Grinning, Rick said that the simulation, so he could foresee the future, would begin immediately. The hero clicked on the notification. He looked at the pop-up messages. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist thought that even though he had 3 options, he was sure that even if they united, the goblins would still not be able to deal with Luke on their own. Only by escaping would he be guaranteed to survive. Clicking on the notification, he added that he would first try to simulate the option with the highest number of points. If he could exchange them for a weapon, then perhaps he could defeat them with a surprise attack. The goblin died. A system message appeared. Frowning, the hero thought that as he thought, relying on the goblins he would not have a chance to defeat them, but at least he earned points. Looking straight ahead, he said to open the exchanger. Turning around, the protagonist said that there were so many weapons for exchange, but he had too few points. A knife appeared. It was heard that this dagger was exactly worth 10 points. Gritting his teeth, Rick said that it was sharp, very different from the weapons the goblins were used to. If it hit a vital point, it could kill anyone with one blow. Looking at the notification, the hero asked why Kate wasn't here. Where did she go? The girl grinned. System messages appeared. The protagonist's eyes widened. He grinned slightly. Looking straight ahead, Rick said that it was clear. It seemed he had fulfilled his promise to her after all. Well, in that case, he had nothing more to worry about. He rushed forward and thought that he could survive and escape. This was the narrowest passage. The entrance from the outside was smaller, so there should be fewer guards here. Putting his hand to his face, the knight said that these goblins were disgusting, to which the other replied that he should hold on, the job should be easy. The hero frowned and thought that he heard something. The knight crouched and said that this was a small entrance. Any goblin that came out would be immediately hammered to death. Let him not forget. Luke had ordered that any girl who tried to escape during this chaos would be killed. They must not let them reach the village. Got it, he got it. Let him not grumble. Looking away, the hero thought, damn holy order, for the sake of their dominion they were ready to kill even their own, let alone a goblin like him. Putting his hand to his face, he added that he had no choice but to fight. Suddenly, a voice came from the cave saying that they should help. He had been kidnapped from the holy city, and the knight said that someone was running, and the other added that if he killed her, then Master Luke would definitely reward him. The man held a knife behind his back. Grinning, he said that he should come out. Do not be afraid, he was one of the knights. They came here to bring them back. Suddenly, a blow flew at him. Rushing forward, the hero thought that he had returned to take revenge. The man suddenly froze. Taking a step forward, the knight asked what he was stuck there for, and that he should hurry up. The protagonist smiled broadly. He rushed forward sharply. Suddenly Rick struck the soldier. The hero swung his knife, and it sounded like a goblin. The blow hit the man. He fell to the ground. Holding his chest, the knight asked him what he could say in human. Kneeling, he begged for mercy. Showing a photo of his family, the man said that he had a wife and daughter, and that they were waiting for him at home. Standing in front of him, the hero heard that he was smart. He should understand him. He was just following orders. He was forced to come here. Holding a knife behind his back, the knight said that he had gold, and a young girl. He was ready to bring him a fresh and juicy girl. Let him think about it. He would get a lot if he let him live. Smiling, he thought that he was distracted, opened up, and then shouted that he should die. A blow flew at the knight. The hero swung his weapon. The blade and watch fell to the ground. The protagonist stood still. He looked to the side, seeing a flash. Frowning, Rick said that this was Luke's voice. He was coming here. He took the man's corpse. Walking forward, the hero said that they would meet soon. Luke and the girl examined the corpses. Frowning, the man asked what the hell, did the goblins really slip past them? Looking at him, the girl asked that it looked very much like the work of mutants. What did she think? Looking down, Luke replied that yes, it looked like it. If they escaped, things were bad. Kicking the corpse, he added that they couldn't even defeat the mutant goblins, the scum. Eva stuck out her tongue and said that goblins were mutants. How interesting. Her eyes lit up and she added that if they caught one, they could have a lot of fun with him. A dark forest appeared. Sitting on the ground, the hero said that he was finally saved. Holding an apple in his hands, he added that since they hated goblins so much, he would treat them like goblins. Goblins were able to become stronger by mating and eating, increasing their characteristics. He would be able to breed stronger offspring, which would expand his influence. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist thought that in this life he would make every human man's only desire be death, and make every girl moan and wail at his feet. He gritted his teeth and asked if Luke was still looking for him with his people. The man came out of the bushes. Rushing forward, Rick thought about striking first to gain an advantage. Suddenly the goblin tripped over a stone. The girl covered her eyes and screamed. The hero looked at her in amazement and asked why she could talk. The goblin fell to the ground. The protagonist gritted his teeth. He looked at her in surprise. Lying on the ground, the girl said that it hurt. A thought came to mind. What kind of feminine traits are these? As far as he knows, goblins only give birth to males. That is why they can reproduce only by intercourse with other species. Sitting in front of him, the goblin said that he should not hit her. She was only here to get water. Frowning, the hero thought about what was going on, how the goblin could talk so well. Her characteristics appeared, and he added that marriage with her would make him the god of goblins. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist wondered what this meant. What if? Looking at him, the girl said that she was really sent only to get water. If she didn't do it, the chief would kill her, to which Rick replied that he should forgive her. He didn't want to. Stretching his hands forward, he added that he shouldn't cry. Looking away, the hero thought that if he continued, he could attract the attention of Luke and his soldiers. With wide eyes, the girl asked that he could talk too, to which he replied that of course, and then thought that for sure. Usually goblins are not able to talk normally. Most likely, she was not able to communicate properly with other goblins. Sitting on the ground, the girl said that he was kind. The others only beat and scolded her. For the first time someone took care of her so tenderly. If he had nowhere to go, then maybe he would return with her to her tribe. Rick looked surprised hearing this. Smiling, he asked that there was a goblin tribe nearby, and then thought that he was not sure if Luke was following him or not. Now was definitely not the time for mating. The main thing was to find a safe place. The girl looked away in amazement. Grinning, she said that yes, she could take him there. Smiling widely, the hero thought that he was only concerned about where he could find subordinates for himself, and then said that he should take him there. A tent camp appeared. The goblins climbed out of the tents. Standing in front of the hero, they said that why was he dressed like a human? How strange. Frowning, the protagonist thought that there were quite a lot of goblins in this tribe. He would start from here. Raising his hand up, he said that he came to join them. Who was their boss? The monsters looked at him. It was heard that the stranger wanted to see the chief. You can't just go and meet the chief whenever you want. Covering her eyes, the girl shouted that he was not bad. Let them not act rashly. Looking straight ahead, they heard what everyone was gathered here for. A staff with skulls appeared. The hero looked at it. The chief's eyes lit up and he asked what all the fuss was about. The protagonist frowned and said that there was such a strong goblin in this tribe. Standing in front of them, the chief asked why she brought the stranger, to which the girl replied that yes, the problem was that he had nowhere else to go. His eyes lit up and he said that great. Stretching his hand forward, the goblin said that then they would kill him and have a feast. The hero held the blade in his hands. Stretching his weapon forward, he said that they should stop. He knows how to make weapons, asked to let them join them, will make them stronger. Raising his hand up, the leader said stop. He took a step forward. Looking at the hero, the goblin asked that he did not even smell of such abilities, what exactly he can create. Standing in front of him, the protagonist answered that if he finds iron or raw materials, he will make simple household tools for them. Let him give him a little time. I am sure they will be satisfied. And then thought that it seems that the higher the level of the goblin, the higher his mental abilities. Holding the weapon in his hands, Rick said that if the tribe has an iron tool, they will be able to cope with any monsters and people. They will defeat everyone. The goblins surrounded him and shouted that with iron weapons you cannot be afraid of people. Wonderful meat, they will be able to cope with people. And even elves, if there are iron weapons, they will be able to go north. Looking straight ahead, the leader said that fine, he would give him a chance. Let him find iron ore and make a weapon within 3 days, then he would stay alive. But if he failed, he would kill him. Stretching out his hand forward, the goblin said that he would give hers too. He went into the tent. Frowning, the protagonist thought that yes, I am sure they will keep their words. With his current strength he will not be able to resist directly, so he will buy time and create a weapon to become stronger. A dark forest appeared. The goblins walked forward. Looking straight ahead, the girl said that they should wait. She had been on the road all day, she can't take it anymore. Suddenly, someone swung his leg. The goblin hit her and shouted that she should go. If she can't find the ore, she will die. Lying on the ground, the girl said that they should not hit, she will be silent. Suddenly, a stone flew at the monster. Looking at them, the hero said that they were coming with him to find ore, not to cause trouble. Standing still, he added that he had already explained to them where to look for it, so each of them should bring him at least a piece to survive. Frowning, the protagonist said that otherwise everyone would be kaput. The goblins looked at him in fear. They started to run away. They heard that he had an iron weapon. He would kill them. Damn, as soon as he had his own weapon, he would immediately knock him down. Looking straight ahead, the hero thought that he was right, so he should kill them before he made a weapon. Looking at the girl, he added that it was time to become stronger. The goblin sat on the ground, and the protagonist told her not to cry. He sat down next to her. Looking at her, Rick asked that she didn't want to be with him. If she was with him, she would be able to eat meat every day and live in warmth. No one would touch her anymore, to which the girl asked if it was true. Frowning, he replied that of course he kept his word, but for now he was too weak, so he really needed her help. Lena opened her eyes wide and asked what and how he could become stronger. Looking at her, the hero replied that only if she wanted to have children from him. Looking up, the girl asked that it was possible, but she hadn't tried it yet. Lowering her head, the protagonist said that it was nothing, the main thing was her desire. The girl opened her eyes wide. They kissed. Lena was lying on the ground. Grinning, she said that she wanted him to become stronger, asking to let her give birth to his child. She opened her eyes wide. Lena closed her eyes. Notifications appeared. The hero was standing above her. Smiling, he thought that not only had he increased his level, but he had also improved his form, and his chances of winning were growing. The protagonist picked up his clothes. Wrapping the girl up, he said that from now on she was his, and would always protect her, to which Lena replied that he was so good. They looked to the side, hearing cries for help. The goblin ran forward quickly and shouted that there was a demonic wolf there. He was holding ore in his hands. Rick looked in amazement and thought that he had found iron ore, but had brought trouble with him. Frowning, the hero said that he should wait here, to which the girl replied that he should be careful. The wolf was approaching the goblin. The protagonist rushed forward. He swung at the wolf. The goblin looked to the side in amazement. The wolf was lying on the ground. The hero's eyes lit up and he said that it was not bad, let him give up the ore. The goblin handed him the ore. Rick smiled broadly and said that he was a good boy. If he found more, he would make him a weapon. Mountains appeared, and it was heard that it was excellent, almost ready. The goblins, looking at the hero, shouted that he really made things, and they were sure that he would succeed. The wolf's head appeared. Stretching his hand forward, the hero said that here, let him look, this is the weapon that he made from iron ore. Pointing at it, the goblin shouted that he was not deceiving him. He himself killed the demonic wolf, and saved them all, to which the chief asked what it was. He knew how to make weapons. An iron spear was much more dangerous than a stone one. Cool. The hero raised his hand up. Holding the spear in his hands, he asked what they wanted. The chief looked at him. He hit the ground with a stick. The goblin smiled and said that it was not bad. Standing in front of the hero, he added that he did not expect that he was really such a master. Looking to the side, the chief said that but if he wanted to stay here, everything was not so simple. The next task was to make 50 weapons in 2 days. Looking at him, the goblin asked why the chief was so cruel, and the other added that he should try and make it, he would help him. The hero grinned, looking straight ahead. The spears fell to the ground. Looking at the chief, the protagonist said that this is what he asked for. The chief smiled broadly and replied that good work. Raising his hand up, he shouted that today they should have enough food, they will celebrate Rick's joining. A fire appeared. Roasted meat lay on the leaves. Sitting next to the hero, Lena said that this sacrifice was especially for him. The protagonist began to eat the meat. Suddenly, his eyes widened. Looking at him, the girl asked what was wrong with him. The chieftain stood in front of them. Smiling, he said that he thought he would be smarter. Let him not think that he did not notice his aspirations, since he dared to encroach on his authority. It would not end well for him. He stretched his hand forward. Smiling, the goblin asked what was going on. He was messing with her. He cut her neck and added that in this case, they would test the girl, see how good she was. Lena's eyes widened. She stretched her hand to the side. The hero stood in front of the chieftain. Gritting his teeth, the goblin asked what and how dare he. Smiling, the protagonist replied that he was the only brat here. He was not cunning enough, and then thought that he had long known that he would poison the meat, so he was just playing. The goblin lowered his head down. Skulls appeared on his body. Rushing forward, he shouted that he would kill. Rick dodged his blow. He swung his dagger sharply. The hero struck the leader. His head fell to the ground. The protagonist stood in front of the goblins. Taking a step forward, he said that from this day on, The goblins looked surprised to hear that he was their new leader. Stretching his arms out to the sides, Rick shouted that he would help them fight the elves and humans. Raising his hand up, he added that let them mate, now they will always have meat. The goblins looked up and shouted. Looking to the side, the hero said that this was a gift for them. The goblins ran towards the wolf. They began to eat the beast. Frowning, the protagonist thought that leading the goblin tribe was only the beginning of his revenge. The next target was the elf tribe. Someone was sitting in the bushes, an idea came to mind. The girl frowned and thought about what happened here. Someone deftly descended along the roofs of the buildings in the settlement. The girl landed in front of the door, then she was greeted. The blonde elf took off her hood, then she was asked to wait, to which she replied that it did not matter, and that she needed to report something. The princess opened the door and turned to her mother, exclaiming that she needed to report something in the enchanted forest to the east. The elf was surrounded by men when she said her daughter's name. Cassandra's face turned red when she apologized, saying that she would probably come later. The mother was sitting in front of the princess when she asked her daughter to wait, as she was in such a hurry, and then asked what the matter was. The blonde elf's mouth fell open as she replied that she wanted to report a tribe of goblins. Sarah looked straight ahead as she asked again, assuming that she meant weak and dirty monsters, and then asked what they could do. The body of the beast was lying in front of the boy in the cloak when Cassandra explained that she had found a huge bear in the enchanted forest this morning, and that there were signs of a struggle at the scene, and the scent of goblins was everywhere, concluding that the bear was the most ferocious animal in the enchanted forest, and that the goblins would never be able to deal with it themselves. The princess looked ahead confidently as she added that a few days ago she saw the old goblin leader killed by a young man, and that it must be because of him that they had become stronger. Sarah opened her mouth and asked her daughter again. The elf lay in front of the man as she said that it seemed that the goblins had begun to regain their strength, and then turned to Cassandra, asking her to gather a team and kill the goblins, but not all of them, reminding her to leave the hostages. Sarah touched his bare chest as she said that a potion made from goblin hearts was an excellent tonic for the males of their tribe. The princess blushed with embarrassment as she agreed with her mother. The blonde looked ahead carefully as she told her daughter that she had done a great job, and then asked if she wanted to be rewarded with a handsome elf. Embarrassed, Cassandra ran away from her bed, saying that she still had to go to the evening check, so another time. The fire was burning brightly when someone told the leader that the branches had been laid out in a tree building, and that there were about 30 elven tree buildings in the forest, and all very tall. The guy in the cloak was surrounded by goblins when he replied that this was not bad, and that he would bring them 2 elves very soon, and that they should get ready for now. Then they asked him again and started shouting about his health. The green monster raised his hand to his mouth when he suggested preparing weapons for battle. The main character was shown in profile when he thought about the fact that there were only 30 elven houses, each of which was home to about 2 elves, so there were 60 of them in total. The protagonist extended his hand towards the fire, thinking about how they also had minds, which meant there were at least 70 of them, and how after the death of the previous leader, he had led the goblins to get weapons and hunt monsters to level up. Rick stood in front of a crowd of his brothers when he asked if everyone understood that they were going to kill monsters starting today, to which they answered in the affirmative. The body of a beast lay in front of the guy when a system notification appeared stating that the skill tooth slaying had been acquired. The goblins were attacking a golem when a system notification appeared stating that the skill stone skin had been acquired, and that defense had increased by 15. A monkey was in front of the protagonist when system messages appeared stating that the skills purification and climbing had been acquired. The goblins attacked the body of the huge snake when the system reported that the poison secretion technique had been acquired. A system window appeared with an image of a green monster and its characteristics. The protagonist imagined an elf behind him when he thought that the total combat power of this creature was only 200 units. Rick touched his chin with his hand when he thought that his goblins were now superior to them in strength, and then a notification from the system appeared, saying that the system hypothermia had been completed. The protagonist looked away when he said that after all, he was going to sneak attack the elves, so it wouldn't hurt to be careful, and then he asked the system to activate the skill. A tree with buildings on it was shown when it was announced that the activation of the goblins was complete and that the current plot was a sudden night attack and that the protagonist would lead an entire army of his brethren to attack the elf tribe and that he was confident that everything would go well. However, even if they entered secretly, they would be spotted by them and then they themselves would be trapped. The goblins stopped in front of the tree where their enemies were when the system explained that after they were caught, the leader of the elves would hang them for all to see. The corpses of the losers were hanging from the branch when a system notification appeared saying that the hope that he thought everything would go smoothly but ended up trapped was rated 0 out of 100 and that there was no reward. Rick looked askance when he realized what was said, thinking about the trap. The protagonist turned his head to the side, thinking that this was the ending that awaited them, and that they were being watched. Dark shapes were visible in the middle of the forest, as the protagonist thought about how goblins had a very developed sense of hearing and sensitivity, and that if he concentrated, he could find clues. His long ear was shown close up. There were bushes in front of him, as he realized what he had found. The full moon was shining in the sky. The outlines of the foliage were visible. The elves were moving nimbly, moving forward, when the princess exclaimed that the goblins wanted to attack their tribe, and that no one could imagine this, adding that they needed to tell their mother about everything. Then her comrades agreed with her. Arrows flew forward. The blonde turned around, looking back. A piercing scream was heard over the dense forest. Green leaves were flying in the air. The wounded elves were lying on the ground when Cassandra realized that she had no strength. Then someone turned to the chief, exclaiming that he had hit her and that there was a female. The blonde elf put her hands on the ground, thinking that she was experiencing some strange feeling, assuming that it was poison. The goblin opened his mouth and said that he did not think that it would be so easy to catch them. Rick stood in front of the princess when he added that they were just in time. The protagonist lowered his merciless gaze when he ordered to catch them, then they responded with agreement. A stream of liquid poured down when someone ordered to catch them and hurry, because the chief was there. The blonde elf was lying on the ground. The goblin's hand reached for her when someone exclaimed that he would save her for him and that they were waiting for the chief. The protagonist sat in front of the princess when he thought about how the goblin fluid seemed to have a special effect on the elf girls, and how their chances of defeating them were greatly increased. Cassandra gritted her teeth in anger when she called them worthless creatures, asking how they dared to kidnap her and plan an attack on the clan. The princess opened her mouth wide when she exclaimed that they should not expect mercy from their mistress, and that she would not forgive them, warning that if even a hair fell from her head, they would not live. The goblin smirked, his mouth slightly open. The elf fell in front of Rick when he asked her again, saying that it was interesting. The protagonist pointed to his fellow when he said that it seemed that she considered them her subjects, but his subordinates did not agree. Cassandra lowered her head as she remembered her mother's request that she remember to leave a few alive when the protagonist added that it was obvious that the elves could have wiped out all the goblins in the forest, but there were too many of them in the jungle, so it was not easy to exterminate them all. Rick was in front of the elf when he concluded that he would show her everything in the evening. The protagonist turned to his brethren when he allowed them to eat the other two elves and absorb their skills. The protagonist lowered his creepy gaze. The princess looked up in fear when she asked him not to do it, after which a system notification appeared congratulating him for reaching the level cap of plus 30, saying that since he had reached the highest level, the remaining points would be converted into health, strength, and defense, and that the new skills of stealth approach and night vision had been acquired. The house was lit when someone told his mother that he couldn't do this anymore, to which she replied that it was impossible to finish today. Sweat was pouring down Sarah's face when she said that it was a pity, and that if she had known, she would have caught more goblins. Men were lying around her when she asked if Cassandra hadn't returned yet, to which she was answered in the affirmative, adding that she should have returned a long time ago. The dark-haired elf looked at the mistress and asked if she wanted to send a few people, adding that perhaps they would catch goblins at the same time and raise their level. Sarah closed her eyes when she agreed with him, allowing him to take the boys and go to her daughter. The mistress's subordinate grabbed his sword when someone said that her Cassandra would not return. Someone fired a bow. The guy opened his mouth wide, throwing his head back. The blonde elf clutched an arrow in her hand when she thought about the goblins. The protagonist stood up straight when he said that he had captured her daughter, and that they would soon have children. The protagonist looked forward with confidence when he added that they would become a family. The lady pulled her sword from its sheath. Sarah stood in front of Rick when she asked him what he had done to Cassandra. The goblin leader was shown in profile when he asked if she was interested. The blonde elf opened her mouth wide and exclaimed that she would kill him. The protagonist deftly dodged her attack when he said that her tribe had already been captured, adding that it was time for her to join them. Sarah lay in front of the goblins when she thought about her body. The protagonist looked down in satisfaction as he said that the arrow had a goblin, and that if it hit her body, it would go numb, adding that he thought she should be more humble. The blonde elf looked ahead from under her brows as she cursed. Rick sat in front of her as he said that he heard something about an awakening potion and that this was how they used it, suggesting that she didn't expect the goblins to come to settle scores with them one day. Sarah was shown in profile as she wondered if this was the new leader Cassandra was talking about. A goblin looked out the window as someone ordered to kill an enemy, then the elf asked about the sounds, to which the protagonist replied that it seemed like the time had come, after which someone asked for help. The protagonist held a knife to Sarah's throat as he said that he thought they should discuss working together. The elf's pupils narrowed. In front of the house, the goblins were killing the elves who were begging their mother for help, screaming that they did not want to give in to the monsters. The blonde glared at Rick when she asked what they were doing to her subjects, to which he replied that the goblins had become equal to the elves, and that they could not defeat them. The protagonist looked ahead, explaining that when the elves were stronger, they killed the goblins, but now it was the other way around, and that he advised them to quickly understand the new reality. The blade of the dagger flashed near the elf's face when the protagonist added that he needed the goblins to become stronger, so her help was needed. The green monsters attacked the elves when he summed up that their lives depended entirely on her. Sarah looked shocked. The head of the goblin stood before her when she said that if her children were alive, he could do whatever he wanted with her. The long-haired elf sat down on the floor. She looked up, frowning, when she said that she was ready to sacrifice herself and bear him children. The forest was illuminated by the sun when someone addressed the mother. Sarah sat next to her daughter, who asked about what they should do in the future, and that they would really live under the care of the goblins. Then the mother apologized to her, answering that it was all her fault, because she underestimated them and did not think that they would become stronger. The blonde lowered her sad gaze when she added that now among the elves there were only defenseless children and women, and that they would have to cooperate with the goblins. The green monsters tortured the noble creatures. The girls were sitting behind bars when Sarah said that from now on they would live among them. Then her daughter turned to her. The protagonist looked down with disdain, saying that they would now live there, and that he would provide them with 3 meals a day, and that if they went crazy, then they should not blame them. The blonde elf opened her mouth slightly when she answered that she understood. She grabbed the bars when she exclaimed that she had a request, and then asked if she could take care of them, because they were her children. The kids stretched out their hands to the girl. The protagonist looked at the system window when he thought about whether it was all because of the characteristic. Lena stood behind him when she said that she could not take care of them herself. Then Rick allowed Sarah to help her. The goblin leader looked at the children, thinking that he would wait for them to grow up and then he could elevate the lineage. He pointed his finger at the system window when he decided to check the stat value. The protagonist stared at the system window when he wondered if he had raised his proficiency to the highest level, realizing that the newly acquired points would be converted into his power. The protagonist looked ahead with a smirk, thinking that it seemed like he needed to hurry up with the reproduction of children, and that even with his current strength, he could already crush Luke, deciding that after the elves grew up, he would meet him. In front of the trees were the cages half a month later, when a loud cry was heard. The goblin was holding a baby in his arms. The elf tried to crawl away from the child, asking if it was really her child, screaming that it was disgusting and that she didn't need it, adding that she was scared. Lena was near Rick, who asked how many newborns they had, and she replied that there were about 30 or 40. The blonde girl opened her mouth wide and screamed in pain. The head of the goblins looked away. A pregnant elf was lying in front of him, and when her mother asked her not to give up and hold on, she replied that she couldn't. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face when she asked him to help her, because this was her first birth, so it was very hard for her. The protagonist took a step towards Cassandra when he asked her to spread her legs, to which she agreed. The protagonist was sitting in front of the girl when her mother asked if he understood, to which he replied in the affirmative. The blonde opened her mouth when she said that she couldn't. Rick looked down at her with a serious expression as he asked her to shut up, reminding her that these were his children too. The leader of the goblins was wiping his wet hands when he said that everything was fine and that she was fine. The girl was lying in front of him when Lana turned to him, saying that he was very cool, because he even managed to give birth. Then he replied that it was nothing. The protagonist had his back turned when someone asked to be released. The goblins approached the elf, saying that they wanted to try again, and that they would be the first. One of the monsters was pierced by a blade. The protagonist stood in front of his brothers when he said what he had already said. Rick looked menacingly ahead when he exclaimed that they needed to wait until they recovered and rested, otherwise they would die. The guy looked at the cowering goblin when he told them from now on and forever not to dare touch the elves without his knowledge. Sarah looked at the protagonist with warmth when she said that he seemed different from his fellows, to which he replied that he had to do so, because everyone needed rest. The pregnant elves were in a cage when the system notifications about the opening of the plot called Stop the Elf appeared, and that he succeeded in capturing the noble creatures and impregnating them, and that after they became pregnant, they gave birth to healthy goblins with stronger qualities, and that seeing that the tribe members were becoming stronger, the protagonist would decide to take revenge on Luke and go to Guangming City alone, where he successfully discovered the location of the Sharp Blade Braves. The blonde and the armored guy were shown when a system message appeared, telling him to do everything himself and try to kill Luke, and that the goblins would help him and go to Guangming, and that he should wait and watch the situation change. Rick sat in front of the fire, thinking that he would find them soon, and that even though he was currently as strong as the enemy, the strength of his comrades should not be underestimated. The goblin leader pointed his finger at the system window when he realized that his stats were still strong enough to kill Luke. The armored girl crushed him with her foot when system notifications appeared, saying that the plot had played, and that he had finally caught the moment when the enemy was alone and decided to attack, and that the enemy was caught off guard and almost died, but at that moment Luke's assistant showed up and attacked him. The blonde turned her head to the side when the system reported that the holy swordswoman had saved her comrade and the protagonist had lost his life, and that the brave group had soon entered the capital and had not appeared again, summing up that the result was that he had no chance against the powerful swordswoman, and that the evaluation was 30 out of a possible 100. The protagonist looked worried when he thought about the holy swordswoman and where she had come from, and that he had never imagined that Luke and his comrades would leave Guangming City, and that if they did, they would never be found again. Rick had a cage in front of him when he cursed in his mind, realizing that he probably needed to hurry. He looked at the basket of fruits when he realized something. The leader of the goblins approached the cage when he addressed Lena, saying that he was going to go around the territory of people, and that he believed that she would have to manage the tribe, but it would be for just a few days. Then Sarah asked if he had really gone crazy, because if he went to the territory of people, they would kill him there. The protagonist looked at the blonde indifferently when he answered that he had a reason to be angry with humanity, and that he should take revenge. Then the elf asked him not to be stupid, and then offered to help, advising him to use stealth skills so that people would not notice him. The protagonist smiled slightly, thinking that this was what he was waiting for. A glow appeared in front of Sarah's palm when Rick said that he did not think that she cared so much about his safety. Then she replied that she was afraid that if he died, they would be impregnated there until death. The elf looked at the goblin with confusion when she added that, moreover, she and the children would hope that their father would return safely. Then the protagonist thought that the mother of the clan would know what to do to survive. The protagonist waved at the girls when Lena turned to him, exclaiming that she would take care of the tribe. Then he replied that he knew and that he was going. A wooden sign was shown. People in armor were walking down the street. There was a dark alley to the side of them. Rick crossed his arms over his chest, thinking about the patrols again, and that they had strengthened their defenses, and also that the holy swordswoman was really there. He took a step forward, thinking about how he had been asking everyone for a long time, and how no one had heard of her. The goblin leader passed by a fruit seller when he decided that this was strange. There was a fountain in the middle of the street. The protagonist looked to the side carefully. There was a crowd in front of him when he thought about Guangning's ranking. A diagram with portraits of knights of different levels was shown. The protagonist's face was covered by his hair when he thought about whether he had risen again, and that he had even taken the lead. The goblin leader had his back turned when he decided that he needed to find clues, otherwise, the revenge plan would fail. The luxurious houses of the city were shown when someone laughed, exclaiming that he was treating today, and offered to get drunk. The guy stopped, spreading his legs wide, when he recognized that voice. Rick's face smirked when he thought about how he would never forget him. The man brought the mug to his mouth when the protagonist recognized him as Luke. The customers were sitting at the tables when the warrior exclaimed that they didn't know, but he was almost killed by a demon monkey then, and that luckily Amelia and the captain arrived in time to save him. Then the girl countered, saying that it was all Luke, and that without him they definitely wouldn't have made it. The man looked away, agreeing and adding that the monkey was pretty funny. The armored man slammed his hand on the table when he asked about their group, and then told him to go to her. People were around the table when he answered, so that the man wouldn't think that his team couldn't defeat him. Then he was offered to check it out. The bartender was cleaning his mug when he said that recently an evil dragon entered the breeding stage, so he started stealing cattle and eating people, and that if they were so tough, then it would be better to deal with him instead of causing trouble there. The protagonist looked back carefully, thinking about the lizard. The dark-haired man looked ahead with a bored expression as he said that if the evil dragon attacked Guangming, he thought that the travelers would definitely not be able to repel the attack, and the city would then fall into chaos. The visitors looked in one direction with concern, asking if it was just a dragon, and if it was something to be afraid of. Luke was sitting at the table when he exclaimed that he would no longer hide it, and that the holy swordswoman was already on her way, and that she was his mentor, so she would definitely help defeat this dragon, and therefore there was no need for any troops, because they would figure it out themselves. The warriors looked ahead in surprise, shouting that the captain had invited the saint, and that everything was so cool. The boys opened their mouths wide, saying that with the saint they would be able to defeat the dragon, and that if everything went well, Luke would become the hero of Guangming City. The man in armor held out his hand as he suggested a drink to celebrate the impending destruction of the dragon. The protagonist placed the coin on the table, realizing that the lizard was his chance. The goblin in the cloak had his back to the captain, who asked him if he would drink with them. Rick opened his mouth and refused. He turned around, looking back as he added that he thought he would do it later. Luke stared ahead, calling it very strange. Clouds floated across the sky. A poster hung between the houses. A girl sat under the dome of the church. The captain's eyes were closed as he addressed the mentor, informing him that an evil dragon was approaching the city and that no one dared to stand against it. She placed her hand on the scabbard. The blonde in armor touched her hair and asked how the task was going. Haley passed Luke, who replied that 10 dragon hunters were stationed in different points of the city and that everything was as she requested. Then the swordswoman said that was great and that if they did not do well, she would lose her reputation, so they should not let her down. In front of them was a crowd of people who were shouting about how pretty she was and how they could not believe that one day someone would win her heart. Haley looked forward determinedly as she asked about what they were doing there. Everyone was in a special time now, then ordered them to evacuate everyone. Then Luke accepted her order. There was a blue sky above the building. The dragon grabbed the man as the townspeople started screaming about running and that the lizard was already there, and then started calling for help. The winged monster flew over the swordsman. The blonde looked up menacingly as she exclaimed that there it was and to let the monster move towards the group, and then ordered Luke to take his partner and go to the city wall. The goblin took a step forward as he informed the leader that the dragon was already there, and that they checked everything and that there were a lot of soldiers at the gate. The green creature opened its mouth as it asked the leader what to do. The guy in the cloak held his hand out to the side as he said that he knew and that time was running out. The protagonist stood on the edge of the cliff as he announced the start of the game. The goblins looked ahead with anticipation. The winged creatures were flying over the city. A beam of light pierced the lizard. Eva and Luke looked scared. The swordswoman stood near the catapult when she asked if they even knew how to hunt dragons, and then advised them to prepare, warning them that a meal would be coming soon. Silhouettes were visible near the edge of the wall as men shouted that the guns were loaded and that everything was ready. Streams of light attacked the dragons as the order to attack was given. The men looked to one side as they exclaimed that it was as expected from a lizard hunter, and that it was cool, and then asked them to look over there. Dark silhouettes were visible among the purple clouds as the warriors shouted that something was coming over there and that their heads hurt. The captain and the blonde looked up. A huge lizard opened its mouth, growling. There were people on the fortress wall who screamed that it was the purple golden mother of dragons and that they should get ready quickly, adding that it was terrible, because crossbows did not harm her at all. The monster's pupils narrowed. A cloud of energy appeared in front of its muzzle. A stream of fire rushed down. People ran in different directions, shouting that the wall would soon collapse and that they needed to leave. A blue glow appeared when they were asked not to panic. Haley plunged her blade into the ground, asking for the monster to be given to them and advising them to continue defending the city. Flames crashed into the blue dome. Dragons surrounded the transparent obstacle. The guy in the cloak watched what was happening, realizing that he did not think that she would be able to repel the dragon's attack, and that no one could imagine that the mother of lizards would be so powerful. The dragon opened its mouth when the system window with its characteristics appeared. The protagonist looked carefully in front of him, deciding that this was a real monster. The blonde with the sword rushed forward. When the system window with her skills appeared, then the protagonist thought that her strength was not inferior to the enemy. A lizard with dark scales was shown, when the goblin thought that it was good that her target was not him. The swordswoman pierced the wing of a dragon, when Rick thought about how the mother of lizards seemed weaker than Haley, but her health was still high. The winged monster flew over the protagonist, who thought about the saint soon running out of steam, and that this would be a chance for him. The protagonist opened his mouth, realizing that he would have an opportunity to take revenge on humanity and enter the city, and that people would fall into a trap. In front of him was a horde of goblins who accepted the leader's order. Dragons flew over the burning city. The man opened his mouth and exclaimed that the lizard was very difficult to defeat. Luke stood in front of the dragon's body when he added that a beast is still a beast and that nothing is impossible, and that he is not that simple either. The captain looked at the man behind him who shouted that the goblins were attacking. The lizards flew up to the warriors, who asked again and asked not to joke like that, adding that the goblins were in the forest and that they would not dare to come there. A running man appeared in front of Luke, who called for help. The captain clenched his teeth and cursed. Eva was behind him when he exclaimed that there were not so many dragons left and that they would be able to stand firm, and then asked Amelia to help deal with the goblins, to which she agreed. A sewer hatch appeared in front of them. Luke and the blonde ran forward, calling the goblins names and saying that they would not run away. The green monster opened its mouth wide when they were ordered to stop. There were splashes of blood everywhere. The goblins surrounded the warriors, and Eva asked the captain for help, explaining that she had fallen into a trap, which made the man wonder why there were so many of them. A city crossroads was shown, as someone spoke to the captain, who was then told to stop. A cloaked figure appeared behind the armored soldiers. Luke was lying in front of the goblins, as he warned them of what was behind him. The protagonist attacked the warriors with a swing of his blade. The captain and Eva looked shocked. The protagonist stopped in front of them, as he said that he did not think he could catch them so easily. Luke opened his mouth wide, and exclaimed that he would kill the low-ranking goblins. Rick kicked him when he asked him to repeat it again. The captain's body was lying in front of him, as the leader of the goblins ordered his brethren to leave the city with the two, adding that the rest should climb the wall with him, to which they agreed. Haley looked at the houses behind her, where she could hear screams about how many goblins were there. Then she wondered what was going on, and why they had come now. A half-naked girl stood in front of the swordswoman, who exclaimed that they were too defenseless. The dragoness swung at the swordswoman, wishing her death and calling her names. Then the blonde asked if she really believed in herself that much, and then offered to see how much blood would come out of the lizard. Haley dealt multiple blows to the monster, using the swordsman's special skill and iron slash. Then a terrible scream was heard. The blonde was shown in profile, thinking that she would soon deal with her, and wondering if Luke could handle the remaining dragons and goblins. The people were thrown back by the force of the blast. The dragoness was in front of the swordswoman, who wondered if they hadn't dealt with them yet. Then the female lizard said that the goblins must have come just in time. Dust rose in front of the blonde as the monster said goodbye to her. In front of Haley, the silhouette of a winged monster was visible, who exclaimed that as soon as he healed his wounds, he would take revenge on her. Then the girl cursed, realizing that the enemy was leaving. The swordswoman, frowning, looked from under her brows when she resigned herself, saying that she would still get to the dragon's nest. The buildings of the city were illuminated by the sun. Haley stood, holding a sword in her hand, when she turned to Luke, asking where he was, and saying that the goblins were killed. In front of her sat people who said that the captain and Eva were taken by green monsters. The blonde frowned deeply, wondering how that was possible. The bodies of the warriors lay on the ground when they explained to her that these were not ordinary goblins, and that they were much stronger than they were before, and also that Luke did not even have time to do anything. The swordwoman stood silently in front of the soldier. She turned her back to him when she said that she would destroy all the goblin tribes in the enchanted forest. A crying woman grabbed her hand when she asked the saint to stay, asking about what they should do if the dragon and the goblins returned. Haley was surrounded by townspeople, asking her to stay and saying that they were peaceful citizens. The blonde lowered her thoughtful gaze, thinking that they were right, and that the inhabitants of the temple were much more important than a couple of people, and then turned to Luke, warning him to blame only himself for his own weakness, because even the goblins could deal with him, not to mention the dragons. The green monster's camp was shown when a shout was heard announcing that the leader had returned. Eva was walking next to the captain when someone added that the leader had captured 2 humans as well, and they were pretty. The girls sat down on the ground. A goblin with a spear stood in front of them. The warriors watched as the monster approached the girl when Luke exclaimed that they had captured the elves as well. The blonde's cheeks turned red when she said that things were bad and that they wouldn't last long there. The dark-haired man looked at Eva carefully when he asked if she would be able to recover, to which she replied that the poison was too strong and that the divine power couldn't cope. The protagonist stood next to the girl when he said that he didn't think the poison would take effect so soon and that her recovery skills were too weak. The goblin touched the blonde's thigh, who asked how he knew her name and what he was doing. The protagonist's face smirked as he repeated her question. His hand gripped the saint's leg. Rick sat across from Eva. The captain opened his mouth wide and ordered him to stop and remove his hands. The green monster slapped him across the face and told him to shut up. Luke looked at the leader's silhouette, who assumed he was smart, and then asked if he didn't realize he would be caught, to which the warrior replied that the holy swordswoman would kill him in seconds. The protagonist looked away when he asked him again, saying that she would also become his prey. It was just not the right time yet, and that one of them had already covered all the tracks, so no one would find them. The protagonist wiped his hands with a rag when he asked the goblin to go into the forest with the second generation, because they needed to kill as many monsters as possible. Then he answered that the leader could rely on him. And Rick himself thought that things were starting to pick up speed, so they should complete their stages of evolution. He put his foot on the captain's chest when he said that he would now ask questions, and that he had better answer him, otherwise who knows what part of his body he could lose. The protagonist was enveloped in a red aura when he asked about whether they were secretly mocking the goblins. Luke looked scared when he cursed and asked what he was. A dagger was waved in front of the captain's face when the protagonist replied that he was answering too slowly. Eva was sitting in front of the man when he screamed about his ear and how it hurt so much, and then called the goblin a name. Luke grabbed his head when he exclaimed that they were doing everything to protect the people, and that it was their duty to destroy all the monsters. Rick looked down at him when he asked him several times, saying that he thought they only wanted to increase their status and prestige. The warriors were standing on a pile of corpses when the goblin leader added that it was much easier to kill his brother and all the dissenters than to do something worthwhile, and that the man was very smug, and then asked about how much blood was on his hands. Sweat broke out on the captain's face when he thought about the leader of the enemies, and how he knew all this. Eva looked ahead in horror. The protagonist's eyes lit up when he said that their dialogue was over and that he was different from them because he did everything for the good of evil, so now the vile monster would teach them a lesson. The blonde opened her mouth when the protagonist was asked not to touch her, then the girl asked Luke for help. Tears flowed from the girl's eyes when she asked not to do this, then the captain insulted the goblin. The green monsters held Luke, who asked him to stop and stop it. Eva stuck her tongue out of her mouth when they addressed her, and explained that they were taking back what she said and that the lesson had just begun, so she should listen carefully. Rick squeezed her throat when he asked the girl to let the captain appreciate her. A crowd of goblins was in front of the leader when he offered to watch what they would do to her. Luke looked forward in shock, starting to deny what was happening. The blonde's clothes were torn when he shouted her name. Trees were visible behind the tents when someone exclaimed that it was time to change and that it was his turn to stand guard, to which he was told that the leader had said to hold on and that there was no need to kill her. A goblin was holding his loincloth when he laughed. Eva had her clothes torn when he asked her brother not to worry, exclaiming that she would live for a long time. Luke's head was pinned to the ground when he addressed the saint, asking her to hold on and not give in to the goblins, to which she replied that she was fine. The elves were watching them when a goblin asked a man what he was saying and then told him to shut up, after which Sarah said that it seemed like Rick hated these humans. Then her daughter turned to her, saying that they were much worse than them, and that it was understandable. Lena appeared in front of the blonde when she said that earlier he said that he was going to take revenge on humanity. Sarah introduced the protagonist standing with his back turned when she exclaimed that he was the most special goblin she had ever seen. Cassandra looked at her mother with interest, who thought that the protagonist was very strong. Then the princess said that it was strange and that it seemed that she was conquered, and then turned to her. Rick looked away intently and asked again when he was informed that the second-generation goblins had returned. His brothers with monster carcasses were standing in front of him when he said that they were a bit early. The goblin with the club opened his mouth when he turned to the leader, exclaiming that they had returned. Then the system window with his characteristics appeared, after which the protagonist thought that he was worthy of belonging to the second generation, because he quickly reached level 30 and almost equaled his skills. The protagonist looked at him carefully when he asked why they were back so early, assuming that the hunt was successful. There were other goblins near them when he was told that they had killed all the monsters in the area, so they went west, but there they met several larger ones, who were slaughtering smaller ones. Rick looked at the subordinate, standing in front of him, when he asked what tribe they were from. The goblin with the painted face was in front of the leader when he exclaimed that he knew, and that it was the Bloodtooth tribe, and that they were quite large, and also that when they were looking for monsters earlier, they found that several tribes were attacked, and that there were traces of blood and teeth. A plump goblin was shown when the leader responded that this was interesting. The protagonist touched his face when he said that if they caught their leader and created a third generation of stronger ones, then they would have a better chance against the humans. Luke was in front of the goblins when he said, laughing, that they could only dream of it, and that no matter how powerful they were all just bugs, so they should just wait. The protagonist looked down with disdain when he said that he almost forgot about him. The goblins approached the captain when the leader said that he was giving this man to them. Then the man asked what they were going to do. The monster stuck his finger in Luke's mouth, exclaiming that finally, and that humans were beautiful creatures with thin and delicate skin. Then the captain asked what they were doing, adding that humanity would definitely exterminate these pathetic monsters. Eva sat silently with her hands tied. The captain lay on the ground several hours later. The goblins were having fun in front of the fire when Lena asked the protagonist if they would attack another tribe of their own next, to which he replied in the affirmative, explaining that if they did that they would become even stronger, so they would not only attack them but also capture the leader. The protagonist looked ahead with a smile as he added that he had finally decided on a name, and that they would be called the Tiamao tribe. The goblins clenched their fists, mouths open as they addressed the leader, motivating him to move forward. A crowd of their own stood in front of the leader, shouting about their new name, and then began to shout out the name of their tribe, the Tiamao. Rick sat in front of Lena, who said that there were more of them and they were big, so there might be problems. Then he asked her not to worry, saying that he had made it all up. A blonde woman with tattered clothes sat on the ground as the leader explained that he had something for them. The protagonist put on his hood as he said that there was a great view from up there to see the enemy's strength. In front of the mountains, the buildings of the magic forest could be seen as the protagonist realized that there were indeed many views. The goblins were grouped together, doing different things. A large monster peeked out from a tent as Rick wondered why they were so scared and if their leader was out there. The protagonist smirked as he looked ahead as he realized that it seemed like the Bloodtooth leader was an elite as well. The large goblin was holding a prelim as the system window with its stats popped up. The hooded protagonist looked ahead carefully, thinking that with a total combat effectiveness of 900, they could deal with a dozen goblin fighters, but capturing them alive would not be that easy. In front of the huge monster were the smaller brethren, when Rick thought about how depending on their size, each has a different resistance to poisons, and that he needs to find good poisons for everything to work. Eva and Luke were shown, when the leader remembered that the forbidden technique that the saint once used on him was very good, and could be useful to him. The protagonist looked ahead with a smile, thinking that it was time to visit her. The goblin camp was shown. The protagonist looked at the female body in front of him, when he was addressed, saying that everything was as he asked, and that she was almost dead. Then he replied that it was a good job. Rick lowered his gaze. The blonde was lying at his feet, when she asked him to kill her, adding that this way she could at least atone for her sins before God. The goblin touched Eva, calling her name, then she said that it was very warm, and then asked who it was. The protagonist was reflected in her eyes. The protagonist looked at the trembling girl, who asked him not to approach her. The blonde grabbed her head when she called him a monster, exclaiming that she would go crazy like that and that it hurt so much. Rick was in front of Eva when the sound of a blow was heard. He touched her back with his hand. The head of the goblins hugged the saint when he addressed her, saying that her punishment was over. Tears flowed from the girl's eyes when she asked if it was true. The blonde sat in front of the protagonist, who answered that he kept his word and that she only had to prove her loyalty. Then she asked how. Eva, crying, looked up when she was told that she could choose to believe in God. The protagonist stroked the saint's head when he added that she could become his believer and wander around with him, becoming a pet. The blonde's mouth fell open. Eva began to lick the goblin's fingers. Rick sat in front of the saint when he praised her. The girl was on all fours in front of him when she started barking, calling him Lord, after the protagonist said that from now on he was her only owner, so he would call her his little animal. The protagonist picked up Eva. They went to a stone container with water when he called her to come with him. The saint's clothes were lying on the ground. Rick was behind the blonde, who thanked him for his kindness, saying that she was ready to give anything. The girl threw her head back. The head of the goblins opened his mouth when he said that it was an incredible coincidence. Eva looked at him with a languid look when he explained that he wanted to see her use the skill saint in a cage. Then she asked him again, wondering what it was. The book was open. The blonde was standing in front of a tree stump when she asked about whether this was really a saint in a cage. Eva opened her mouth. Streams of light energy appeared in front of her. A huge cage with a cross appeared. The protagonist looked ahead with satisfaction when he exclaimed that this was it, and that everything was so. They passed by the cells with prisoners. The captain noticed Eva, looking away. Luke grabbed the metal bars when he asked her if she was really healed, and then advised her to quickly kill this goblin, and then heal him. The protagonist stood in front of the man when he asked if he really didn't see that she was with him now. Then the captain began to deny it, asking how a saint could submit to a goblin. The girl knelt down. Rick touched her hair when he asked her to tell Eva if this was her desire, then she agreed with him, adding that she had chosen this path herself. Luke looked ahead in horror. The muscles in his arm tensed. Saliva flowed from his mouth when he exclaimed that very soon the goblin race would disappear from the face of the earth. The dark-haired man opened his mouth wide as he shouted that the meaning of their existence was to be at the mercy of humans, and that the Church of the Holy Order would kill them all, then laughed. The protagonist looked down with a serious expression, thinking that he never imagined that Eva would be like this. They and the goblin stood in front of the cage as the protagonist thanked her for the information, saying that he thought she should be rewarded, then told the warden not to let him relax. Then the warden told him not to worry, assuring him that he would take care of him. Rick was shown in profile as he said that the deed was done, then told the saint to follow him. The goblin leader looked ahead with confidence as he said that it was time to destroy the Bloodtooth tribe. There were structures near the mountains. The monster with the staff stood in front of the leader as he addressed him and said that everyone was ready. The leader held a large bone in his hand as he replied that it was good and that it was time to destroy the southern tribe. A large goblin held his hand out as he called for their elves to be taken, and his subjects agreed, shouting that he was right. The leader clutched his weapon in his hand as someone addressed him. A half-naked goblin stood in front of him, who said that a fellow wanted to talk to him, and the leader asked him again. The leader threw the bone over his shoulder, asking where such a low-level goblin came from. The protagonist took off his hood, addressing the leader of the Bloodtooth tribe and saying that he knew that he had a mindset close to a human, so he decided to talk to them personally. The protagonist was surrounded by goblins as he was asked if he was a mutant. Rick stood right among his fellows as he replied that he was not, and that he was just a little smarter than the rest. The protagonist turned his head to the side, exclaiming that he was the leader of another tribe and was going to eliminate their chief. The protagonist stood surrounded by goblins as he explained that the others would be given two options to choose from, then asked if they would listen to him. Rick looked down with a menacing gaze, exclaiming that if they did not, they would die there. The goblin with sharp fangs looked forward as he assumed that this was the one who was keeping the elves in captivity. The guy in the cloak stood in front of him as he offered him to come with him, adding that he had good genes. The goblin with fangs opened his mouth slightly as he called him trash. The monster grabbed the protagonist by the head and told him to close his mouth. The goblin with chains around his neck looked at the protagonist as he exclaimed that he did not think that he would decide to come on his own, and that after he finished him, the elves would be his. The green monsters raised their hands in the air, calling for the leader to be killed and torn apart. Rick's mouth was slightly open as he said that as he thought, talking would lead to nothing. The goblin's eyes were bloodshot. The guy in the cloak swung his blade as he added that if he didn't want to live, then there was no need to talk. The green monster's arm was cut off, then he screamed. The chieftain's limb lay in front of the goblins. The green monster fell to the ground, calling the enemy a fool and promising to finish him off. The goblin pointed at the protagonist, ordering them to kill him and avenge the chief. The protagonist raised his hand up as he offered them to try. The monster's body was pierced by a sword. The green monster looked away as he asked where such power came from, then the system reported that the clone skill was used. In front of him stood a goblin with a spear, who replied that it was all thanks to progress. Rick held his hand out to the side as he stood in front of the goblins as he ordered them to listen to the leader's order and defeat the Bloodtooth tribe, and then ordered everyone to come out using the move skill. The wounded leader looked at the fighting goblins, thinking about how many warriors there were among them. The guy in the cloak was in front of him, realizing that the plan had worked, and decided that now he could relax and not worry about anything. The protagonist looked ahead from under his brows as he thought about how it was time to pay attention to him, and that he should run, because he was far from him, however, as well as his abilities. The huge goblin swung his fist at him as he exclaimed that even if he died, he would take him with him. The protagonist crossed his arms over his chest as he addressed Eva. The blonde opened her mouth and used the holy cage skill. Glowing rods appeared in front of the goblin as he asked what it was. The fang monster gritted his teeth, cursing and shouting that it was a terrible technique and that he couldn't stand the light. His pupils narrowed greatly. Rick patted the saint on the head as she called him master, then he said her name, saying that she had tried hard and that she would soon become even stronger, concluding that he would reward her. The blonde's cheeks turned red as she thanked her master. The goblin lay behind the protagonist as he called him a devil, to which he replied that he would soon become a hero of his kind and the leader of the Bloody Tooth tribe. The Tianmao tribe settlement was shown. The monster was tied to a boulder with chains as someone said that it took a lot of effort to tame it. The protagonist was wiping his bloody dagger when he said he was finally done and that there were no threats now. The man grabbed the bars of the cage, wondering how much power he had and who he was. Rick turned to the girls when he addressed Lena and explained that it was time for the goblins to fertilize, asking her to take care of everything there, to which she agreed, assuring him that she would not let him down. A frightened Eva clung to her when the leader added that he was leaving the saint to her, and then ordered her to obey, to which his subordinate agreed. Sarah was wiping the hands of the overlord, who addressed her, asking her to help him with his clothes later, adding that he needed to meet a friend, to which she asked him again. The protagonist placed a hand on his shoulder when he answered in the affirmative. He, smiling, threw off his cloak when he explained that he would meet a true friend. White birds were flying over the sea when someone said that from Luke's face, reinforcements should arrive in Guangming soon, and that with the current strength they can fight the knights, but not the saint, and that it will take time to raise a goblin hero, so he needs to find an assistant to help him restrain the holy swordswoman, concluding that it was time to meet the dragon. In front of the guy were the bodies of dead animals, when he thought that he was at least hundreds of miles away from the lizard island. The protagonist carefully looked at the beast's corpse, thinking that the most convenient way to get to the island was to attract the dragon. In front of Rick was the sea, when he decided that the blood would soon attract her. The red lizard headed towards land. The goblin hid in the body of the dead animal, thinking that in the end, such a smell is irresistible. The dragon lifted the bodies of the animals into the air. The lizard flew up, spreading its wings, when the protagonist realized that he had succeeded. The dragon flew over numerous islands. The lizard dropped its prey on a pile of rocks. The animal carcasses fell on the remains of the victims. The protagonist climbed out of the animal's body when he thought that, as expected, the dragon did not live alone. Rick stood on the dead beast when he realized that all that was left was to find the dragon. A yellow eye appeared behind him when someone said that there was some strange thing in the food. The lizard opened its mouth in front of the goblin when he said that it seemed to know him and that he was the one who led his army to Guangming City, and then asked why he came to his lair. Several dragons looked at the protagonist when the female suggested that he wanted her to eat him. The protagonist opened his palm in front of her when he asked her to wait, explaining that he wanted to discuss cooperation. The lizard's paw rested on the ground as she replied that it was a rare specimen. The dragoness's face was shown in profile as she wondered where it was seen that goblins talked about cooperation. The half-naked girl appeared in front of Rick and said that he helped her once, so she would listen. They were opposite each other when the female added that if he convinced her, she would not eat him. The protagonist looked seriously in front of him as he said that she also wanted to take revenge on the holy swordswoman, and then asked how about joining forces, explaining that their army would distract the enemy. The dragoness looked ahead carefully as she asked how low-level monsters dared to talk about resisting the swordswoman, adding that she was interested in him. The female looked at the guy in the cloak as she told him to say what exactly he wanted to do. The protagonist looked away, saying that it was simple, and that he wanted her to send her soldiers to attack Guangming City from time to time. A clawed paw touched him as she asked what they would do. Rick and the dragon exchanged glances as she asked about what a bunch of goblins could do against humans, and what he would do specifically. The protagonist smirked as the dragon warned him that they shouldn't fight such a powerful man face to face. The forest near the shore was shown, as the dragon added that they needed to attack their weak points to defeat the enemy. The dragon smiled as she laughed and agreed, exclaiming that the goblins' weapons wouldn't hurt her soldiers anyway, so there was no danger. The protagonist looked at the dragon with satisfaction, offering to make a deal, and she agreed. She touched his face as she admitted that she didn't think a goblin could be that smart. The female looked at Rick, licking her lips, explaining that the more she looked at him, the more she liked him, and then offered to reward her. The protagonist looked ahead with a languid gaze, thinking that, it turns out, the female lizard was ready to reproduce. Samantha lowered her appraising gaze when the protagonist replied that simply looking at her was indeed not enough. The dragoness stood next to Rick, who added that in that case it was time to reward her. The female lizard touched her chin with her claw as she wondered what to choose. Wooden buildings of the Tianmao tribe were shown. Goblins were guarding a captured warrior. Luke looked away tiredly, wondering why the knights hadn't come to help yet, and how he would break if he stayed there any longer, so he needed to run, and how he could do that, with monsters everywhere. The captain looked ahead pleadingly, thinking about how the goblins were small, and what would happen if he could get them down the mountain. Suddenly, his eyes widened. A dragon appeared in front of the man, and he then shouted that he was there. The green monsters looked at Luke, who exclaimed that there was a lizard, and then asked to let him go, explaining that he didn't want to burn alive with them there. The armored goblins looked up, as they asked everyone to be vigilant. A dragon flew over the girls, as they wondered where it came from, and then noticed that there was someone there. The red lizard opened its mouth in front of the goblins. Someone stepped onto the ground. The protagonist stood next to the dragon when he said that he had returned. The protagonist touched the lizard's muzzle, asking it to rest there and not to rush. Lena stood next to Rick when everyone began to wish the master good health. Sweat ran down the captain's face when he wondered if he was really one of the goblins, and then asked the knights to save him. There was a fountain in Guangming Square. The animal's hooves touched the ground. The rider held the reins in his hands. The armor on the royal knights shimmered in the light. The warriors bowed before the holy swordswoman. The blonde held her hand out to the side when she asked them not to waste time, exclaiming that they needed to come up with a rescue plan as soon as possible. The protagonist stood in front of the system window, which said that the current plot called Third Generation Goblin Development had started, and that after the attack on Guangming City and the Bloodtooth tribe, he had made great progress, and that in order to deal with the remaining opponents, he would send Eva to train, and in a month she would reach level 45, he himself would reach level 50. And the others would reach level 60, then 3 options were presented. The first, respectively, was the one where the strength was still not enough, so he would continue to kill monsters in the forest. The second option, which was to find a way to raise as many goblins as possible, and the third was to speed up time to move to the end of the month. Then the protagonist wondered if that was all, guessing that judging by the last choice, the swordswoman should not attack them. The goblin touched his finger to the system window when he decided that he would do so. Streams of light energy rushed towards him when notifications appeared that acceleration was being activated, and that he had not managed to gain enough experience. Rick opened his mouth, looking ahead when the system reported that acceleration was over and that he had been transported to the end of the month, having received 20 life points out of a possible 100. The protagonist's eyes widened when it was told that the end of the month had arrived. The protagonist sat in his bed when he realized what it was like to jump in time, thinking that it was quite strange. A system window appeared in front of him, in which there was a congratulation on reaching level 50. Then Rick thought about the fact that the stats had improved, but the overall strength had not increased much. Then someone spoke to him. Lena was standing in front of him when she said that a disaster had occurred and that goblins were born dead. Then he asked her again. They went to the girls sitting on the ground. The elves were wiping away tears while holding the dead babies. The protagonist looked ahead worriedly, asking how so. Sarah was sitting in front of the protagonist, who wondered what they had done wrong, and she replied that she didn't know what had happened, but the third generation was significantly weaker. Luke was tied to a pole when he laughed, calling them brainless, and then asked if they still wanted to raise strong descendants. Rick looked up with a stern look when he suggested that he seemed to know what the problem was. The captain's mouth was wide open when he told them that the higher the level of the goblins, the harder it was to bear their children, and then asked if they thought they could conquer the world if they reproduced a lot. The protagonist stood in front of the man when he replied that he understood, and that he thought he should thank him, but the man gave the news too late. The protagonist turned his gaze to his brother when he informed him that he was now his, and then advised him not to play to death, and he was thanked. Luke gritted his teeth as he called the leader a fool, warning him that even as a ghost he would not leave him. Rick looked ahead intently, thinking that it was too late to save the dead and that he needed to think things through carefully, otherwise they would not be able to stand up to their enemies. A dragon appeared behind him as he wondered how he could strengthen the goblins. Rick looked at the lizard appraisingly. The protagonist touched the dragon's muzzle, wondering what was wrong with her and whether she was in heat, realizing that this might be his only chance. A clawed paw rested on the ground. The girl with horns opened her mouth. The female licked her fingers, blushing. The protagonist looked confused, standing in front of her, wondering what it was and whether the dragon herself would allow him to do this. The female pinned him to the ground. The girl placed her hands on his chest, after which a system notification appeared congratulating him for unlocking a new achievement. The goblin touched the tree trunk when he wondered who would have thought that the dragoness would be so insatiable. Rick looked pleased when he wondered if all the lizard clan were like this, adding that if so, he was a real hero, and that she could have just given him her blood, but chose another method, concluding that it seemed like she would find him there soon. The horned girl appeared behind him, laughing when she asked him not to leave, offering to continue. In front of them were the goblins, when the protagonist refused, explaining that they first needed to finish their business, and then asked her to give them blood and then return to him. The dragoness went to the green monsters, who asked the leader about what was happening. A fire was blazing in front of the houses. The goblins crowded in front of the flames, shouting about how cool it was, and how they had increased their strength thanks to the dragon's blood, and how they had all advanced and were now stronger. Behind the protagonist, a lizard was sleeping peacefully. Rick looked at his hand with interest, thinking that he expected nothing less from the legendary dragon, and that not only he but also the other goblins had become more powerful, and that the points were still too low, so he needed to prepare. The protagonist was shown in profile when he asked the system to open the shop. The protagonist stood with his back turned, wondering how the chief of the tribe could be idle, and why not learn his own strength. A system window appeared in front of the leader, and then he thought that the points should be enough for some modern and practical equipment. A crossbow was shown when its function was explained. Then the goblin thought about how it was small in size and good for long-range attacks, and could also absorb elements. His hand gripped the blade. Then Rick thought about how although there was a cheaper ability, only with both could he resist the holy swordswoman and save his life, deciding that he should choose both options. His finger touched the system window, and then a notification appeared that the exchange was successfully completed, and that the skills were at his disposal. The protagonist held the crossbow in his hands when he said that he did not know how to use this advanced weapon, but wanted to find someone to try it on himself. Sweat appeared on Luke's face when his name was called. The protagonist glared menacingly when he said that he was perfect. Rick approached the captain, who asked him what he was doing. It was then explained that this was how Luke became the first person to see the power of the goblin leader. A dense magical forest was shown, where cries for help were heard. The three-man squad stopped when the girl with the staff asked to save her. Then her friend exclaimed that they were not interested in low-ranking monsters, and that she did not understand why they came there in the first place. The guy in the helmet looked at the archer, who added that if she had known earlier, she would have remained a saint. Then the warrior said that the mother dragon often disturbed the city, and the swordswoman did not intend to take care of the goblins, so she left it to them, and that, besides, it would not take much effort. The warrior looked back with a smile, saying that they can thank Luke, because of whom such a wonderful opportunity appeared. The sorceress held out her staff in front of her when she informed the captain about something moving. A huge spider appeared in front of them. Then the girl in the hat screamed that she hated arthropods. A beam of light attacked the monster. The archer held a weapon in her hand when she asked if they were just third-rank bugs and what was so scary about them. The knight held a sword in front of him when he asked them to wait, saying that something was wrong. The red-eyed monster opened his mouth. The four-armed goblin appeared in front of the people, who screamed that he really belonged to the hero's species. The monster glared in front of him when someone exclaimed that he looked like a leader, and that no one could have imagined that their expedition would end so quickly. The girl stood behind the captain when she replied that this was wonderful, and that now all the credit would belong to them. The monster was in front of the warriors, who were informed that they were starting the plan. Then the archer was asked to cover the leader. The captain looked at the knight behind him, who told him not to worry, assuring him that everything would be fine. The swordsman stood next to the guy in the helmet, who turned to the commander, exclaiming that he had killed quite a few goblins along the way and that he could rely on him now. Then he was asked again, after which he replied that he had killed enough monsters too, and even a heroic one once. The warrior in the helmet walked past the captain, who agreed with him, saying that in that case they should finish them off. Then he replied that he understood. The knight in armor swung his weapon as he exclaimed that he would kill the monster in a matter of seconds. He threw a spear at the four-armed monster, wishing it death. The warrior's helmet was shown up close. Suddenly, he pulled his head back. Sweat appeared on the leader's face. An ominous aura enveloped the huge goblin as the warrior asked how it was possible that he had grabbed the spear. The monster swung his weapon, looking down as the humans screamed to defend themselves. The goblin threw his spear at the blue shield. Cracks appeared on the barrier as the captain cursed, adding that he didn't think he would be so strong and could even grab. The girl put her hand forward as she exclaimed that their bodies were protected anyway, which was good, and that it was good that he was alone, summing up that there shouldn't be any difficulties. Fingers appeared from her stomach. Behind the brunette was a hooded monster, who laughed. Then she called him a murderer. The boys grouped together as the leader cursed, exclaiming that they were trapped and that there was a murderer there, adding that they needed to defend themselves, and then ordered them to quickly check the area, to which the others agreed. The sorceress stood with her back to the captain as she asked him to look there. In front of him was a crowd of goblins. There was a blue sky above the dense forest when someone called for help. The monsters stood in front of the warriors' bodies when they laughed, saying that it all belonged to them. The goblin held the girl in front of him when he exclaimed that she was his and that he wanted her. His brother put his hand on his shoulder when he objected, reminding him that these were all trophies of the tribe, and that the leader had said to bring the people to him, adding that he could get carried away, which was not good, so he had better not touch anyone. The four-armed goblin put his hands out to the sides when he asked him again, exclaiming that he was the one who killed most of them, and that they were both strong, so he proposed a battle. They stood in front of the smaller brothers, who said that he was right, and that they were the strongest, so the tribe would be theirs. The hooded goblin looked ahead when he added that his brother was very strong, and that they would walk side by side with him. The monster's face was reflected in the blade of his sword as he replied that they would take them back first. The moon was shining over the settlement as someone shouted that the heroes had returned. The crowd followed the larger brothers as someone added that it was cool that they had brought people with them. The protagonist was sitting in front of the girls when Sarah turned to him and asked if he could control them. The four-armed goblin held the man in front of him when he laughed and exclaimed that they were their trophies and that he would eat him. The protagonist stood in front of him when he replied that he had not yet told him everything, so he should let him go. The red-eyed monster lowered his menacing gaze. He squeezed the captive warrior's head as he said that if the leader wanted to tell him something, he should give him the girl in exchange. Sarah and Lena looked shocked when they asked again. Rick's mouth fell open, looking forward as he asked his brother if he understood what he was saying, reminding him that he was the chief after all. Behind the monster stood his comrade as he replied that the mad goblin was much stronger than him, and that he proposed to test him. The huge monster stood in front of the chief as he said that this was their support, adding that he was giving him a chance to kill the goblin standing next to him, and then he would spare him. The monster opened his mouth wide and laughed, exclaiming that he was not his equal, and that he himself would become the new chief, threatening the previous chief of the tribe that they would kill him. Someone grabbed his head. He looked fearfully at his comrade standing behind him as he addressed him. The protagonist looked seriously in front of him. The body of the traitor fell at his feet as someone addressed the mad goblin. A shadow fell on his comrade's face as he told the chief that he seemed to have realized many things since his ascension. The large goblin stood in front of the protagonist as he added that he was different from the others in his loyalty to him, but he believed in his absolute power. They were standing opposite each other as the monster turned to his father, reminding him that he had previously defeated the previous leader. The mad goblin looked down menacingly, summing up that he now wanted to try as well. Then the system window with his stats popped up. Rick opened his mouth, thinking that his strength had already reached 1200. The leader's hand was engulfed in flames as he responded that this was an impressive increase. Fire blazed behind the protagonist as he asked his comrade if he was confident that he could stand up to him. The two goblins stood opposite each other as the crowd began shouting for one to kill the other so that he would know who was in charge, adding that he should take the women. The protagonist closed his eyes as he said that it seemed like many of his brethren wanted to follow him. Streams of flame rushed towards his palm as he added that he needed to prove his strength and power. Rick bent his hand in front of him, addressing the goblin heroes and saying that if they wanted to continue following him, they should immediately stand by him, otherwise they would be finished. The warrior in the helmet lay on the ground as he wondered if he would sacrifice them, adding that no one would have thought that such an inconspicuous guy would be the leader. Sweat appeared on the captain's face as he thought about how luck was on his side, and how he would run away as soon as they started fighting, and also that the difference in their strength was too great for them to act otherwise, concluding that when the old leader died, he would try to hide. The goblins stood opposite each other when the protagonist said that he seemed to be a bit more popular, and that only a few of his brethren were willing to follow his opponent. The monster gripped his blade in his hand as he exclaimed that he was different from them. His pupils narrowed as he exclaimed that he chose infinite strength. The protagonist deftly dodged the sword swing. The knight looked shocked as he wondered at what point the guy had become so strong, realizing that the other one was not far behind and that they were very agile. Rick held his weapon out in front of him as he said that the opponent had good abilities. A stream of flame rushed towards the enemy as he offered him something to taste. The mad goblin frowned deeply as he realized that he had not seen the weapon and that the attack was too fast. The monster held the blade in front of him as he thought that he could not dodge it, so he would have to parry it. The protagonist looked ahead menacingly, exclaiming that he was strong, since he could even break through the fireball. A huge goblin swung at the leader, screaming loudly. A smile appeared on the protagonist's face. A powerful explosion occurred. The knight in the helmet opened his mouth in surprise. Luke gritted his teeth, looking ahead. The girls looked worried. Rick stopped the enemy's sword with his bare hand, who said that this could not be. The protagonist held the weapon in front of him when he replied that he was surprised by his powerful blade, but he was unlucky with the enemy. Then it was explained that the protagonist has a blade slayer, who can reflect the attacks of the enemy who uses a sword. Flames were reflected in the goblin's eyes. The full moon was above the settlement when the leader asked if he would continue. The wounded brother was kneeling in front of him when he refused and exclaimed that he admitted defeat. The protagonist resolutely looked ahead, thinking that he did not think that he would be so spineless. Goblins sat to the side of him, who turned to the leader, asking him not to kill them, because they did not want to die and would not do so again. The protagonist turned to his trembling brothers, calling them abominations, and they asked for his forgiveness, exclaiming that they would always be with him. The large goblin was enveloped in a glow when he was ordered to stand up. Eva stood in front of him when the leader explained that if he continued to follow him, he would not kill him, and he asked if this was true. The surprised goblins were in front of Rick, who answered in the affirmative, adding that he could not let these guys go, and that they must serve him forever. The large brother was enveloped in an ominous aura when he replied that they would listen to him, and would always be with him now, and then thanked them, asking for these guys to be provided to him. The goblins looked ahead in fear as they began to beg. The leader stood in the middle of the clearing as he addressed his children, asking them to consume these rebels, becoming stronger, as they began to shout for the health of the leader, and that they would serve him forever. The warrior in the helmet was lying on the ground as he addressed Luke, asking what he would say, then exclaimed that this was not just a goblin, but rather a monster that the entire empire should avoid. The protagonist stood in front of the captain as he apologized for not putting on a show, then added that he knew he was waiting for someone to come and save him. The protagonist looked ahead with a smirk as he asked if he was getting his hopes up too much. The bearded man's mouth dropped open as he replied that he would definitely wait for the swordswoman, and that they would all die when she arrived. Luke grinned madly as he began to laugh loudly and called the leader trash and a pathetic brat. There was a crowd of goblins behind Rick when the helmeted warrior advised him not to be too proud, because once the holy swordswoman dealt with the dragon, she would immediately come there with an entire army. The leader crouched in front of the man when he asked him if he thought the lizard would go to attack Guangming City alone, adding that he was glad to hear his thoughts in any case, and that he was now completely calm about the dragon. The warrior opened his mouth, raising his head when he said that it turned out that he had brought so many soldiers from Guangming there on purpose, deciding to mock him. Roderick looked up with confidence when he said that soldiers were allowed to be killed, not toyed with, and that he had already learned the necessary information, so it was time to finish. The protagonist looked at the warrior indifferently, who added that if it was possible, he would like to die with Luke, and that he hoped that it was possible. The protagonist looked serious when he answered that he agreed to his request. The blonde's eyes widened as someone addressed the holy swordswoman. Haley was sitting on the bed as she asked about the noise and if the dragon had broken through or if the team had returned. The soldier clenched his fist as he addressed his mistress. The blonde glared at the warrior, ordering him to finally speak, as she was informed that the Knights of the Silver Blade had been destroyed and only one had returned. The swordswoman looked worried as she asked what he was saying. A tall structure was shown. Haley stood in front of the knight as the girl exclaimed that the wounds were very severe and that healing was not helping. The blonde frowned, looking down as she inquired about where the wounds were coming from and what about the others. The armored boy lay in front of her as he answered that they had encountered a goblin hero and then ran away. The brunette watched the warrior, who added that they should have been more careful, and that they had a hard time. The knight's head was resting on the pillow. The people present stood by his bed as the healer asked him not to give up, after which the sorceress exclaimed that it was the goblin's fault again. The armored soldier turned away from the saint, asking what kind of species it was, and what rank the hero was, exclaiming that another spawn had appeared. Haley looked at him carefully as she answered that the dragons were attacking more and more often, and that the goblins could take advantage of this to strike a surprise attack, concluding that she could not stand alone. The swordswoman sternly looked away as she ordered several people to be sent as backup, reminding them that they must protect Guangming, and she would personally deal with the goblins and the mother of lizards. A knight in a helmet was shown, who spoke about the previous team. There was a sorceress standing next to him who asked him if he really thought they were still alive. Someone took a step towards them, telling the saint that there was no need to send anyone. The masked man touched his belt as he said that the soldiers were too arrogant and that he was not surprised that their regiment was defeated. Then it was explained that he was the leader of the Death Knights. George's eye glowed red as he asked to leave the salvation of the people to him. Haley's mouth fell open, looking forward as she asked about how he really thought he could do it alone. The leader of the Death Knights took off his hat as he told them that he once fought 4 goblin titans at once by himself, adding that from what they could see, he was still alive. The man covered his face with his hand as he exclaimed that even these goblin heroes were no match for him now. George showed off the scars on his face and neck as someone exclaimed that this was good news. In the middle of the forest was a settlement. The leader had his back turned as he asked the system to open the panel. A system window appeared in front of the protagonist, telling him about the current plot and that while resisting the human race, he successfully created a tribe of heroes under the leadership of a battle goblin and a mother of dragons to pacify the rebellious subordinates, strengthen the leader's position, and force the brethren and elves to submit. But the good times did not last long. As following the instructions of the holy swordswoman, George, known as the Reaper of Death, attacked the tribe alone late at night, concluding that in the end, although the protagonist subdued the enemy, the tribe suffered serious damage. Rick looked up thoughtfully, wondering if it was too naive to come alone, and that he was able to cause significant damage. The leader put his finger to the system window, deciding that it would be better for him to take the initiative and get rid of him personally, and that he would not run away. The protagonist looked up menacingly as a system announcement appeared, telling them that they were in a life-or-death duel with an enemy, and the leader realized that this guy seemed very strong, and that he should prepare before the battle. The settlement was shown from above, as someone laughed and exclaimed that George was coming. Luke smiled creepily, shouting that their end would finally come. The leader stood in front of him with the girls, as the captain said that they would soon die, and that the Reaper had fought the Titans and had even stood up to them. The protagonist watched Luke, as he assumed that he must have a lot of faith in him, and then asked what the Titans were. A scarred monster was shown, as the captain replied that it was a powerful warrior raised by an enemy country with Titan genes, capable of destroying rank 5 monsters. Luke's mouth opened wide as he laughed, exclaiming that they were all finished. Rick stood in front of the man as he said that George had some kind of technique, then the captain advised him to start begging for mercy. The goblin leader looked away thoughtfully, thinking that it seemed like he needed to be careful, deciding that he would send someone to scout. The horse stopped near a large rock. The rider was shown in profile as he thought about how there were no monsters in the forest, and how strange it was. In front of him was a bloody weapon, as the Death Reaper thought about how there were only the remains of the previous squad, and how trash it was. A broken shield was shown up close. George was sitting on his horse as he laughed, talking about the sweet smell of blood. The man in the hat looked down carefully, thinking that he wondered if his current rivals could make him happy. The horse was standing sideways when the cry for help was heard. George, looking away, wondered who was crying. The rider spurred the horse. The mare galloped forward. A blonde was sitting near a tree. The rider stopped the horse in front of her when he recognized her. Eva looked away pleadingly. George, frowning, lowered his gaze. The saint opened her mouth, looking ahead as she asked the reaper for help, then he exclaimed that she was alive after all. The girl stood next to the mare when the man repeated that she was not dead, and then asked about Luke. The blonde was wiping away tears when she replied that she had escaped from a tribe of goblins, and that the captain had died. George looked down when he said he understood, and then asked her to remind him which tribe she had escaped from. Eva pointed forward when she said that it was there, and that it wasn't that far, warning that they were very creepy. Then the man asked if it was true. The horse's hooves touched the ground. The mare was in front of the saint, who asked the rider to lead her, to which he replied that she should go ahead and then he wouldn't make a mistake, explaining that he still had things to do. George leaned forward when the system window popped up, which said that he had a professional skill that was that when he was alone and helpless, he could get a 30% bonus to his stats, and that every time he killed an enemy, his stats would increase by 20%. The Reaper looked ahead confidently, thinking that Luke was finished, that no one could stop him now, and that if he got there first, the tribe wouldn't be able to stand against him. The horse suddenly stopped. The man's pupils narrowed. George deftly jumped off the mare. He looked back when he assumed it was an ambush. In front of him stood Eva, whom he asked about not leaving. A pillar of light appeared in front of the saint when she used the divine light burst skill. George placed his hand on her chest when he asked what she was doing. The blonde stood up straight when she exclaimed that her master ordered him to be killed. A stream of light energy crashed into the ground when the divine light attack skill was used. Purple smoke appeared. A hand emerged from it when the soul absorption technique was used. George grabbed the saint by the hair when he called her names, asking how she dared to attack him. The Grim Reaper licked the girl's skin when he added that she climbed on him herself, and then asked if she thought he only liked killing monsters, exclaiming that he liked girls too. A blade flashed in front of the blonde's body as the man added that this was a great chance for him. George frowned and looked down when asked if he really wanted to go at them alone. The protagonist appeared behind them when he said that he had good skills and weapons. The protagonist held the blade in front of him when he added that if he used his attacks, his tribe would have a hard time. Then a system window appeared, which talked about the equipment of the Death Reaper. George gritted his teeth, thinking about how this low-ranking goblin dared to take his sword. Eva ran up to Rick, calling him master. Then the man asked if he really made her attack him, and then called her trash, suggesting that she caved in to the goblins for the sake of survival. The protagonist patted the saint on the head, answering that everything was exactly like that, and that she made a good animal. The protagonist looked down with disdain as he said that he was disappointed because he thought that the Reaper of Death would be stronger, but he turned out to be a common pervert who only wanted to have fun with girls. George stood in front of Rick as he replied that although he did not know where he got the information about his characteristics, it was a common thing for him to deal with goblins like him. The man spread his legs wide as he exclaimed that he would tear them apart with his bare hands, and that a place in hell was already waiting for them. The Reaper of Death approached the protagonist. Goblins and a lizard appeared behind the protagonist. Rick looked down with a smirk as he offered to check which of them would go to hell. A stream of fire appeared from the dragon's mouth. George's body was engulfed in flames, then his scream was heard. The Tianmao tribe settlement was shown. A crowd of goblins appeared in the distance as everyone began to shout that the leader had returned from hunting. Luke looked in horror in front of him. A charred body lay in front of him as the protagonist asked if it was the powerful death god that the captain was talking about, adding that unfortunately, he couldn't stand up to it, and died. Luke smiled creepily as he exclaimed that someone had died again, and that the holy swordswoman was incredibly worthless and disgusting for trying to protect those rats of Guangming City by sending warriors to their deaths one by one, and that it was a disgusting strategy. The body lay in front of a crowd of goblins as the protagonist thought that it was time to focus on cultivating rare species of their kind, and that the flesh of corpses was very useful, so it would be useful for development. The creepy goblins stood in front of Rick, who said that they eat first, and the rest get the rest. The monsters leaned towards the charred body, thanking the leader who thought about how it took certain genes and talent to turn a common goblin into a rare species, and that he had decided to choose the fierce ones who had the most potential. The protagonist imagined the monster eating the flesh, thinking that this species was very hypocritical and twisted, but that was exactly what was needed. He touched the apple, thinking about the swordswoman, and that he had already checked the information that she only had 3 knights, who had already fallen into his hands. The protagonist sat on the beast's skin, thinking about how once the news of George's death reached, the authority of the holy swordswoman would be undermined, and that he thought that she would definitely start doing something to somehow raise her reputation. The space around Rick distorted as he decided it was time to use the system to learn the future, and then activated it. There was a tree growing near the building. The protagonist, grinning, looked ahead as he thought about how greedy the holy swordswoman was, and that it seemed like he would win. The leader stood in front of the goblins as he announced a general assembly, explaining that tomorrow he would take on one grand task, and they responded that they obeyed. The protagonist, threateningly looking ahead, realized that it was time for destruction. City walls were shown when someone asked where he found it. Haley stood in front of the remains when she was told that it was outside the city. Knights stood on either side of the blonde when the sorceress exclaimed that it was only a day, and the commander of the warriors asked how they could kill George and even return his body. The swordswoman introduced the fire-breathing dragon as she said that the attacks of the goblins and lizardmen were not just a coincidence. Haley frowned, looking ahead as she added that perhaps the two races had conspired and decided to lock them in Guangming City so that they could not do anything else, concluding that they could not stand idly by any longer. The holy swordswoman extended her hand to the side, ordering all the groups to immediately go look for backup, to which the warriors agreed. The riders rushed forward. The bearded man looked at the captain, exclaiming that even if they rode horses to Wanda, the journey would take at least 4 days, and then asked about what they would do if the city was already destroyed by the time they returned, and then offered to help, explaining that he was very fast on his feet and that they could go back and guard the city for now. The sorceress watched the warrior as she asked him what he understood, adding that this was the saint's special strategy, and that if they encountered goblins during their journey, at least there was a chance that someone would return and report everything. The girl presented a diagram of the siege of the city, when she explained that the problem was that the knights could not cope with the monsters and lizards now, and that the saint was confused and did not know what to do anymore, so it was unlikely that anyone would agree to help them. The warrior in the helmet held the reins in his hands when he countered, reminding her that this was exactly why Haley had developed this strategy, because she wanted to protect at least them, so they definitely needed to find reinforcements. Sweat appeared on the bearded man's face as he exclaimed that he understood everything now. The commander of the knights pulled the reins towards himself as he asked them to wait. In front of them was a destroyed bridge, when someone asked the captain about what they were going to do. The girl was sitting on her horse when she exclaimed that it was a trap and that they needed to change direction. The warrior in the helmet looked ahead when he refused, explaining that an ambush could be waiting for them on another route, and then inquired what they would do then, concluding that although the bridge was broken, it was their safest route. They were near a cliff when the commander ordered the trees to be cut down, saying that they needed to build a new crossing before dark, to which the others agreed. The riders stood in front of the new bridge, exclaiming that they were finished as dusk fell. The horses stepped onto the wooden crossing when the captain reminded them that time was running out and suggested that they hurry. The rider turned her head to the side, following the commander, when she said that this was strange, and then inquired why it was so dark. The warrior's helmet was shown close up. The knight gritted his teeth, frowning as he shouted that things were bad. A dragon appeared over the bridge. The protagonist in a cloak was on it, as someone exclaimed that a goblin was standing on its back. The warrior in the helmet looked forward in horror, as he exclaimed that it turned out that they were in league with the lizard. The protagonist crossed his arms over his chest as he laughed and said that they were very clever, since instead of going the other way, they decided to build a new bridge, and then asked about whether they were afraid that he would ambush them. The commander of the knights looked forward in anger, as he exclaimed that it turned out that he had broken the bridge on purpose, adding that he would kill it. The dragon began to spit fire. The riders began to run, fearing the flames. Under the stream of fire, the bridge collapsed. The sorceress was sitting in front of the captain when she said this. Flames blazed at the bottom of the gorge as the warrior cursed. The helmeted boy looked forward in anger as he screamed about how he wanted to torture him to death. The lizard was in the air above the cliff when Rick asked if it would work, warning that their goblins and the mother of dragons were not so easy to defeat and they would come soon. The monsters approached the group of people, who screamed about being surrounded and that there was someone else on the reptile. The sorceress looked away in concern as she told the captain that if that goblin jumped off the dragon, they would definitely be finished, to which he replied that they should hold out, because if they did, the city of Guangming would prosper again. The bearded warrior stood next to the knight, who turned to him, saying that they would hold them off and that he should run and tell the others the news, to which he replied that he understood. Klaus rushed towards the goblins, cursing and exclaiming that they were all finished. The warrior held his shield in front of him. The monsters looked at him as he shouted that when the holy swordswoman came, it would definitely be the end of them all. The goblins stood in front of the sorceress as she addressed the captain, saying that something was wrong and that they were strange. The monsters grinned vilely as she added that they intentionally let Klaus escape. The dragon flew over the girl as she suggested that this might be the enemy's plan. The protagonist crossed his arms and looked ahead as he said that in any case, their plan was to get the saint out of the city, and then asked them to guess what would happen when she left Guangming. The protagonist smiled, looking down as he asked if it was true that he would come to an end. The warrior in the helmet opened his mouth and screamed loudly. In front of him was a red lizard when the captain ordered to capture the rider, exclaiming that the city should not be harmed, and summed up that it was necessary to protect him and the saint, to which the others agreed. A large goblin with a sword appeared in front of him. The ground began to crack near them. The commander of the knights looked forward menacingly when he mentally cursed, realizing that his strength was much weaker than the monster's. Their battle was watched by the protagonist when the captain said that this was George's blade. The protagonist carefully looked down when he answered that everything was correct. Rick's hand reached for the weapon when he addressed the boys, informing them that time was running out. His leg hung in the air. The leader of the goblins jumped off the dragon when he ordered to deal with the knights before the saint arrived. The monsters crowded around the knight's body. Streams of wind raged over the captain's back when he cursed, realizing that he could not do this anymore. The goblin was eating the flesh of his comrade. An arrow hit the warrior's helmet as he called the monsters names. The protagonist turned to his comrade, who exclaimed that he had a very strong head. Then the leader asked him to leave them for a while. Chuck looked at the goblin climbing on the girl when he announced that they were leaving before the swordswoman arrived. The monster, licking his lips, looked away when he accepted the order, thanking his master. Clouds floated above the forest. Knights stopped behind the blonde. She frowned and looked ahead when she assumed they were too late. In the distance, thickets were visible. In front of the squad lay remains when Klaus addressed the captain. The bearded warrior touched his bones when he cursed and promised to avenge them. Haley stood straight, looking down when she said that there were only corpses down there. The holy swordswoman took note of the paw print, as she added that it seemed like the goblins and the dragon were working together now. Klaus' mouth dropped open as he exclaimed that he had seen a monster riding a lizard and that he thought it was their leader. The blonde looked away sharply as she asked him again. The lizard was spitting out streams of flames as the warrior said that he was the one who ordered the dragon to destroy the bridge, and that the crew's bodies must have been burned as well, then asked the lady to deal with them. Haley was looking ahead intently as she thought about the dragon's flames covering a small area and the goblins eating the human's main skin and if there were too many plagues. The saint looked shocked as she realized something. The knights ran after the blonde, who cursed, exclaiming that it was a diversion and that they needed to go back because Guangming was under attack. Klaus, looking ahead in horror, asked how that was possible. Black smoke was rising from the ruined buildings. The swordswoman stood among the rubble and human bodies. She fell to her knees. Haley looked dejected as she thought about how it wasn't true. The boy was sitting in front of his father's body and crying. The saint extended her hand to the trembling child as she asked him not to be afraid. The boy waved her hand away and told her to go away, shouting that she was only pretending to protect them every day. The blonde looked at the child in confusion, who exclaimed that she was the reason the goblins came, and that she was bad and a liar. Dark silhouettes of people were shown asking about who asked her to come and what kind of saint she was, and also saying that she couldn't even protect them and that they hated her, concluding that Guangming City didn't need such a protector. Sweat was pouring down Haley's face. She began to cough up blood. The girl was surrounded by the townspeople, who said that they didn't need her and that this was all because of her, and then asked her to leave the city. Samantha looked down carefully as she praised Rick, saying that he had done his job and that there had not even been any direct confrontations because they had caught them off guard, summing up that things would be tough for humanity now. The dragoness's mouth dropped open as she exclaimed that it was good that she had once met the goblin leader. The moon illuminated the Tianmao tribe settlement. The protagonist took a step forward, then someone shouted that the leader had returned. 2 goblins were walking behind him as he asked how things were going and if anything strange had happened, to which he was told that the attack on the city had gone smoothly and that there was even a catch. The monster pointed to the girls in the cage as he explained that they had spared them so that they could play with them later. Kate hugged the child as the goblin added that they had given her a whole cart of gold and taken her out of the city. The guy stopped, spreading his legs wide. The protagonist turned to the goblin, saying that it was a good job, and that from today on he would be able to absorb monster powers too, and the goblin thanked him. Rick, looking ahead, smiled slightly when he thought about how Kate was the only one who believed in him until the end, and how he sent her out of this hell as a reward, and also how the saint was probably having a hard time right now. The lizards were flying over the island. The protagonist stood behind the dragoness when he thanked her for her help, exclaiming that the plan was a success. The protagonist sat in front of her when she replied that they said that the swordswoman was out of action, and the guy said that he would like to ask her to continue sending dragons to Guangming to put more pressure on the saint. Samantha, licking her lips, leaned towards him when she asked about what she would get in return, because the lizards fly there every day, which makes them very tired. Rick glanced at the animal corpses as he replied that they would look. The dragon pressed her lips to his. Samantha stuck out her tongue as she asked him what he thought of what she wanted from him as a reward. They looked into each other's eyes as the goblin asked her again, assuming it was a joke. The dragon loomed over him as she asked him to just fill her belly, and then she would leave him alone. Samantha opened her mouth, looking down as she warned him that if he refused, she would be angry. She squeezed the protagonist's throat as he asked what she was even talking about, and how a weak goblin could be worthy of her majesty. The dragon parted her lips. She sat on the protagonist as she said that he was not weak and that she saw potential in him as a master. Samantha's cheeks turned red as she told him that dragons have always worshipped the strong. Rick looked into the eyes of the girl, who explained that this is why she wants to be around the strong, reproducing powerful offspring. The head of the goblin smiled at the dragoness looming over him, when he replied that in this case it is better to respect, not obey. Samantha blushed, her mouth slightly open. There were other lizards in the cave. A system notification with congratulations appeared in front of the protagonist. Then he realized that he received many characteristics. The protagonist touched the dragoness's muzzle, thinking about letting her sleep, and about not wanting to wake her. He knelt down on one knee. The lizard flew forward, opening its mouth. Then Rick thought about the mother of dragons being a very powerful creature, and about the problems he would have if she wanted him to stay with her. The entrance to the cave was shown. Samantha opened one eye, thinking that he was exactly as she had imagined him, and that perhaps one day the goblins would enter a whole new stage. Clouds were floating above the settlement, when someone asked what that meant. Cassandra looked outraged when she asked if he really wanted them to leave. The protagonist stood in front of the girls when he answered that, given their increase, he was allowing them to leave, and he thought about how elves were more useful than humans, and how instead of suppressing them, it would be better to take a chance and let them follow him willingly. Sarah turned to her daughter when she addressed her and said that if they wanted, they could leave. The protagonist lowered his gaze. The elf knelt before him as she said that after so much time together, she was sure that he was not a simple goblin. That is why she wanted to follow him, and then asked if it was possible. Rick looked down with satisfaction as he answered that she was smart, and that if she stayed, they would not attack other elves anymore, and he himself thought about the fact that she wanted him to become the patron of the elves, so he decided to stay nearby. With tears in her eyes, Cassandra looked forward as she turned to her mother and asked how she could stay there. The elves sat next to Sarah when they said that in this case, they also will not go anywhere and will live there with her and the leader. The main character smiled, deciding that everything was fine. The protagonist stood in front of the girls as he exclaimed that since it was their choice, they were no longer prisoners but his loyal subordinates, and that he would make sure they were safe, and they thanked him. Rick smirked as he looked ahead as he thought about the holy swordswoman having fallen, and how there would be no more invasions so he could develop in peace, deciding that he would put his efforts into creating an even larger army of heroes. The goblin held his arms out as he told the leader that these people were too small for him. The blonde stood in front of the protagonist as she said that they could help with artificial breeding, and he replied that it was good. The green monster stood in front of them as he addressed the leader, telling him that one of his brethren was dead. The protagonist's mouth widened as he asked him again. He took a step forward. A lifeless body lay before Rick. When he asked how it happened, he was told that they themselves did not understand, and that literally just now everything was fine, and then he went crazy and died. The goblin bared sharp fangs. Spikes appeared from his leg. The leader looked at the creature in front of him, when his brother exclaimed that he was alive. The monster grew a long tail with spikes, when a system notification appeared, which said that it was a revived, suddenly transformed, distorted, blessed by God goblin. Sweat appeared on the face of the protagonist, when he thought that if it were not for the mother of dragons, then perhaps he would not have received such characteristics. The monster raised its paws up, when it exclaimed that not only did it not die, but also became stronger. Then the protagonist replied that its wisdom and strength increased, and that it was possible to focus on raising the next generation. Then it said that it obeyed. 3 months later, clouds were floating in the blue sky. The buildings of Guangming City were shown. The hotel sign had a picture of a mug of beer. The customers were sitting at a table when someone said that quite a while had passed, and then asked how the saint was doing, and was told that if he were in her place, he would have gone crazy long ago. The knight's armor was shown, and he exclaimed that it was funny that the goblins could deal with even their best warriors. The customers looked in one direction. The guy in the hat stood up straight as it was explained that he was the leader of the bravery squad, Albert, and then someone said that he was His Royal Highness. The baby goblins were shown as a system notification popped up, saying that after a 3-month period of stable reproduction, the leader had obtained a total of 150 heroes across 3 generations. There were glittering coins in the chest as the system announced that at this time, the royal family had issued a reward of 300 gold, gathering a group of bravery to go to Guangming City and then exterminate their tribe. The warriors in armor were shown as a system notification popped up with a short description, saying that this time he would be fighting diamond and epic opponents, and that he should prepare himself. The protagonist looked down in confusion when he thought about how a diamond-ranked traveler was considered a mentor to the others, and an epic-ranked traveler was even stronger than the holy swordswoman. The protagonist sat in a chair when he wondered what to do and how to deal with them this time. The blonde stood in front of the leader when she exclaimed that she wanted to suggest something. Rick stared in front of him when he asked what it was. The girls knelt before the leader when Sarah said that the new generation of goblins had grown up, but there weren't many resources left in the forest and that there weren't enough for everyone, adding that there was an iron ore base nearby and that some of their brothers didn't have enough weapons and equipment this week, so their training was delayed. The protagonist frowned deeply when he thought about the scarcity of resources there, and the situation in Guangming was getting tense, and that it seemed like it was time to move, deciding that the new home should be well protected. The protagonist put his hand out to the side when he said that they were moving immediately. Lena stood behind Sarah when she asked again, then the elf replied that they were listening. In front of the mountains was a lake. Under the roof of the cave were bats, when the leader realized that the interior was suitable, and that it was the best lair. Rick raised the torch. The protagonist in the cloak stood with his back to the goblins when he told the goblins to take a few people to clear the gravel and fortify the cave, because children should grow up in safety. Then he was told that they were listening and obeying. Someone hit the stone with a pickaxe. The goblins stuck the torch into the wall. The leader stood in front of his tribe as he announced that from this day on this place would be their new home, and that now they could celebrate this matter, reminding them not to forget that they must obey him in everything, otherwise they would die. Then the brothers began to shout for the health of the leader, and that they would obey him in everything. The protagonist was shown in profile as he thought about moving the tribe, and about how it was time to check the city of Guangming, and also that if the system was right about the travelers, then he should see everything for himself before making further plans. Someone put a mug of foam on the table. The bartender stood in front of the customer as he asked about how His Royal Highness didn't only kill high-level monsters, and why he wanted to go after the goblins. Albert brought the mug to his mouth as he answered that he wanted to save his useless brother Luke, and at the same time deal with the monsters personally. The man with the scar closed his eyes as he said he understood. The bearded old man shouted the prince's name, exclaiming that he thought he just wanted a reward and that was all. The bartender looked at the customer in the hat. The warriors looked in one direction with interest. The old man with the staff entered the establishment when he said that goblins were worth 1,000 gold, so he also wanted to participate. Then someone asked if the wizard Gru had arrived too, adding that he was the leader of the brave regiment of diamond-level grey hats. The prince was sitting in front of the magician when he exclaimed that he was talking too much. Gru opened his mouth, looking away when a loud laugh was heard. Albert frowned, looking away. The hooded man introduced the blonde when he said that it was very funny, and that the holy swordswoman failed, so they decided to try themselves, and then asked not to forget that this time the cold-blooded Lyselina was also participating. The men's faces sweated as they wondered when he had come and began to talk about how he would do anything for money and how he didn't care who he killed at all, until someone told him to shut up, warning him that if he heard, it would be the end of them. Albert sat in front of the cloaked stranger when he suggested that the wandering brave also came for the goblins, to which the stranger replied that he didn't care much about them and that he had come to get rid of the dragon. The mustachioed man was shown in profile as he explained that if he could kill the lizard, he would become an epic adventurer. The patrons were seated at the tavern tables when the stranger concluded that he wanted to remind them not to underestimate the goblins and that, although they were inferior creatures, their evolutionary abilities were astounding, especially their tendency to mutate. The wizard sat next to the prince when he said that what he had said was true, and that he had lived for 100 years and had seen more goblins than they had seen women. The men looked ahead worriedly when the old man told them that this inferior race had always been a great danger to all ethnic peoples, and that they could not be exterminated for thousands of years. Gru brought his mug to his face when he summed up that the goblins were a real problem for them, and that if it were not for the money, he would not have come there. Albert looked away intently, thinking that this was true, and that many of their comrades had died because of these monsters, so they had to be very careful. The prince in the hat turned to the wizard when he addressed him, saying that he thought they would definitely cope with them, and asking how he felt about it, that after the victory he was even ready to give him all the rewards. Gru smiled broadly, looking away as he agreed with him, replying that since His Highness so wished, he would not refuse, and he thought about the fact that if they got into danger, he would not even have to strain himself too much. A 2-story building was shown. A map was lying on the table, when someone said that he thought it was best to lead a team of people straight into the forest. Then another exclaimed that they would solve everything by violence. Albert took the parchment in his hands, when he said that there was too much unknown on this path, and that they should first walk through that area and then make a concrete plan. In front of him stood an old man with a staff, who replied that the young man was too cautious, and that in that case he should make everything himself, and also that he did not care. A shadow fell on the prince's face, when he asked him to wait. The knight in armor was shown in profile, when he exclaimed that this guy was the man. The wizard looked away intently as he said that the goblin slayer was there too, and then offered to have a chat with him. Albert looked surprised when he asked him again. The prince and Gru stopped in front of the knight when the boy said that he didn't know about his status and that it was very rude of him. Then the slayer replied that he didn't want people to know about his identity, and then asked why they stopped him. Albert looked ahead with displeasure, thinking that he was very strange, and that even his voice was fake. Gru smiled widely, looking ahead when he called the prince a dunce, explaining that he was a man who had never gotten seriously injured while fighting goblins, and that he was said to have killed over 1,000 of these monsters by himself. Then Albert asked if that was true. The knight's helmet was shown up close when he was asked why he didn't join them and attack together, calling him a respected goblin slayer. The warrior with a sword on his back walked past the prince when he replied that he didn't need it, then asked him to clear the way. The bearded old man looked angry when he called the guy impudent, warning him not to beg for help later when a goblin grabbed him. The wizard held his staff in front of him, exclaiming that no matter how strong he was, he couldn't talk to people like that. Then Albert asked him what he was doing there. There were trees growing on the green hills. The protagonist was sitting down on one knee. His eyes glowed blue when he used the skill-piercing vision. The knight in armor turned his back when the system window with his characteristics appeared. The protagonist's face began to sweat when he realized that one had between 1,000 and 3,000 characteristics at once, so he asked the system if there were any solutions. The system window appeared, where she apologized to the master, saying that there were no routes yet. The arched entrance to the city was shown. Rick looked down with an inquisitive gaze as he wondered what was there. Albert had a smile on his face as the goblin leader thought about the fact that this was a rider who had the ability to restrain, and that his total combat power was 1,300. Gru opened his mouth wide, looking away as the protagonist realized that this was a professional great mage with a wide range of skills and a total power of 1,400 units, which was more difficult to deal with. The protagonist was shown in profile as he thought that despite their diamond rank, there should be no problems. There was a huge sword on the warrior's back as Rick decided that he needed to pay special attention to the goblin slayer. The steep cliffs near the former settlement of the Tiamao tribe were shown. People were examining the surrounding areas. Gru was looking ahead intently when he exclaimed that it was strange and that they should have found such a large settlement long ago, thinking that along the way there were many traces of battles left earlier and that this was enough to prove that the tribe was nearby. The prince was sitting with his back to him when he turned to the old man, asking him to look there. He placed strands of blonde hair on his palm. The wizard brought them to his mouth. Albert watched Gru, who said that if he was not mistaken, these were the hairs of an elf. Then the youth asked him again, and wondered if they had helped the goblins hide and how that was possible. The wizard put the strands in a glass vessel when he said that they had searched the forest and that they had nowhere to hide, and also that most likely it was this race that helped the monsters hide. A blue butterfly flew out of the jar when the old man explained that the insect loved the scent of elves. The wizard and the prince watched the butterfly when Gru said that maybe they could find the goblins with it. The blue insect flew to the rocks. In front of the hunters was a forest and water when Albert said that it seemed to be heading in that direction, wondering if they had crossed the river. The guy in the hat looked at the old man next to him when he suggested that they just wait for the goblin slayer to do everything, to which he replied that it was not necessary. The prince turned his head to the side when Gru asked the prince to look there. The goblin took a step forward, then he was noticed. The hunters rushed towards the water when they were ordered to give chase. A smirk appeared on the protagonist's face. Behind him was the dragon when he said that this was great, and that they had swallowed the bait. The protagonist lowered his gaze. A warrior in armor approached the river, talking about how great and beautiful it was. The knight touched his helmet with his hands when Rick thought about how he wanted to deal with him first, but he didn't know when he would decide to come, and that he had a very strange laugh. The leader of the goblins looked shocked. There was a knight's equipment on the ground. A blonde was standing in the water. The protagonist looked down with interest when he realized that the goblin killer was a girl. The blonde stranger was standing with her back turned when the protagonist thought about how she didn't look like a representative of the human race, and about how the strength was also released, and then wondered who would even swim in such a situation. Rick frowned, looking down when he thought about how it felt like she was doing this on purpose, trying to seduce him, and whether she had discovered them. He touched the skin of the lizard with his foot. The dragon soared upwards, flapping its wings. The red lizard flew forward as the goblin leader thought about being careful with her, deciding that he would deal with the others for now. The blonde placed her hand on her belt as she wondered if she was being wise. The girl touched her tongue, thinking that they were so inviting. Sweat was running down the goblin's face. He was lying in front of the hunters when the prince exclaimed that he had stopped, warning the others to be careful, because they could be surrounded. Arrows flew at the people. The wizard opened his mouth wide, using the activate skill. A stream of fire rushed forward as he attacked. Albert looked at Gru in fear when he said that even he was almost hit, and that the old man was strong. Then he replied that this was nonsense, and that it was not over yet. The hunters turned around, looking back when the old man announced that they were coming. A goblin with a weapon rushed forward. The bearded wizard stared ahead tensely as he exclaimed that this was the look of a hero and that they should attack, to which his subordinates agreed. Flames rushed towards the approaching goblin as the mages used the fireball technique. The green monster gritted his teeth. A huge explosion occurred. Smoke emanated from the goblin's skin. Gru held his staff in front of him as he asked how this was possible. The four-armed monster was in front of the mages, who realized that he was not dead. The green monsters ran towards the prince, who exclaimed that they were surrounded and that they were everywhere. The old man looked at the young man with the hat as he asked where they got their equipment, adding that it couldn't be and that he was relying on him. A magic circle appeared on the ground as the life source technique was used, providing recovery. Ice crystals attacked the monsters. The goblins froze in place in front of the mage. The green monsters covered their heads and bodies from the punishing rain. Near a huge cliff, a knight swung at the enemy. The protagonist stood up straight as he asked the goblin to help them, to which he agreed. His comrade jumped down from the cliff. He landed, slamming his fist into the ground. The goblin approached the mage, grinning. Gru gritted his teeth, looking at the monster's paw. The old man stood behind the goblin as he cursed. A crowd of green monsters rushed forward. Albert opened his mouth wide as he called on the warriors not to be afraid, reminding them not to give up. The goblins attacked the knights in helmets. The prince held a sword in his hands as he used the priesthood technique, adding that he would eradicate the evil souls using maximum force. A fiery whirlwind arose. The hunters were surrounded by goblins when the prince ordered everyone to come to him, explaining that he was about to call a snowstorm and that they needed to surround all the wounded and restore their strength. Albert gritted his teeth, looking ahead as he exclaimed that they had to kill them. The protagonist looked down, thinking that the diamond rank wizards were smarter than he thought, and that if they came to the other goblin tribes, he was afraid that they would not be able to withstand. The protagonist's mouth fell open as he said that it was unfortunate that they had come to them. The creature with the long tail was near the goblins. The old man's pupils narrowed greatly as he cursed, shouting that they were mutated. The blonde girl touched her chin as she laughed, exclaiming that the goblins were very beautiful and strong. A loud scream was heard over the mountains and forest. Gru started coughing up blood. The creepy goblin held the wizard in front of him. The green monster looked away with a disgusting grin. The prince held the hilt of his blade. Sweat was running down his face as he wondered if the wizard was dead. Gru was lying on the ground as he asked Albert to help him and save him. A hand reached out to the prince as the wizard repeated his request. Blood vessels burst in his eyes. The boy ran towards the forest, exclaiming that these goblins were real demons. The monster dragged the old man behind him, who was calling Albert for help. The boy opened his mouth wide in horror. He ran, covering himself from the arrows, wishing death on the monsters and asking who knew that they would also shoot elven arrows, and then asked for someone to save him. The warrior in armor stopped. Sweat was running down the prince's face. Albert extended his hand to the goblin slayer, asking for his help. The monsters with weapons swung at the boy. The prince looked away in fear. There were goblin bodies on the ground. The knight passed by Albert, who thanked him, promising to repay him. The helmeted slayer looked back when he asked him again, advising him to stay as far away from him as possible, and calling him a stupid boy. The prince looked after the warrior, asking him not to leave and exclaiming that this was not an ordinary tribe and that the Lord was somewhere out there. Then he asked if it was true, answering that the more the better, and that it suited him. A deep ravine was shown. A goblin was holding an old man by the head. A sword pierced the monster. The monster rolled its eyes. The goblin fell in front of his brothers. The cloak leader watched the crowd of subordinates. He looked down appraisingly as he wondered what was going on down there. The green monsters were standing in front of a rock. The helmeted warrior held a blade in his hand as he asked the monster if it was their leader, adding that his face didn't show it. The goblin bared his sharp teeth as he offered to kill him. The monsters headed towards the knight. The warrior's eyes glowed red. He swung his sword, sending the monsters flying. The protagonist looked scared as he wondered what kind of skills she had, and that her rank wasn't rated as A, suggesting that she could wield magic as well. The goblin with the spikes on his back looked forward. He threw his head back, going into a ferocious state. The monster approached the knight. The warrior in the helmet was shown up close as he called him a wild calf. The goblin slayer extended his blade to the side, cutting off the monster's spikes. The knight grabbed the hilt with both hands. The warrior swung, standing behind the monster. The goblin looked back in fear as he was wished death. The knight's hands were glued together by the mud. There was brown clay on his armor. The warrior was in the mud when he cursed and exclaimed that his body was stuck. The protagonist stood on the dragon when he thought about retreating and that it was a shame to just leave her, and also that the skills were not bad, that is, she would be suitable for further breeding, realizing that in a direct clash they clearly could not withstand, so they would work on attrition. The lizard flew over the goblins when the leader ordered everyone to retreat, form a circle and attack only from afar. The warrior in the helmet turned his head to the side, realizing that the goblin was controlling the dragon, and exclaimed that he could not lose there. Boulders rolled from the cliff. A clot of mud hung over the knight. The warrior cut the boulders with a few swings of the blade. The sword sank into the ground. The goblin slayer knelt down on one knee. Rick crossed his arms over his chest, wondering how long it would take for him to run out of steam. The warrior placed his hand on his helmet. The uniform fell to the ground. The blonde in armor looked forward languidly. The green monsters began to lick their lips. The protagonist looked down with disdain. The blonde's pupils narrowed. She pierced the old man's chest with her hand. Bella licked the gray organ when she said that she adored human hearts. The protagonist looked angrily ahead when he shouted that this was bad, ordering his subordinates to watch her. The blonde killed goblins, moving forward. Blood splashed on her face. The monster with a tail rushed towards the girl, calling her a brat. The blade pierced the monster's body. Bella put her hand forward, telling him to get what he deserved. An explosion occurred in front of the goblin. The protagonist frowned and looked down, wondering who she was that she could even withstand the power of absorption, and realizing that in the current situation, she needed to think about how to reduce the number of victims. The lizard flapped its wings when the protagonist ordered Eva to follow him and the others to recover. The blonde looked up carefully. The girl opened her mouth when she asked him to stop, explaining that she had not seen such an intelligent goblin in a long time. Bella stood in front of the monster's body when she said that if he allowed her to take a closer look at him, she would spare their lives. Rick was shown in profile when he asked her if she really thought he would believe such a thing. The blonde looked up with a searching gaze when she wondered if he really did not believe. She touched the straps on the equipment. The armor ended up on the ground. The half-naked girl looked forward when she asked if it was better this way. The goblin leader frowned deeply when he realized that she had removed her weapons and armor, and then wondered what kind of games these were. The red lizard hovered in the air in front of the warrior. The protagonist removed his hood when he replied that in that case they could talk. Bella looked ahead with a smile when she exclaimed that he had exceeded her expectations. The protagonist looked at the girl seriously when he asked about the fact that she had not said that she would leave them. The blonde licked the needle when she asked him not to worry, saying that she kept her promises, but he had to satisfy her. The needle pierced Rick's body. Bella put her hand behind her head when she exclaimed that she loved hunting and killing powerful goblins, adding that despite the fact that he looked like a low-level monster, he had the wisdom of a lord. They looked into each other's eyes when she said that it was very exciting, and the protagonist assumed that she had deceived him. The protagonist touched his shoulder, thinking about how careless he had been and wondering how he could have fallen for her tricks. Rick looked back in surprise. The goblin leader opened his mouth wide and asked what she was doing. A smile appeared on the blonde's face. The girl stood in front of the protagonist when she answered that they were under her control and would not look at them, and then laughed. Bella leaned against the protagonist's back, adding that she promised she would not kill him. The blonde looked at Rick with a smile when she said she wanted to enjoy him, and then asked him to let her watch. The goblin leader was pinned to the ground. The girl loomed over the protagonist, asking what kind of creature he would become. Bella kissed the protagonist. Someone was hiding in the bushes when he wondered if this was true. Albert looked ahead in horror. The prince covered his mouth when he realized that the goblin slayer was a girl and decided to have sex with a goblin. A monster approached the boy from behind. Albert looked scared, looking back when a blood-curdling scream was heard. The goblins were carrying away corpses, saying that they needed to hurry and that there was a lot of food there. The protagonist stood in front of Bella when he warned her that this was a lair of monsters, so she would be acting at her own risk if she followed them, to which she replied that she said that everything would depend on his power. The protagonist frowned forward when he asked about who she was and what kind of power she had, as well as how she could control his subordinates without taking control of him. The blonde looked ahead carefully when she replied that if she told him, he had to promise to let her look at him again. Bella and Rick were shown in profile when the leader said that it all depended on what she said. The girl's mouth dropped open when she revealed that she was the descendant of the Goblin King. The protagonist looked away tensely when he asked her again. The protagonist's eyes widened when he questioned her about being the descendant of the Goblin King, and why she looked exactly like a human. He stood behind the blonde, who answered that it was because her mother was human. The girl was holding a baby when she revealed that she happened to be raised by the goblins who had abused her mother. The little girl was locked up when it was explained that of course the more advanced the monsters were, the harder it was for them to have offspring, but she was lucky and survived. The blonde stood in front of the monster's corpse when Bella explained that it had happened about 10 years ago, and that she had started killing goblins with a knife in her hand. The girl was lying on a pile of monster bodies when it was explained that after she had drunk all their blood dry, she had immediately gained the power of a goblin lord and subdued them, and then destroyed all the monsters in the dungeon. Rick, looking ahead intently, wondered if the reason she could control them was because of the power of royal blood. The blonde girl held a dagger in front of her when she said that she had added her blood to the weapon, and that as soon as she touched a goblin with the blade, it would immediately die, concluding that if he could resist, then she would take control of him. Bella's cheeks turned red as she added that she was a goblin slayer and hated them, and that killing was her pastime. The protagonist looked ahead worriedly, thinking that it was no wonder that her identity had not been identified by anyone before, and that she was born to be a slayer and keep the goblins at bay, deciding that it would not do any good if she became his enemy. The blonde covered her mouth with her hand as she stood in front of the protagonist, who said that they were similar, and then asked her to join him, to which she replied that it was interesting, and that she thought he was afraid of her, and was planning to take control of him, but apparently she wouldn't have to. Rick looked indignant as he remained silent. He stood behind Bella, who said that the situation in Guangming City was complicated right now, and that she should go back as a distraction, and the leader asked if she had really become a good girl. Goblin Slayer had her back turned when she answered that he belonged to her, and that she was protecting her things. The protagonist looked forward boredly, asking her again. The walls of the cave were dimly lit. The protagonist's system window with his stats appeared in front of him, and he thought about how much she had given him and how worthy she was of being the king's descendant. Rick lowered his appraising gaze when someone asked his brother if he was really not dead. Albert was lying tied up in front of Luke when he exclaimed that he looked like a dog and that his family's reputation would sink to the bottom, adding that it was no wonder the saint had not come to save him. The dark-haired man looked down with a smile when he called him a fool. There was a fire in front of them when the captain advised him to take a better look at the pot that was boiling for him. The prince looked up in fear, wondering what he was doing. The goblin dragged a prisoner to the cauldron, who asked not to kill him, reminding him that he was from the nobility and would give him many girls. Luke opened his mouth and asked the monster to stop, saying that he wanted to meet the leader. Someone stopped in front of the prisoners, asking why the dog had been silent for so long and now decided to talk. The captain looked exhausted when he asked to let him go, saying that in return he would fulfill any request he made. Albert was in front of Luke when he apologized to him, exclaiming that he didn't mean to hurt him and that he was the dog himself. The goblin leader stood in front of the man when he asked him if he really wanted to make conditions. The dark-haired man was shown in profile when he explained that if they cut off his legs and let him go, he would bring news that he was alive and that the family would definitely send more people to save him, and then the protagonist would be able to devour more innocents. Albert looked scared to death. The protagonist sat in front of Luke, who was screaming that they should all die and that he would kill them all. Then the leader said that it seemed like he had made up his mind and that he agreed. The captured captain sat in front of Rick, talking about killing everyone. Sarah looked worriedly at the leader when she addressed him, warning him that their location would be revealed if they let him go. The protagonist smiled, looking ahead confidently as he asked her not to worry, and then wondered if she didn't believe in him. Clouds floated across the sky. A low building was shown, from where a scream came that it was all over, and that they were finished. The bartender looked emotionless as he asked the man again, telling him to calm down. The bald knight opened his mouth wide and said that he had seen Albert, and that he had barely made it to the city with one leg. The tavern patrons jumped up from their seats, asking how this was possible, and if the prince and the others had failed. The hooded stranger held a mug in his hand as he wondered if both teams were dead, and only one had survived. The armored warrior was shown in profile as he answered that it was true. The goblin slayer stepped forward, adding that they were all dead, and that only Albert had survived. The knight pushed back his chair. The bald man stood next to him when he asked if he had also participated in the battle, to which the warrior answered affirmatively, ordering one glass of beer. Peter looked at the man in the helmet incredulously when he asked about the goblins, to which he replied that there were more than 100 of them, and that there were also many species of them, summing up that he had killed them all. The man with the scar looked surprised. The bald warrior gritted his teeth, looking forward and exclaimed that one should not expect anything else from the goblin slayer. The goblin slayer was sitting among the men when the bartender told him that today he could drink whatever he wanted and that he would not take money from him, and the others began to talk about how powerful he was, and that it was not for nothing that he was called that, and also that there were a lot of them, and even mutated, so it was no wonder that Albert and the others lost. A brown object was shown. Bats flew into the establishment, and people screamed, asking what it was. The customers looked up carefully, guessing who it was. The warrior in the helmet turned his head towards the winged beasts when he asked if they were mercenary assassins, adding that their way of appearing was very unusual. The bat bared its sharp teeth when it addressed the goblin slayer. It was hanging upside down when it assumed that he had found their lair, since he said there were several hundred goblins, summing up that they were very good at hiding. The winged beasts were above the customers when the warrior answered that he had not found the lair and had simply finished off those he had met, adding that he thought she could handle them too. The bat flapped its wing when it asked if this was true. The winged creature was in front of the knight when it asked him not to worry and leave the task of finding the lair to them, summing up that it hoped for cooperation. The warrior in the helmet rested his hand on the table. He turned his back to the beast when he replied that he did not like to act at night, and that he was not used to cooperating with others. The bat looked ahead with red eyes when he said that it was a pity, and that it seemed that he would have to keep the reward for himself. The full moon illuminated the winged creatures. The bat hung on a tree branch. Its comrade was below it when it asked the leader what she thought, explaining that there did not seem to be any troops around, to which he was told that the smell of blood ended there, and that they were definitely inside, so it was worth going there. The winged creatures flew over the goblins, who exclaimed that there was nothing surprising, and that it was time to act. There were stalactites under the roof of the cave. Many goblins were lying on the ground as the bats wondered how there were so few and only one mutant, suggesting that perhaps they were mistaken and that it was only a medium-sized clan. The winged creature spread its wings as it countered, exclaiming that there were many large ones and that it was all as the goblin slayer had said, deciding that they would drink their blood while they slept. The bats flew towards the green monsters as they were told to attack and suck them dry. The winged beast opened its mouth wide. A stream of light hit it. The wounded bat fell to the ground. Someone stepped forward. The beast grinned horribly as it wondered how there could be a holy nun in a goblin lair. Eva held the scepter in her hand, standing upright. The torch blazed with a bright flame. On the other side, the fire was brighter. The goblins surrounded the bats. The vampires looked at each other, standing in front of the green monsters. When they realized that there was no way out, then the leader was asked about what to do now. The protagonist stood in front of a flock of bats, when he exclaimed that they were very brave these days, since they dared to come there and drink their blood. The vampire looked back attentively. She covered her muzzle with a wing. The protagonist watched a clot of dark energy. Someone's heels touched the ground. The girl in the revealing outfit adjusted her hair. When she offered to finish them off, since they were exposed, then a system window with her characteristics appeared. Rick, looking ahead from under his brows, thought that it was incredible that she had such high indicators, and that it was good that he had received information about the mercenary killers in the system in advance, and was prepared. The vampire hovered in the air above the goblins when she offered to check who would burn in the flames of the flames first, them, or the monsters. The protagonist smirked, asking if she really wanted that. Muscular brothers appeared behind the protagonist. The winged girls tried to hide from the bright light. The vampire covered her face with her hand, gritting her teeth when she asked how goblins, who were lower demons, could use holy skills. A blinding light illuminated everything around. The girl's body was lying on the ground. The green monsters stood in front of the vampires when Rick offered to talk to them, saying that fighting would not lead to anything good. Sweat appeared on the brunette's face. The protagonist was in front of her when he said that he thought they came for a reward, adding that he just did not understand why demons who lived off blood needed money. The vampire opened her mouth and remained silent. She looked away in confusion when she wondered if the protagonist thought the church and the holy swordswoman were such fools, and who would go and earn money to buy blood if they hadn't signed an agreement banning drinking human blood. Rick looked thoughtful, thinking that if he could get them on his side, he might even be able to improve the abilities of his own race. The girl with the wings looked at the protagonist appraisingly, who replied that he understood, and then asked about cooperation. The protagonist opened his palm when he said that he could provide them with blood. Something glowed in the goblins' chests. The three vampires stood in front of Rick when they answered that their blood was not enough for long-term use. The leader looked smart when he exclaimed that they had other blood, and that there were other quenchers for bloodthirsty creatures like them. The girl looked ahead confused. The vampires looked at each other, whispering. The protagonist raised his fist to his mouth. He imagined the girl licking her fingers when he told her that legends say that there are creatures called succubi who once gave up blood, having satisfied their needs in intercourse. The horned female threw her head back when it was explained that there was no need to rob and kill, and that it was enough to just satisfy yourself, and that was it. The goblin opened his mouth wide. The protagonist spread his arms out to the sides when he said that his brothers had more than enough of such power, and that if they entered into a partnership, they would definitely not starve. The vampires stood behind the leader, saying that they seemed to have heard of these creatures, and that most likely they were not deceiving them. Then the leader decided that she should try. Someone grabbed her clothes, calling her mistress. The subordinate looked at the leader's long hair when she reminded them that they were countesses and that their master was sealed, and then asked about whether they should wait for him and whether it was too much. The vampire looked back seriously when she answered that too many of their sisters had died in these few hundred years, and that if it was really true and they would not have to suffer anymore, then she would try. The mistress's body was shown from the side. The girls watched this, embarrassed. Suddenly, the leader's pupils narrowed. The vampire blushed when she exclaimed that it really could replace fresh blood. The girls dropped the goblin leader, shouting that they wanted to try it too. Then they were asked to slow down and calm down. A trembling hand reached forward when the protagonist asked Sarah to help him quickly. The elf clung to her master as she told him that he had had a hard time, to which he replied that it seemed like the vampires had gone mad from hunger. The girl in heels walked towards them, addressing the goblin. The vampire looked at the protagonist and the blonde intently as she announced that she accepted his offer, and then asked what he wanted from them. The roof of the cave was shown as Rick replied that it was dark all year round, making it the perfect place for them to live. The protagonist tilted his head back as he explained that they only needed to protect the cave from intruders. The girl with wings closed her eyes. She looked at the protagonist with interest as she responded with her consent. Rick's mouth dropped open as she was behind him. Lights were on in the houses of the city. A scream came from the three-story tavern building that they were cowards and worthless people who should have been finished off long ago. Then it was explained that contact with the mercenaries had been lost, and that now the travelers thought that the defeat of the goblins had failed again. The men, gritting their teeth, looked at each other, when one of them exclaimed that even the monsters had let go of the diamond-rank travelers. Then he was asked to stop pressuring them, explaining that they did not have time to collect gold for him. In front of the cursing customers was a table. The blonde covered her face with a handkerchief. The mustachioed man looked shocked when he recognized her as the holy swordswoman. Peter smiled tightly when he exclaimed that it was very good that the lady had already recovered. Haley was sitting in front of the customers a few minutes later when one of them asked if she wanted to go to the dragon's lair alone and have them fight the goblins, to which she replied in the affirmative, assuring them that this was the only way to deal with both the monsters and the lizards at the same time. The warriors looked ahead worriedly, wondering if they could do it, since only the common rank people remained. A man stood next to the blonde, saying that all they had to do was put in a little effort, and that they could consider him one of them. The stranger in the hat was smoking a cigar when he exclaimed that he wanted to help the holy swordswoman deal with the goblins. Then it was revealed that his name was Arthur, and that he was from the Diamond Rank Rifle Squad. Haley looked away inquiringly, replying that this was great, and that in that case he would be in charge of the goblin mission. The hooded man stood in front of the blonde woman, who said that the only way to get to the Dragon Island was by ship, and that she had heard that he had the ability to control objects, and then asked if he would like to help them. Peter closed his eyes, bowing as he replied that it was a great honor for him, and that he would agree to fight alongside the holy swordswoman. The dark-haired man looked askance as he thought about how the epic rank of traveler would be his after this was over. The dragons were flying over the island. Samantha was lying down, clutching the egg to her. The roof of the cave shook and began to crumble. The dragoness looked away tensely, wondering what was going on. A red lizard appeared in the sky above her. Samantha was shown in profile as she said that she understood, and that she didn't think that girl would ever come to her senses. She placed the egg next to her. The female kissed her unhatched child as she added that it was happening now. Samantha left the egg in front of her as she addressed her child, asking it to remember that its father was a special goblin. A bright aura surrounded the female dragon. The reptile glared forward, calling the saint crazy and exclaiming that it was time to deal with her. The lizard flew upward, flying out of the cave. Blood dripped onto the blades of the blade. The remains of the dragons lay behind the swordswoman. The saint's legs were covered in blood. The mother of the lizards bared her teeth as she stood in front of Haley. The blonde looked up confidently as she exclaimed that she had finally shown up, calling her the progenitor of the purple dragons. The female lizard opened her mouth, asking the girl if she really decided to rise up after such a spectacular defeat, suggesting that she had gained impudence. Haley held the blade in front of her, as she replied that she would not allow her to dictate the fate of her subjects, and that her life was hers. The blonde swung the sword in front of her, using the technique. The dragon's pupils narrowed. Purple flames erupted from her mouth. The dragon's flames collided with the blue energy of the saint. The man hid behind a large rock. The lizard's tail crashed into the cobblestone next to Peter, who thought about how strong this creature was. Someone grabbed the man by the cloak. The swordswoman held him by his clothes, standing in front of the dragon. They landed next to the huge lizard. The blonde looked forward with determination as she told the man to leave and not interfere. The dragon opened her mouth, baring her fangs. Magic circles appeared in front of her muzzle. Haley cut the purple crystals with a swing of her blade. A shard crashed into the ground between the man's legs. Peter looked scared as he looked at the fragment, when he screamed loudly and cursed. Samantha bared her sharp teeth, her mouth open. The swordswoman nimbly moved across the crystals. Haley swung at the mother lizard, using the super rank blade skill. The dragon's body began to bleed. The saint swung her sword in front of her, using the steel raging storm skill. Birds were flying over the dense forest, when a loud scream was heard. A cracked shell lay on the ground. In front of the baby lizard was the blue sky. The green dragon looked up, spreading its wings. Blood dripped onto the ground. Haley was in front of the injured Samantha. The blonde lowered her haughty gaze as she said that they were almost done, and that she aimed for the head, but only pierced the eye, concluding that it was unfortunate. The dragoness looked up in anger as she called her sick, threatening to kill her. A baby lizard approached the swordswoman from behind, telling her not to dare hurt her mother. The green dragon was hit in the back. It fell behind Samantha. Haley swung at the dragoness, who told her child to run to that place, because only there is safety. Then the baby called for its mother. The death of its parent was reflected in the eyes of the serpent. The little dragon, crying, flew away from the killers of the mother. Streams of energy appeared near Peter's hands when he asked the saint to give him to him. The baby deftly dodged the energy spheres. A green substance appeared from his mouth. It hit the man's face. Peter fell to the ground next to Haley, screaming loudly. A flask of liquid appeared in his hand. The man looked forward in fury as he cursed, exclaiming that he would finish this serpent. The saint walked away from him when she said that he had escaped, but had not finished him off, so she should spare him and deal with this one, adding that she wanted to personally kill the goblins that were threatening Guangming City. A purple aura was emanating from the dragon's skin. Samantha's headless body was lying on the shore when Peter told the Saint Swordswoman that it seemed his magic had stopped working and that it was all because of those lizards. Then she asked him why he was standing there, and then ordered him to row. The baby dragon sat next to his mother's body and called for her. The little dragon gritted his teeth when he exclaimed that he would return her to the lair and that they would find a way to resurrect her, adding that he was unable to pull her out. The baby lizard fell on its back. It threw its head back as it apologized to its mother, saying that it would have to devour her. The huge serpent lifted its head up. It flew forward, its mouth wide open. There was lava all around the tree in the dragon's lair. The green lizard landed, holding its mother's head carefully. A clawed paw dug into the ground. The serpent leaned forward, looking up carefully. Suddenly, another dragon appeared above it. Samantha's child was pinned to the ground. The dragon's head flew off to the side. The brown lizard was sitting on its fellow, when it turned to the lord, informing him that it had captured this stranger. Then the baby began to call for its mother. The red reptile opened its eyes. The fire mother of dragons spread her wings when she inquired if this was Samantha's head. The red dragoness leaned towards the baby, when she asked who he was. The green serpent opened his mouth as he replied that it was his mother's head and that he had found this place from his inherited memories, and then asked them to save his mother. The unfamiliar dragons looked in one direction, discussing these cuts and traces of divine power, and that this was the work of that woman and there could be no mistake, and also saying that it was a pity for Samantha, because she could have inherited the power of an ancient lord. Then the brown lizard asked about who asked her to go to the outside world. The green serpent looked closely at the red dragoness. The fire mother was in front of the cub when she agreed that he was her child, but not a true lizard, and then asked about who his father was. The green serpent dug his paws into the ground as he replied that he had never seen him, but his mother said that his father was a goblin. The gray lizard opened his mouth. The scarred dragon looked ahead. The brown reptile widened his eyes in surprise as he asked him again. The huge lizard crushed the baby as he exclaimed that the descendant of a goblin was a disgrace to their race, and then asked his master to let him devour this worthless thing. The red dragon's eyes glowed yellow. She bared her sharp teeth, opening her mouth as she told him to wait, thinking about how this child was the descendant of the true ancient dragon lord, now dead, and how there was no more such blood in the entire race. But in the end, his father was a goblin, so it was very difficult to decide. The green serpent gritted his teeth as he lay on the ground. The red dragon stood before him as she called him a baby, explaining that if he wanted to save his mother, he would need to survive the battle with the lizard standing next to him. The brown reptile pinned him to the ground as it thanked its master for finding entertainment for it. The baby's eyes reflected the open mouth of the dragon. The monster raised its head up. The creatures looked forward in amazement. Suddenly, the dragon opened its eyes in surprise. Flames flew out of its mouth. Raising its head up, it screamed that it hurt. It was about to burst out of its belly. Let them help it. Looking at it, the monster replied that this was the master's decision. It had to save itself. They would not help it. Suddenly, the dragon's head flew up. Looking at it, the monsters heard that it had survived. It had won. Now they could save its mother. The creature took a step forward. Looking straight ahead, the monster said that from now on it became the dragon's servant. It could call him Nidar, to which the dragon asked that it was great. When would it resurrect its mother? Turning his head, Nidar said to take the dragon's head and take it to the world tree. A lava valley appeared, and he heard that he should connect the head with the tree's roots to create a tree dragon. This is the only way that can help with the resurrection of his mother. Looking at the notification, the protagonist thought that in order to withstand the attack of the travelers, he had everything prepared in advance. He just needed to speed up the flow of time to finish everything faster. The protagonist clicked on the notification. The monster raised his hands up, and he heard that long live the leader. Sitting on the throne, Rick thought about the fact that many high-ranking goblins had died. The remains of the corpses would help the remaining goblins evolve into hero goblins. The monster's eyes lit up. The creature looked furiously. Notifications appeared. The goblins of darkness walked forward. Walking straight, the protagonist thought about how goblins are hated because they only level up by devouring others. They are different from humans who level up by killing enemies. But either way, someone dies so that someone else can gain power. Looking away, he heard that she didn't expect him to be so smart. Putting her hand to her face, the girl said that it had been a long time since she had drunk so much blood. Standing in front of the hero, she added that she had actually sent her men to keep an eye on the holy swordswoman, to which the protagonist replied that he should continue. Looking up, Amanda said that as soon as she heard the news of the deaths of hundreds of travelers, she immediately left Taming, now planning to call on the legendary hunters to deal with him. Frowning, she added that he should be careful. Her partners could be former members of the Saints' elite squad. The protagonist grinned and replied that she had left the city just in time. Finally, there was a reason to get some fresh air. The girl looked at him in surprise and asked if she was afraid at all, since she had even decided to go out. The goblin suddenly rushed forward and shouted that things were bad. Looking at the hero, he said that a squad of goblins was visible in the distance, which was heading towards their cave, to which Rick asked that they wanted to attack, and the girl added what exactly. The hero frowned and wondered that there were no other tribes within a radius of 50 kilometers. Could these really be the owners of this cave? The goblins were climbing the mountain. The protagonist stood on a ledge. Suddenly the goblins looked at him in amazement. Holding a weapon in his hands, the wild goblin asked why they were so slow. The thought occurred to him that he had never met this hero before. His strength was considerable. Looking down, Rick wondered what tribe he was from. Such a hero could only be a squad leader. Looking to the side, he said that they should get ready. They needed to kill his squad. They were definitely not weak, to which the goblin replied that he should not worry, he could rely on him. The goblins walked on water. Turning his head, the monster said that it smelled of blood, to which he was asked why he did not feel anything. Standing in front of the waterfall, the wild goblin said that it seemed that there was a lot of food in the cave. They would soon have a snack. A bright red beam appeared. The goblin abruptly rushed forward. Raising his head up, the monster shouted that there were enemies there. Let them get ready for battle, to which he was answered that they would protect him. Suddenly, a hand came out of the water. The goblins began to scatter, shouting that the mutated goblin. The monster clenched his teeth furiously. The blows flew at the goblins. Running forward, the monster shouted, "Damn, the lair has been captured. We need to report this as soon as possible." An arrow flew out of the crossbow abruptly. The hero looked to the side. The monster looked at him in fear and shouted, "Damn, isn't he one of the low-ranking goblins?" Looking to the side, he added that they were useless. The protagonist stood still. He looked down. Kneeling, the monster shouted that he should get out of here. Looking at the hero, he added that how dare he ask him questions, he'll eat him. To which Rick replied that it looked like he needed to be taught a little lesson. Frowning, the goblin asked what to teach. Was he going to teach him a lesson? The thought appeared that he was a real beast. What would happen to him from his blows? There were bloody objects on the ground. Raising his head up, the monster said that he was wrong. Let him ask any question, he couldn't stand it anymore. Grinning, the hero replied that great, let him say what tribe he was from, where it was, why he came. Putting his hands to his face, the goblin replied that he was from the tribe of the Lord of Beasts, the forests that are in the west. Its ruler used to live here. He asked to return to take some things. He didn't think that they had already settled here. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist asked who his leader was, what his level was. Tears appeared in the monster's eyes and he replied that their leader was the leader of the goblins. He would soon become the hegemon. Rick looked surprised when he heard this. Sitting in front of him, the goblin said that yes, they came to take the treasure, which was very important for the leader. He could look for it himself. Looking at him, the hero asked again. Green particles were flying around the ring. Grinning, the protagonist said that he did not expect such treasures to exist, to which the monster replied that he had said everything and had given him everything he needed, maybe he would let him go. Taking his hand, Rick replied that of course. The monster looked at him in amazement and asked what he was doing. Grinning, the hero said that he would let his flesh go, but not his soul. A glow appeared around the ring. Green smoke appeared above the monster. Opening his eyes wide, he shouted that no. Suddenly, green particles rushed forward. The soul began to emanate from the monster. The protagonist stretched out his arms to the sides. A notification about combat power appeared. Clenching his fist, the protagonist thought that it was only plus 200, but if he absorbed an even stronger soul, everything would be different. Looking at the corpse, he added that he believed that the overall strength of his tribe was superior to humans. Since the power was in his hands, the tribe would definitely not sit idly by. Perhaps it would be possible to use them in the fight against people, but this was not yet certain. Putting his hand to his face, Rick wondered what an interesting thing was, how to use the ring at all, and the girl asked that it was a goblin from the tribe of the Master of Beasts. Turning around, he asked what he knew about them, to which the girl replied that of course. Looking down, she added that he would not be able to compete with them. The monster was lying on the ground. It was heard that the tribe of the Master of Beasts belonged to the Empire of Lions. They lived near a large grave. It was better not to go there, even she would not dare. Sitting down, the swordswoman asked how he killed him at all, to which the hero replied, what other big grave, let him tell. Looking to the side, the girl answered that the place where the Lord of the Forest lives in the west, monsters of the 12th rank, world-class creatures, live in the grave. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist asked again. He froze in bewilderment. Suddenly Rick looked at him in surprise and said that for sure. Standing next to him, the girl asked what he was going to do, to which the hero replied that he needed her to help him take control of him. A soul emanated from the monster. It was heard that he should order him to return to the tribe of the Lord of Beasts. Let him report that the ring was stolen. Looking to the side, the protagonist said that it was not they who stole the ring, but the royal aristocrats of the Lion Empire. The girl looked in amazement and asked what she meant by the families of Ben and Felix. Rick crossed his arms and replied yes, then thought that he had let him go on purpose, setting a trap, using Mr. Felix to gain more experience and get rid of his opponents. Frowning, the hero thought that in a conflict between two sides, the third would benefit. A view of the Lion Empire opened up. Kneeling, the guy heard that he should get out of here. He had disgraced their family, to which he replied that he should listen. Looking straight ahead, the knight shouted that these goblins were not only very strong, but also smart. They were no match for them. Even the Grey Hat squad had died. By the way, Luke was still alive. Felix angrily clenched his teeth. He grabbed the chair. Stretching his hand forward, the man shouted that how dare he say such a thing, the heirs of two great families lost to some goblins, he realizes it, everyone is laughing at them. A puddle appeared under the guy. He lowered his head and said that he was asking for forgiveness. A red glow appeared around the hero. Grabbing his head, the knight said that it was scary, very scary, these goblins were insanely scary. Frowning, the man shouted that he was a pathetic laughingstock, let them take him out. Taking a step forward, the man turned. Smiling, he said that he should not be angry. Standing next to the guy, the man said that he would like to unite with him in order to wash away the shame from their family. Looking at him, Felix asked what this meant. Didn't he know that after the king's order was issued, aristocrats above the rank of count must wait for the order, they cannot create troops on their own. Moreover, the king had already handed over this mission to the holy swordswoman, why would he need them? Taking his mustache, the man replied that his horizons were too narrow. Holding his cane, Ben added that if only the saint acts, the king will doubt their necessity, asked that he really wants this. The man looked at him in amazement. Looking straight ahead, Ben said that for the king to give the go-ahead, it is necessary for the aristocrats to report on the worsening situation with the goblins. Then he will allow the aristocracy to single out the aristocracy. The goblins will come to an end. The people looked at each other. Felix closed his eyes. Putting his hands behind his back, he said that okay. But let him not think that he closed his eyes to his true plan, this scum will go to the king. A view of the waterfall opened up. The goblins grabbed their heads. Looking up, the guy asked what was attacking. Sitting on the ground, he said that monsters. Looking at the weapon, the protagonist said that he did not expect the homemade gun to work so well, it was just a pity that the gunpowder was running out, to which the girl replied that the boss was so cool, he also wanted to shoot. Hugging him, she added that he should teach her, to which the protagonist responded approvingly. Standing next to them, the monster shouted that troops had gathered in Guangming, everyone was equipped. Looking straight ahead, the goblin heard other goblins approaching too, to which he replied that it looked like this was a tribe of beast lords. Rick smiled broadly and said that it seemed like they were in for a great show soon. Particles appeared in the air. It was heard that the human troops had taken the ring. He barely escaped. The monster was lying on the ground. A creature emerged from the darkness. It was heard that it was a spawn. Suddenly he screamed furiously. The goblin's eyes lit up. It was heard that he hated them. Let them return his ring. Blue flags appeared. Guards stood on the wall. People stood in front of the knights. Bowing, the man greeted the count. Sitting on his horse, Ben asked where the holy swordswoman was. Taking a step forward, the man said that the holy swordswoman had gone away on business. What did they want? Looking at him, Ben replied that since she was not here, they would not waste time, to which the man said that he was a servant of the dragon, a brave warrior fighting side by side with the holy swordswoman. How dare he ignore him? Closing his eyes, the count said that so that's it, in fact, they came here because of the goblins. The people shuddered. It was heard that this was what the hell. The goblin took a step forward. Suddenly the monsters rushed forward. It was heard that something was wrong. The goblins were advancing, and where were the soldiers at the gate? How did the goblins manage to penetrate the city? Frowning, Felix shouted that the damn goblins were coming to them themselves. People rushed forward, hearing that they were going to attack. They would show the power of the Lion Empire. The man struck the goblin. The soldiers were fighting the monsters. The magician extended his hand to the side. A dragon flew over the city. The protagonist looked down and thought that the situation was even better than he thought. The weapons were dragged along the ground. Holding the sword in his hands, the man said that the goblins were just a bunch of low-grade scum, why be afraid of them? Looking away, he added that he thought they would finish the battle in less than an hour. Suddenly, a blow flew at the knights. The protagonist's eyes widened. A huge monster stood in the arch. The soldier rolled his eyes. Suddenly, the creature screamed furiously. Frowning, Rick wondered where so much power came from, disgusting. Standing in the middle of the square, the man shouted that they should go back. Gritting his teeth, Ben asked what it was, the head of the goblins, to which Felix replied that he was not sure, but that they would have to deal with it anyway. Taking a step forward, the man addressed him. Holding a weapon in her hands, Lona said that they were distracting them, and the soldiers would deal with the rest. Standing next to her, Ben replied that she should be careful, she should not become a scumbag like her brother, to which she said that she obeyed. Suddenly, the girl rushed forward. Frowning, the magician shouted that he should taste it. A blow flew at the monster. He angrily gritted his teeth. The people rushed forward. It was heard that they should go faster, let them lure him out of the city. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist thought that it would be bad if he retreated, he would run into his subordinates. He watched the monsters. The protagonist closed his eyes. The girl looked away. A thought came to her mind that this girl had no shortage of luck. People were lying on the ground. The monster looked forward furiously. Gritting his teeth, the guy said that damn goblins, their teeth would be his first trophy. Looking away, the man shouted that they should not relax, continue in the same spirit, attack with all their might. The monster struck the ground. Standing in front of him, the girl thought that she was the best representative of the academy. She needed to win this battle. Suddenly her eyes lit up. In essence, a blow flew. Looking down, the protagonist thought that the total strength of this girl was 1,700 points. The rest had only 1,000 each. He did not think that everything would be so interesting. Looking straight ahead, the monster shouted, "That damn girl, how dare she!" A purple glow appeared above his head. The hero clenched his teeth tightly. The monster raised his head up. Suddenly, he used the skill roar of the Master of Beasts. The protagonist stood on the dragon. Gritting his teeth, he thought that powerful energy, incredible rage. Looking at the dragon, Rick shouted for it to calm down. The man fell to his knees. People were lying on the ground. Looking straight ahead, Lona asked why everything turned out this way. Where did such a strong goblin come from? She began to cry and added that no one could handle him. The girl sat down on the ground and turned to her father. The monster stood in front of her. She looked at him in fear and said that he should save her. A blow thundered in the middle of the forest. People looked away, hearing that Lona, "They are in trouble, they cannot retreat, let him calm down." Pointing ahead, the man asked what was there. The monster stood still. It was holding the dead girl. Ben clenched his teeth. Rushing forward, he shouted for his daughter to be returned. The goblin looked straight ahead, furious. Suddenly, he jumped up. The man swung his sword. The monster swung back. He struck Ben. The man fell to the ground. Suddenly, spears were thrust into the monster. The knights attacked him. Frowning, Felix shouted for them to hurry up and strike the final blow. Gritting his teeth, the mage thought to let him come out. A fiery sphere appeared in his hands. He stood with his foot on the shield. Red rays appeared around him. The monster's eyes lit up. A bright glow appeared behind the mountains. The goblins began to run away quickly. The man looked straight ahead. The monster was on its knees. The mage lowered its head. Suddenly, he grabbed his head. The man stretched out his arms to the sides and shouted that they had won. He had won, that was the real traveler. A glow appeared around the monster. He pounced on the man. Suddenly, he had swallowed him. The creature's eyes lit up. The men looked at him in fear. The dragon was flying in the sky. It was heard that it was coming here. Looking down, the protagonist thought that this guy had already begun to evolve. A glow was flying around the monster's leg. His eyes were shining brightly. The goblin looked away. The monster grabbed the man. A thought appeared that the total strength had reached 3,100. This was the hegemon level. Although he had just evolved, his combat power rating should not grow for a long time. This was already very frightening. The monster looked straight ahead. Red particles were flying in the sky. A thought appeared that if he continued to devour everything on the go, the people would definitely lose. Frowning, the protagonist thought that he had already absorbed all the experience. What would be left for him then? It seemed that he would have to intervene and suppress him. The monster crushed the goblin. Looking at it, the goblins shouted that there was nowhere to run. Looking straight ahead, the creature said that they should attack, that he would execute the apostates on the spot. The goblins rushed forward. It was heard that they were attacking. Looking to the side, the man shouted that they were returning quickly, that they should close the city gates. Looking straight ahead, the monster said that they were in pursuit, that no one should be left behind. The hero watched them and thought that they were running into the city. Looking to the side, he said that then. The protagonist put his hand in his mouth. Suddenly, the dragon rushed forward. Running forward, the goblins shouted that they should take the corpses. A bright glow appeared in the middle of the forest. The beams rushed forward. Frowning, Rick wondered if he had really returned. Looking at the goblins, he shouted that they should hurry up, retreat. A view of the building opened up. It was heard that he should give it up, or he would show him what pain was. Standing in front of the monster, the man replied that he did not have what he was looking for. Let him kill if he wanted. They were inferior creatures, not worthy of bargaining with him. Suddenly, the monster jumped up. He grabbed the man tightly. Looking at him furiously, the goblin asked what this meant, refusing. Bright rays rushed at the monster. Suddenly a blow flew at him. A dagger fell from the sky. A blow flew sharply on the ground. The man stood on the handle of the sword. His eyes lit up. The monster opened his eyes in fear. Suddenly blue rays appeared around him. The guy was holding the weapon in his hands. Mark grinned, looking straight ahead. He stood in the smoke. Looking straight ahead, Archie asked why he had to treat the goblin like that. Tears appeared in the man's eyes and he said that she was finally here, and the members of the hunting party as well. A view of the city opened up. The protagonist looked away. Looking at the buildings, he thought that he didn't expect the hunters to arrive right now. At first he wanted to try to suppress this monster, but it seemed that his intervention was not required. The monster stood in the middle of the square. He raised his hand up. Blood flew out of the goblin's mouth. The monster lifted the goblin up. Suddenly, he crushed him. The monster activated the true nature of cruelty skill. Looking at him, the protagonist thought that he also had such a skill, but judging by the injury, a full recovery would take some time. Grinning, he added that this is better. Looking straight ahead, Mark said that this guy did not die, although his stomach and chest were pierced, to which the swordswoman replied that in the end, he has the rank of a hegemon. It is not so easy to deal with him. The monster looked at them in amazement. He held out his hand and said that they should wait. He was lost. He didn't want to fight. Let him go. He wouldn't come back. Frowning, the girl asked that he was the leader. Standing in front of her, the monster said that he was, and he just wanted his little thing back, to which the man said that was nonsense. He didn't take anything, he swears. Looking straight at her, Haley said that no, it was definitely him, that guy. Looking at her, Archie asked who she was talking about, that goblin, to which the girl replied that that guy was the leader of another goblin tribe, hundreds of miles away, and Guangming was attacked by another goblin leader living nearby. Frowning, Emma said that it turned out that their goblin had lured that leader here on purpose to wear them out. Looking straight at him, the guy added that how could a goblin even think of such a thing? Felix held his hand out and shouted that who cares, many travelers had died at his hands, they can't let him just leave. The man smiled widely. His eyes lit up and he said that he should let him solve their problem. The monster looked at him in surprise. Suddenly, a huge whirlwind appeared. They looked at it in amazement. The whirlwind rushed past the monster. The creature looked at him in amazement. It quickly began to run away. The girl covered her face with her hand. Suddenly, she opened her eyes in amazement. Looking at the sky, Haley asked what the dragon was. The protagonist was standing on the dragon. Grinning, he thought that this goblin could be useful. It was a pity that he would come to an end. If he let him escape, then in the future he could attack himself, taking advantage of his helplessness. The dragon rushed forward. They could hear that they were leaving. Frowning, the girl said that she would not run away. Suddenly, she jumped up. The girl was flying up rapidly. Frowning, Haley wondered how the little goblin could dodge. Swinging, she said that it seemed she was not mistaken. Suddenly, the girl used the skill Hurricane of Steel. The protagonist turned around in amazement. Standing on the dragon, he shouted for it to dodge. The blow flew along the ground. Flying forward, Rick thought that if he did not run away, he would hardly survive the battle. The girl took a step forward. She looked at the dragon. Frowning, the girl shouted that it did not matter where she ran, she would still get to him. The hero looked to the side and replied that she was sick, they would see what she would do soon. He was not standing still either. A view of the waterfall opened up. A field appeared. The monster quickly ran forward. His eyes lit up and he said that they could not wait any longer, they needed to take the treasure before anyone got ahead of him. Suddenly he stopped. The creature raised its head up. Turning around, it said that someone was watching. Pointing to the side, the monster said that his thing was here, there could be no mistake. The man frowned and shouted that he said the same, he didn't take anything, especially not a goblin's thing. Looking straight ahead, the creature said that he understood, they were deceiving him, they would all die, no matter who was aiming at him. He slammed his fist on the ground. Looking straight ahead, the monster shouted for them to come out. The girls looked at him in fear. The girl opened her eyes wide and asked what they should do, he wouldn't break in here. Frowning, Cassandra said so what, if he did, they would come out and deal with him, to which Sarah replied that the boss had already told them to sit still many times. Looking at them, the girl said that they shouldn't worry. Grinning, she added that she trusted Rick, he wouldn't let anything happen to them. The monster looked at him furiously and asked who was who. Looking at him, the protagonist said that as expected, he was here. Looking down, he added that there was no escape from the trap. Suddenly, the dragon released a flame. The flame engulfed the monster. The protagonist fired a cannon. The monster looked at him in amazement. Suddenly, he rushed forward. The goblin struck the dragon. He opened his eyes in amazement. Rick stood in the smoke. A ring appeared on his hand. Opening his eyes wide, the monster shouted that it was his ring. Where did he get it from? Standing in front of the hero, the head of the goblins shouted that it was he who stole his ring. Let him return it, to which the hero asked what he meant about it. Looking straight ahead, he asked what if he doesn't want to. The monster's eyes lit up and he said, damn it. Suddenly, he rushed forward. The goblin was rapidly approaching the protagonist. He struck the ground. Rick stood in front of him. The hero grinned and asked how he, with such a clumsy body, could compare to him. Suddenly, he jumped up. The protagonist swung at the monster. Blood splashes appeared. A notification about a new skill appeared. The monster looked forward furiously. Rick wiped his face from the blood. He raised his head up and activated the skill. Suddenly, a bright purple beam appeared. The creature fell to the ground. The hero stood in front of it. Looking at his hands, he thought that he didn't expect that he could really get a new skill. Suddenly, a blow flew at him. The protagonist flew to the side. He bounced off the ground. Rick held back the blow. The monster swung furiously. He struck the hero. Frowning, the hero thought that he was strong. The good thing was that he had previously fought with a team of hunters, so he weakened a little. Looking at him, the monster asked him that he was able to dodge, and he was strong, damn him. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. The protagonist struck him. Looking straight ahead, the creature screamed that it was impossible. He couldn't lose to some goblin. Suddenly, he fell to the ground. It was heard that there was no food here that could give him nutrition. If he was hit in a vital organ, he would definitely die. Rick frowned and said that if he wasn't at least a little useful, he would have already torn out his heart. A view of the waterfall opened up. The monster was lying on the ground. It was heard that it could take it for itself. Putting her hand on her side, the girl asked what plans. Didn't he want to seal his soul in a ring to increase his strength? In the end, everything went well, to which the hero replied that they had some problems. In the midst of the battle, the holy swordswoman squad intervened, so he was exposed. Looking straight ahead, he added that among them there is a man named Mark, who has the ability to go underground. He can easily find them. Looking at him, the girl asked what he came up with. Standing in front of the monster, the protagonist replied that this guy is not from the Great Grave, is he? Why not use his past so that the creatures from the Great Grave destroy their enemies? Bella looked down and asked if it wasn't dangerous. It was better not to mess with the guys from the Great Grave, to which Rick replied that it was the best way. He held the ring in his hands. Standing next to the girl, the hero said that he should order him to report on all the creatures from the Great Grave and bring the demon ring so that they could take revenge, to which Bella replied that she could not give any arguments against it. Taking off her glove, she added that okay, as she says. The girl cut her hand. Stretching it forward, she read the spell. A glow appeared around the monster's hand. It was heard to get up. Standing in front of her, the creature said that she was just a pathetic slave. How dare she surpass her master? He is a real master. A glow appeared in the cave. Goblins were sitting by the fire. A notification appeared. The hero looked at it. The skill appeared. The thought arose that maybe he should summon it to create additional protection. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist thought that although no, the strength of a rank 6 demon is about the same as a furious goblin. He pressed the skill and added that even if there were 3 furious goblins at once, it was not a fact that they would be able to defeat the holy swordswoman's squad. A goblin appeared, the skill was said. A fire sphere appeared. Looking at the skills, Rick thought that dark fusion did not look strong, but if it was combined with his ability to absorb genes, it would become much more powerful. He flew up and added that, for example, merging with the wings of a giant dragon, and then absorbing flight skills. The hero looked straight ahead. The thought appeared that or merging with the eyes of a jellyfish, and then absorbing her petrification skills. The protagonist stretched out his hand and thought that the blood of destruction seemed to be the only way to resist the sacred system. Dark fusion was good, but he had no demons to fuse with now. Okay, he would choose it. He clicked on the notification. A fire sphere appeared. A notification about exchanging the blood of destruction appeared. Rick opened his eyes in amazement and exclaimed. The goblins looked at him in bewilderment, hearing that he adored the system. If she were a human, especially a woman, he would satisfy her properly. A notification about exchanging dark fusion appeared. Smiling, the hero said that this could just solve the problem of the limitations of the goblin absorption gene. He received 2 rewards at once. He looked away, hearing the appeal. Looking at him, the girl asked what was wrong with him, to which the protagonist replied that nothing. Lena looked at him in amazement. She lowered her head in embarrassment. Grinning, the girl asked that she wanted that very thing. Rick closed his eyes and thought that maybe he could rest for a day. His body would soon give out. The goblin rushed forward and shouted that the man had done something wrong again, and had even stolen 2 weapons. Frowning, the hero replied that he would take a look. They walked forward quickly. The man grabbed his head and said that he was guilty before them, that he had ruined them. Luke looked away in surprise. Sitting on the ground, the man turned to the hero. Tears appeared in his eyes and he asked what he should say, that his parents were still alive. Looking down, the protagonist replied that his father had been bitten by the hegemon, and as for his sister, her body had long been desecrated. Luke looked at him in amazement. He opened his mouth. The man grabbed his face and said that he shouldn't have behaved like that he shouldn't have acted smart. Closing his eyes, the girl said that it was good that Eva was alive, and she hoped that the people from the church would be able to save him. Suddenly the man rushed forward. Luke hit a rock. He was lying on the ground. Crouching down, the protagonist asked why he was emotionally exhausted, but still thought about others. Holding the blade in his hands, he added that so much time had passed, his hatred for him had dissipated, it was time to ease his suffering. A large forest of graves appeared. Standing in front of the cave, the monster said that he was the master of the beasts of the goblin settlement, where he was. A glow appeared around the monster's hand. The creature looked at him in fear. The monster stood in front of him. It was heard that he had business with him. He wanted to return his thing, but they killed his entire clan. Looking at him, the monster asked again. Stretching his hands forward, the creature said that he should continue the fight and listen to the order, return everything to him. A glow appeared around the ring. Looking straight ahead, the monster asked what he should say, what he needed. Looking at him, the goblin answered that he should help him and kill them. Greg stood silently in front of him. His eyes lit up and he said that he knew they had an agreement with the church, they can't invade human territory. Looking at him, the monster heard that, but he would let him take a look at the territory. Turning around, Greg said that he could take revenge, he would support him. Raising his hand, he added that finally, it had been so long since he ate fresh flesh. A view of the mountains opened up. The hero looked at the notification. He looked down and thought that after several days of training, he had almost mastered the use of the blood of doom. Putting his hand to his face, the protagonist added that although his level had increased, but the total strength of the holy swordswoman was 4,000, and this was a very large gap. It seemed that the only way to take it was to unite, and why was everything always so difficult? Looking down, Rick thought that for now he was one step ahead, he could gather his army and attack Guangming. Closing his eyes, he added that he thought there was no need to pretend anymore. Walking forward, the girl said that the furious goblins were waiting for him at the cave. Looking straight ahead, the hero replied that he understood. Stretching her hand forward, the girl asked him to wait. Grinning, Bella asked if they needed to go to Guangming with him. Looking away, the protagonist said that there was no need for this, they would fight against the holy swordswoman. Her presence could complicate the situation. Looking at him, the girl added that she had already given him an order to obey those goblins. Let him not fail, otherwise he would have to be punished. Closing his eyes, Rick replied that he should forget. It was still unknown who would punish whom. Bella silently looked at him. She grinned, putting her hand to her face. The hero walked on the water. He stood near the monster. Looking straight ahead, Greg asked what was going on. His friend was a lower goblin. The protagonist looked at him. Raising his eyebrows, he thought that here comes the demon bull, devouring people. Looking at him, the monster said that he thought that, at best, a 6th-rank demon would come. It seems he was wrong. Standing in front of him, the goblin replied that he should not worry, he is not weak. Rick frowned, hearing that it was nonsense. The guards were standing on the wall. Looking to the side, the goblin said that it was time to go, but let them take into account that there are many swordswomen inside. Greg smiled and replied that he would release his beast. Suddenly the earth shook. The man gritted his teeth and asked what was happening, an earthquake, and another added that they should look quickly. Suddenly the monsters rushed forward. The guards looked in fear. It was heard that the demon bull, he is here, so many. The dragon flew in the sky, and someone shouted that forward, to the people, let them help. Crossing his arms, the protagonist thought that the bull demon was so terrifying. In his opinion, a reasonable goblin was much more terrifying than the bull demon. The demons were destroying the city. The thought appeared that the city of Guangming would definitely become his. Holding a man in his hands, the monster said that the smell of fresh meat. He opened his mouth wide. Suddenly a bright beam appeared. A blow flew at the monster. He fell to the ground. The man turned around in fear. Hunters appeared. He heard the holy swordswoman. Frowning, Archie asked where so many bull demons came from. The guy opened his eyes in amazement. Looking straight ahead, he asked what they came from the graves. Gritting his teeth, Mark said that he should have finished him off at the very beginning, to which Haley replied that it was her mistake, she shouldn't have chased that goblin last time. A glow appeared around her hand and she said that she made that mistake too. Frowning, she added that she would fix it herself. Suddenly, the girl rushed forward. The hunters fought the monsters. The demon rushed towards the girl. Haley looked in amazement. Suddenly, the bull struck her. A hand appeared in the smoke. The girl held back the monster's blow. Looking straight ahead, the demon exclaimed in amazement. The protagonist stood on the tower. He crossed his arms and thought that the overall strength of the bull demon was slightly lower than that of the holy swordswoman, but he had an advantage in strength. If it was contained, it would be easier for him to act. He looked down. The monster stood in front of the knight. Looking straight ahead, Mark shouted that damn, he would finish him off. Smiling, the protagonist thought that the earth technique, he was waiting for it. Suddenly, he used the earth element skill. A devastating explosion occurred. The guy fell to the ground. The monster stretched out his hand forward. It began to absorb the man. The girl opened her eyes wide and screamed loudly. Suddenly, she pulled the bowstring. A huge whirlwind appeared. Arrows flew towards it. Sitting on the roof, Emma asked what was going on. The protagonist jumped off the roof. He landed on the ground. Looking straight ahead, Rick said that he was lucky that he had agility skills, otherwise he would not have stood up to the elf race. Looking at the monster, he added that he should leave it and help others. Letting go of the man, the goblin responded approvingly. Taking a step forward, the hero said that the goblin lord's technique was very useful. He stuck out his tongue and used absorption. The girl grabbed her face and turned. Archie struck the demon. Rushing forward, he shouted that the devil's spawn. Suddenly, the man swung his weapon. The protagonist looked forward. The man turned around in surprise. Gritting his teeth, he shouted that the devil. The protagonist's eyes lit up and he said about the advanced skill. Archie clenched his teeth tightly. Suddenly, blue rays appeared. The girl looked down in amazement. Rick was absorbing the man's body. Archie rolled his eyes. Emma's eyes widened and asked how this was possible. Even Archie was devoured. Rick stood by the wall. A notification about combat power appeared. Grinning, he thought that he didn't expect to rise 5 levels, finally level 75, and the total strength increased to 3,200. The girl pulled the bowstring. Arrows flew towards the hero. Suddenly, a shot pierced him. The protagonist clenched his teeth. He looked at the glow in amazement. Rick abruptly jumped to the side. Frowning, the hero thought that fortunately, he dodged in time. The girl shot a bow. Jumping up, the protagonist thought that damn, this girl sped up her shooting. If not for the stone wall, he would not have dodged. Looking at the monster, he shouted that he should go and knock down the bell tower. The monster suddenly rushed forward. He crashed into the tower. Gritting her teeth, the girl shouted that damn. Grinning, Rick thought that now. Suddenly he fired a crossbow. Emma clenched her teeth. She jumped down. The hero grinned and thought that he wouldn't catch up. It seemed that she needed to wait for her skills to recharge before continuing the attack. Suddenly, he started to run away. Pulling the bowstring, the girl shouted that he shouldn't think that he could hide. The protagonist jumped up. He landed on the ground. The girl's eyes widened and she thought that, damn, her strength was running out. Gritting her teeth, she added that she could do it just a little more. Emma fell to the ground. The monster was standing right in front of her. Suddenly, it opened its mouth wide, and she heard it go away. She was his. The hero looked at the girl. Crouching down, he said that such a powerful elf, he couldn't just eat her. The protagonist picked up the girl in his arms. He carried her away. Destroyed buildings appeared. The girl opened her eyes slightly. Suddenly, she looked in amazement. Lying on the ground, Emma shouted about the goblin. Gritting her teeth, she thought that she couldn't. The girl looked at him in fear and screamed what he was doing. Looking at her, Rick replied that he would find out soon. The swordswoman's eyes lit up. A blow flew at the demon. The girl raised her sword up. Frowning, she said that yes, it was not easy with him. Suddenly, Haley looked to the side in amazement. The girl held the dagger to her stomach. The swordswoman stretched her hand forward. Emma's eyes widened. Haley quickly ran to her. Taking her in her arms, the girl screamed for her not to die. Rolling her eyes, Emma said that they were already dead, and she. Stretching out her hand, she added that she did not want to give birth to a goblin child, she must avenge them. Her hand fell to the ground. Looking at the girl, the demon said that the master killed her. But who ate her, and who is now the new leader? Kill. Haley grabbed the sword. A glow appeared around her. Looking straight ahead, the girl said for them to die. Haley plunged the sword into her stomach. The knights looked at her in amazement. The monsters opened their eyes in surprise. Looking at the girl, the man asked what was wrong with her. Looking straight ahead, Haley said for them to move away or they would die. The knights began to run away quickly. It was heard that what a terrifying saint. For the first time they saw her like this, more terrible than all the monsters. A destroyed city appeared. Looking to the side, the protagonist asked what was happening. Suddenly, he opened his eyes in amazement. A bright glow was flying around the girl. Looking at it, the protagonist shouted that it was bad. The demons looked around. It was heard what it was, where to run, what to do. The bulls shouted in fear that what was going on. The girl raised her hand up and used the highest technique of the swordsman. Her eyes lit up brightly. Suddenly, a blow flew across the ground. An abyss from it appeared. Haley descended to the ground. She stood among the corpses of monsters. Haley frowned. Her combat power increased. A destroyed city appeared. Standing behind the wall, the hero thought that fortunately, he managed to escape. He thought she was a knight, so she was a magician. Why risk her life so much for the sake of increasing her strength? Looking straight ahead, the man shouted that it was not for nothing that she was called the invincible holy swordswoman, the protective holy sword of the kingdom, too powerful. The knights raised their hands up and shouted that glory to the saint, long life. The girl held her wound. She bowed to the ground. The protagonist smiled broadly. Gritting her teeth, Haley shouted that this was not the end, the real killer was not killed yet. She held the potion in her hands. Suddenly a typhoon appeared. It flew straight at the girl. People looked away in amazement. Rick was standing on the roof. He heard a goblin. Frowning, Felix said that he, a pathetic bastard, dared to attack from behind. Holding the weapon in his hands, he added that she needed to heal her wounds. They would deal with him themselves. The hero smiled broadly and asked what he called him. Suddenly, the man rushed forward and shouted that he was vile and shameless. The protagonist fired a crossbow at him. Looking straight at him, he said that it was not this, but the previous one, asked that he knew that he was a goblin, and still wanted to lecture him. The knights rushed towards him. It was heard that they would kill him, avenge the count. Rick swung his dagger. He began to deliver sharp blows to the guards. Frowning, the man shouted that they should not retreat, they would buy time for the saint. Looking straight ahead, he added that they should give up their hearts. Suddenly, he was pierced through. The hero struck him. The man's eyes widened. Frowning, the protagonist said that yes, let them give up their hearts, he would take them. Blue beams rushed forward, and a mad blade was heard. The protagonist covered himself with the knight's body. The girl clenched her teeth furiously. Suddenly, she struck the ground. Rick rushed towards her. Haley swung her leg. The hero blocked her blow. He slid along the ground. Frowning, the protagonist thought that it was very difficult to cope. Even though the strength had dropped to 2,500, it was still very difficult to deal with. Suddenly, he used supreme sorcery. The attack rushed forward. The beams flew at the knights. The girl opened her eyes in amazement. Haley frowned in amazement. Suddenly, she used the divine sacred sword technique. The hero dodged the blow. Looking away, he thought that it seemed like using demon skills against her had little effect. Standing in front of the girl, the protagonist added that if this continued, they would probably both get injured or even lose. The saint could suppress him, and that was a fact. Swinging her sword, Haley shouted that they had to make a decision today. Rick smirked and asked that she liked the taste of defeat. The girl raised her sword up and told him to shut his mouth, and the hero added that he should taste it. Haley slashed the ground. She clenched her teeth in anger. The knight rushed forward and shouted that they would kill him together. The hero grabbed the guard by the neck. He threw him to the side. The girl rushed forward. The knight fell to the ground. Suddenly, blows flew at the guards. The protagonist ran forward, and the girl shouted for him to stop running. Enough already, let him come to her. Rick plunged a dagger into the knight. Running forward, he thought about using the fighter's TED to dodge attacks. He definitely surpassed the saint in speed. Raising his hand up, Haley shouted for him not to run, to which the hero thought that as long as he broke the saint's faith, reducing her defense, he still had a chance to win. Gray smoke appeared. Lying on the ground, the knight shouted that he should be killed. He could no longer bear the torture. Grinning, the hero said that it was not worth it. Everything had to end here and now. In any case, she would lose this battle too. Frowning, the girl shouted at him not to run away. She swung her sword sharply. The man fell to the ground. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist thought that it was ready. She would soon go crazy. Blows flew at the knights. It was heard that she would kill him. Rick bowed to the ground. He smiled broadly and said that it was not bad. The methods of killing a saint were much more terrible than demons. The girl opened her eyes in amazement. Haley froze in fear. The sword fell to the ground. Looking at her hands, the swordswoman said that she had killed so many, killed everyone she was supposed to protect. The girl grabbed her head. A thought appeared. Here was a chance. The hero held the blade in his hands. Suddenly he threw it at the girl. Haley fell to her knees. Drops fell to the floor. The girl sat surrounded by fire. She looked up and said, "Oh God, it wasn't her fault, she protected everyone." Looking at the clouds she said, "So why did God abandon her?" The girl fell to the ground. Walking towards her, the hero said that defiled by the blood of defeat, she would lose her divine powers. The protagonist sat down and said she was a very strong person with her weaknesses. His eyes lit up and he said, "Why doesn't she just become his person? Let her join the Goblin army and overthrow these religious fanatics controlling the world with him." Lightning flashed in the sky. The hero grabbed the girl by the clothes. Then he bared his torso. The rain didn't stop. The monster rushed forward. Someone ran past and shouted, "Church, people from the church, we need to run." Rick frowned and asked again about the church. Someone was approaching the protagonist. A bunch of soldiers filled the square. The girl was lying unconscious on the ground. The hero jumped aside. The soldiers stopped near the girl. The bishop looked down and thought that he did not expect that misfortune would befall her. He frowned and said that it turned out to be a goblin. Looking at the hero, he added that the weak and harmless appearance hides a terrifying strength and face, a real demon. The man held the sword tightly and said that let the sacred guard obey, in the name of God, and said to contribute to the fact that this world strives for prosperity. The soldiers opened their mouths and exclaimed in chorus that they will drive out the demons, hallelujah. Rick grinned furiously. The soldiers rushed into battle. Their swords hit the protagonist's barrier. He frowned and thought that he was wearing such heavy armor, and still fast. The people fought fiercely and a notification about the combat power appeared. The soldier's sword sparked. The hero leaned on the ground. Then he looked up with a furious look. The sword was near his face, and he thought that these guys were much stronger than he thought. But what did it matter? He swung and cast a spell of blood of decay. Blood flew into the enemies' faces. The soldier fell to the ground. He raised his hands to the sky and screamed that his holy power. Someone shouted that this is forbidden magic. Flashes of light appeared in the distance, and someone said that this is a real demon, not a goblin. Rick ran across the square and thought, damn, what is this? This is the power of the church. Even ordinary soldiers have the strength of 3,000. It looks like the plan will have to be changed. The magical trail remained behind the hero. The girl was lying on the ground and it was heard that they need to prepare for the return. This child needs purification and guidance of the priest, otherwise she may fall into debauchery. The man looked at the bishop and asked if he would deal with the goblins, and also Eva. He answered that it was too late. He picked up Eva and said, as for her, The archbishop said that the deity had already chosen a new priestess. There was no need to look for her anymore. The guy adjusted his cloak. Then he put his hands in his pockets. Looking at the cemetery, he thought that all the bodies were buried. Fortunately, the body of the Minotaur was still here. He grinned and continued the thought that now he could have a good feast. A notification appeared about reaching level 80. Clouds were hovering over the mountains. The guys looked at the hero. Bella asked if he won, Lena asked the headman to tell, the girl asked in shock if they noticed that it seemed like the headman had become stronger again. Rick sat on a chair and said, "Don't they know about his actions, the holy swordswoman his?" The girl frowned and said that it couldn't be, he defeated her and slept with her. The goblin closed his eyes and replied that of course, it's just a pity that the holy church took her. Lena looked at the girl in surprise. She jumped on the hero saying that she knew he was the coolest and that she wanted him. The protagonist said to take him and that he had things to discuss. He stood up and said that this time they had won a major victory and gained time for the tribe to develop. They needed to move to a new location so as not to be afraid of the places of the human race. Rick smiled. Someone asked where, and he answered that to a place where even people from the holy church did not dare to go without permission. He heard that it was a holy grave. The huge street was filled with tents. The girls were standing surrounded by goblins. Rick twisted his arms across his chest. There was a bundle in front of his eyes and he thought that since the holy grave had made an agreement with the holy church about non-aggression against each other, they had all the conditions for successful development there, and that all that was left was to prepare for reproduction. The hero mounted the dragon and shouted to remember that their main goal was to catch people, not kill them, and as for those who resisted, let them do with them as they saw fit. They answered that it was fine, they understood. A map appeared before his eyes and he heard that in just a few days, having passed through more than 10 villages, they had captured 230 women, which was far from the desired number. Rick looked down and said that there were 700 kilometers along the road, 19 villages, 2 small towns, capturing more than 1,000 people should not be a problem. He turned around and said that there was a small town ahead. The dragon rushed forward and he heard that they should prepare the bags, do everything quickly and continue on their way. The city of Cursella was illuminated by the sun. A man stood on the stage. Someone was telling the mayor that there was no need to be so nervous. He had heard the news. It was just a group of goblins robbing villages. The goblins he had killed were enough to build a mountain. A man from the crowd asked if the guys from their cohort of Cursell would be afraid of a pack of goblins. They answered that they would stand at the gates of the city, and as soon as they appeared, they would kill each of them. The guy with the plaster said not to be careless. These goblins are very scary. They are bigger than normal goblins. The man grinned and said that there is no need to worry about the size. Edgar said with a smile that he would even smash a hero to pieces. Someone shouted to be ready. Frank extended his hand forward and shouted that these guys should be here soon. Standing on the tower, a soldier shouted that they are coming, goblins. People were walking across the square. Edgar held his sword tightly. He grinned and told the boys that when the time came, they would see who could kill the most goblins. The loser would buy everyone drinks for a month. They told him to forget it, they couldn't compete with him, and that he was taking on too much. The man smiled and told them not to worry, he could handle everyone himself. Then he turned around and continued to say that they should just watch, and when the time came, they trembled sharply. Edgar turned around in fear. A huge explosion thundered in the distance. Standing on the dragon, the protagonist was flying towards them. The man fell to the ground and trembled. He asked in fear why the dragon was with goblins. The people quickly ran away shouting that they needed to run. Damned liars, what kind of monsters are these? And Edgar shouted to wait for him. Rick asked in bewilderment that so many people had really prepared, I wonder, and shouted that they should go. The square was empty. The goblins were fighting the people. The man screamed furiously, didn't he say he could handle the goblins, and to hurry up? Edgar was lying under the table and saying why were these goblins so scary? Were they even goblins? Suddenly a monster's paw appeared in front of him. It bared its teeth angrily at Edgar. The man screamed in fear. He was lying on the floor and screaming. It seemed he thought it would be more fun. The beetles and animals began to run away quickly. A little smoke was coming from the gate. The eagle folded his hands and said that the smell of people would quickly attract monsters from all around. Was it really the first time he had landed on the ground in the great tomb? Rick, looking ahead, replied that people who gave birth to new goblins naturally secreted a huge amount of sweat and other bodily fluids, so their smell interrupted even the smell of goblins. Now he understood why people were afraid to enter the territory of the great tomb. There was an objective reason for this, their smell. The protagonist, lowering his head, added that he would remember this, and he was grateful for the advice. Entering the camp, he continued to say what he had promised him. Suddenly, the eagle looked ahead in fear. He saw a huge number of women, after which he shouted that what the hell he had brought so many people here for. Turning around with displeasure, he added that these were the uterus for breeding goblins. Imagining the goblin background in his head, he added that he didn't know that there was a contract between the tomb and the church. Rick, frowning, lowered his head, and his comrade shouted that he wanted to die for breaking it. Smiling, the protagonist replied that he shouldn't worry, they had captured these females before the campaign, almost all of them were already dead. The eagle clenched his fist, replying that it was good, if he had any problems in the future, he could contact him, he would help ensure the safety of the settlement so that he could develop here in peace. Meshal, smiling, replied that he was grateful for his concern, he was always glad to see him in their camp. A second later, the eagle rose into the air, laughing, he shouted that then he would not be modest and therefore would fly and inform the elders about his situation. Rick sighed heavily, saying that he could finally develop in peace. He looked at the little goblins, asking how many babies they had. The girl, looking at the board with displeasure, answered that there were 3,000 of them. If they could reproduce with another pregnancy, there would be more. However, the dynamic and mutated individuals, unfortunately, did not produce offspring. Although she tried, all the babies died. The protagonist, closing his eyes, answered that he already understood that the chance of transferring the ability is very low. After which he entered the tent. Putting his hands in his pockets, he said that this was still enough. Let him send a team to catch local monsters, and they need more low-level goblins. Let them reproduce. We are transferred to the tent. Rick is sitting on the floor, thinking that it is good, he will not have to run through the forests and catch monsters manually, it is enough to use stimulation in the system. Frowning, he asked to start the simulation. A second later, a system message appeared in front of him, informing him that he needed to breed many low-level goblins to expand his influence. He imagined goblins chasing monsters in his mind, reading the message that in a few days he would be able to catch more than 500 first-rank monsters. A second later, an image of a huge bear being carried by goblins appeared in front of him, and he read that on the way back. His hunters managed to catch a female thunder bear. He saw his tribesmen trap giant monsters in a cage, and was informed that a month later, his tribe managed to capture another 3,000 individuals for reproduction. A moment later, an image of soldiers slaughtering his comrades appeared in front of him, and he was informed that his tribe had been hunting and developing peacefully. But after a while, they were suddenly attacked by a sneak attack from human military units. Rick, looking menacingly ahead, thought that they were on the lands of the tomb. How dare they attack them? He pointed his finger at the system message. A second later, a text appeared in front of him, which said that the enemy did not talk to him. When he realized what was going on, the Knights of Light dived from the cliff one after another. During the fierce battle he barely escaped with only a few warriors, suffering an inglorious defeat. The protagonist looked ahead in surprise, saying that this means they are already very angry, and they need to find another way to deal with them. He took a few steps forward, stopping near the monster. He asked if he knew where the owner of these lands lived. The monster pointed towards the forest, answering that he lived in the highest place of this forest. The protagonist, smiling, replied that it was time to pull the thorns in the form of the Empire and the Holy Church out of their asses. We are transported to a month later. The eagle, looking ahead, asks how he knows about this. Knights cannot come here. Surprised, looking to the side, he added that the Great Tomb signed a treaty with the church. Frowning, Rick replied that, retreating from their territory, he saw an army gathered for his soul. He assumes that they will come here for him. The eagle, smiling, replied that now he understands. Flapping his wings, he added that he should not worry. He will not allow people to massacre in the Great Tomb. Only he, those who stand behind the Great Tomb, too. Flying up a couple of meters, he said that he will return to him after he reports to the elders. Rick replied that he is very grateful to him. A large army of people appeared in front of us. The knight raised his hand and shouted that today they were going to a mortal fight. They would not return until they had slaughtered all the goblins. Would they have the courage to enter the land of the Great Tomb with him? The knight raised his head, seeing a huge dragon. Looking ahead in fear, he thought that the goblin was riding a dragon. Seeing how it was approaching them, he thought that everything was exactly as their scouts reported. Opening his mouth wide, he shouted that it was his tribe that had destroyed the villages and cities. Rick, folding his arms, replied that they had forgotten the treaty between the church and the Great Tomb and dared to challenge them on their land. The knight, grabbing his sword, shouted that he was just a pathetic rat who had fled to the shadow of the Great Tomb. He would not have to worry about the treaty if he could kill it. Frowning, he continued to shout that if he saw tens of thousands of lions behind him, he would enter their land and crush his tribe and avenge his grandfather and his beautiful lady. The protagonist, opening his mouth, replied that he understood. Let him tell one little secret, their saint to taste. Closing his eyes and imagining the girl, he added that she was sweeter than honey. The knight opened his mouth in rage and shouted for him to shut up. Looking at the knight standing next to him, he shouted for his highness to allow him to attack. He would grind this worthless thing into dust. Rick, smiling, thought that this was wonderful. He wanted to find out a little more information, but among them was a hysterical guy who foamed at the mouth after a couple of his words. The knight, looking ahead, said that he did not advise him to go forward. They needed to wait for the scouts to return. It was dangerous for them to enter the tomb territory without information. Rick, narrowing his eyes, asked that they had scouts. Then he lifted one guy off the ground, asking what they were saying about them. We are transported to the goblin village 10 minutes ago. The man, having landed, asks how the goblins managed to capture so many people and monsters. Now he understands why the saint was defeated. They need to urgently go back and report everything. Then they suddenly turned around in fear. Many goblins and several monsters appeared in front of them. We are transported back. The guy, looking menacingly ahead, shouted for the army to listen to his order, and not attack and kill all the goblins. A second later the warriors rushed from their place. And the guy, smiling maliciously, laughed. The protagonist stared ahead for a few seconds, listening to his opponent screaming that this is what happens to those who anger the lion. The lion becomes enraged and tears their kind apart. Purple paws appeared in front of us, and someone asked if this was true. The eagle slowly stepped forward, surrounded. The guy, frightened, stepped back, shouting that they needed to be careful. The eagle, narrowing his eyes, said that they had not seen the churchmen for a long time. They had already forgotten about the effect of the ancient treaty that they themselves asked to sign. The knight, stretching his blade forward, shouted that it was none of his business. They had an order signed personally by the Pope. They did not have the authority to negotiate with them on behalf of the tomb. The eagle, smiling, replied that he was very sorry that all their arrogance would turn to dust, because as soon as the old Pope died, he would come for them personally. The knight raised his head and shouted that what was happening here should not concern him. They had a direct order to destroy these goblins. If he dared to interfere, they would be forced to kill him. The guy pulled his sword forward, shouting that they continued the attack. They needed to kill everyone. A second later, the eagle flew into the sky. A huge number of monsters appeared near him, and he shouted that they all considered the lands of the Great Tomb their fiefdom, in which they could do whatever they wanted. The knight stopped and replied that it meant the Great Tomb had sided with the goblins. The eagle lowered his head and said that he could think so. The knight lowered his head and said nothing. A moment later he turned around and said that they needed to withdraw their troops, to which the boy cried out in displeasure that he had heard everything correctly. The lions of the empire never retreat, avoiding battle. Even if a lion had to die, he would die with his head held high, fighting on the battlefield. The Knight of Light lowered his head and replied that they were not running away, but retreating in order to prepare for a greater battle. Rick looked at the enemy army from the sky. Lowering his head, he said that he thought that these were not the best ideas. So much fuss was because of him. The eagle replied that this was not being done for his sake. He took advantage of this to show the church that they were no longer afraid of them. He looked menacingly ahead and added that he should develop his tribe as quickly as possible. Some of their elders were interested in him. He was asked to convey a message that if he became the king of the goblins, he would have the right to enter the true Great Tomb. Rick, raising his head, replied that he liked it. We are transported to the castle. Someone shouts that the damned goblins must be killed. The saint is not worthy of taking up the holy sword with her dirty hands again. People rush at the knights, shouting that this girl is raising a goblin child, and this is an incredible abomination. Someone quickly walks down the corridor. The king, displeased, clenching his fists, shouts that he has had enough. The goblin problem has not been solved, and now there is unrest in the cities. On one side of the scale is the girl, and on the other the people of his country. She needs to make a decision. Entering the room, he discontentedly pronounces the name. Then he frowned in fear. In front of him sat a girl who was playing with a small goblin. The king thought that he could not imagine that she would become like this and ruined. If only he knew, he would have eliminated this threat in the bud. Then the king, grabbing his sword, shouted at her to get out of the way, otherwise he might accidentally hit her. A moment later he lunged towards the goblin. Blood flew in all directions. The girl grabbed the blade, asking discontentedly what this meant. The king, looking down menacingly, replied that it was for the sake of the people and his country, for the sake of the empire, he must return her to the path of righteousness. The girl grabbed the sword. A second later, she held it out in front of her. The king looked down in fear. The girl, opening her mouth, replied that it meant that he decided to deal with her in the same way. A bright light appeared, and someone activated a divine skill. A huge beam of light knocked the girl off her feet. Someone entered the room. The cardinal, closing the book, said that God would grant him strength. A moment later, he created glowing bars around her. The king, turning around, replied that he had to decide this issue himself. He looked at her and simply could not bring himself to do so. The frightened girl grabbed the bars, shouting that let this be her punishment. She would accept it. There was no more divine power left in her. Let God punish her. The cardinal, passing by the cage, replied that God would never leave her. It was she who had turned away from God. Then he approached the goblin, saying that he would deal with him himself. The goblin raised his head in surprise, and the girl trembled in fear. We are transported to the castle, someone shouts. Long live His Majesty! The people watch as the king leaves with the goblin child. A second later he throws him to the ground, saying that he has fulfilled their demands. Frowning, he shouted that from now on, anyone who dares to say anything about the saint will face consequences. People lowered their heads in fear. We are transported to the main hall the next day. Someone runs to the throne. The king, standing up, asked what was going on. A goblin with many arms appeared in front of us. He released an ice ball forward. Smiling widely, he shouted that he can now use magic. A system message appeared that this is a level 70 goblin maniac. The goblins immediately raised their hands, shouting that they demand to be given more monster flesh. They also want to take level 70. Rick Lyosha replied that there were no problems with the monsters in the enchanted forest. If they wanted more meat and to drink more blood, let them hunt. At the same time improve their fighting skills. They did not even try to become stronger, because they knew that they could survive thanks to him. A second later, the protagonist, menacingly surrounding himself with flames, added that they thought that it was safe to stay near him and complain. 2 goblins ran away, shouting that they were already running, let him not be angry, and the maniac added that there was so much strength in his body, he should release it outside, and he would help them. Rick, looking away, replied that he had arranged a resort for them here, and they were still trying to eat for free. Suddenly, he looked away in surprise. An eagle appeared in front of him, and the protagonist asked why it had come to him. His ally, coming closer, replied that he would like to introduce him to another lord. Rick replied that he would be happy to meet him. He lowered his head and thought, why not? It wouldn't hurt to find out a few more names of the big shots. If anything, he could then scare someone, solving his problems at their expense. The eagle smiled and said that he hoped Rick would be happy, because he was already here, behind him. Returning, he saw a huge lizard. A system message appeared in front of him that this was the Lord of the Southern Lands, the Golden Lizard. Frowning, he activated his skill. A moment later, a system message with the Lord's characteristics appeared in front of him, and he thought that he was not very strong. Stretching his hand out to him, he asked if he was interested in people. The lizard, looking at the cage, said that these people looked very appetizing. They needed to divide them between them equally. He replied that he wanted to take half, because when he asked him for permission to come here, he said that one individual would be enough. Turning around, the lizard replied that all the land around the deadly swamps belonged to them. After all, what are goblins worth? They are at the very bottom of the food chain, the lowest of the low. The eagle, looking at him, replied that one word sharing on these lands was still his. Let him return to his place in the south. Hearing this, the lizard opened his mouth in displeasure, shouting for him to stop playing a comedy. How can he even call himself an eagle if he has never tasted a person in his life? He is offering him an honest deal. They will taste their flesh. Everyone will get their share. How does he like such a deal? Rick opened his mouth in surprise. Then flames appeared around him, and he asked if he could stop. He clearly couldn't fit so much. The lizard, menacingly approaching, replied that he was talking to him, a pathetic nonentity. The eagle stepped forward, sticking out his wing. He lowered his head and said that this was his last warning, to leave now or he would return it to his possession in parts. The lizard, sticking out his tongue, replied that he just wanted to take all these people for himself. They needed to kill the goblin, and then they would divide his spoils between them. It was a good deal. A moment later, the eagle, frowning, shouted at him to stop, and this time everything would be his decision. But he was here, then he would visit and arrange a massacre. A second later, the lizard ran away. The eagle stretched out his hand, said that he apologized. He did not think that he would be so greedy. The protagonist replied that there was no need for an apology. What would happen if he killed him? What would the great tombs say about this? The eagle glanced to the side and replied that he could be sentenced to punishment or, on the contrary, given the right to rule over the southern lands in his stead. Rick lowered his head and replied that it meant that he could take the southern lands. If that happened, he would be able to summon mythical creatures, after which he thought that becoming a lord would mean that he would not be able to freely kill monsters as he did now. Gritting his teeth, he added that he would not rule over them even if he was asked. A mountain of corpses appeared in front of us. The goblin was furiously devouring the remains of flesh. Purple energy appeared around him, and he shouted that he had evolved again. It seemed that he had grown a little. He dashed forward and released several energy charges. Looking around, he saw fallen trees. Raising his hand, he shouted that his strength had grown. A small monster appeared in front of us. He was watching the dragonfly. Suddenly, a hand appeared from the water. A second later, the monster was pulled under the water. Some time later, its corpse was lying on the ground, and someone said that it seemed to be a baby. The goblin and his comrades began to swallow it, saying that it tasted sweet and smelled good, and his friend replied that it was very tasty, no worse than human flesh. They would do well to find more of those. Suddenly, they stared at each other, after which the echidna, smiling, turned around. A village of lizards appeared in front of us. The guy went outside saying that her damned baby was constantly wandering around the area. Sooner or later it would lead to trouble. Suddenly monsters would catch him. The girl replied that if someone dared to catch her baby, he would greatly regret it, and she turned towards the bushes, hearing someone ask if this was what they were looking for by chance. She covered her mouth in fear, seeing how the bones of her baby appeared in front of her. The goblin came forward, and she screamed who they were, because this land belonged to them. How dare they come here? Smiling, the goblin answered that she should forget about it. The lizard grabbed his spear, shouting that how dare they treat the lady so disrespectfully. After which he ran forward, A moment later, the goblin pierced him with his spear. The many-armed one approached the girl. Grabbing her by the throat, he laughed and said that they would leave her for the boss. The lizard men jumped out of their houses shouting that they were being attacked by monsters. The Lord was not there. What were they going to do? They needed to take their weapons and prepare for battle. The lizard men rushed into battle shouting that they needed to kill everyone. The goblin smiled widely. A moment later, he extended his hand forward, using strong magic. A terrifying aura emanated from him, knocking all the lizard men back. Then he bit one of them in the stomach, devouring its flesh. A lizard man appeared behind him, swinging his blade. But the goblin managed to destroy it with his tail at the last moment. The many-armed one, leaving, said that they had eaten their fill, they needed to return. The boss said that they couldn't kill them all, they needed to breed new offspring, and then they would return again. And then the comrade added that he would take this small one and a stupidly larger one. These female lizards should please the boss. He was sure that he would praise him. The wounded lizard, lying on the floor, whispered why the Lord was not around at such an hour. He looked ahead in fear. Looking around, he asked that this was definitely his tribe. Then he stepped forward. A second later, one of his charges fell to his knees and cried out in tears that he needed to save the lady and his daughter and hobby. The goblins had taken them. The lizard, menacingly lowering his head, said that it was impossible. He had just returned from their tribe. They could not send their people here so quickly, and they would not dare. After which he turned his muzzle to the side. Opening his eyes wide, he shouted that this smell, it is mixed with the smell of goblins. He, like lightning, rushed forward. Moving quickly, he shouted that these vile creatures, he will cut out their entire tribe. We are transferred to the goblin camp. The goblins, raising their hands, shout that they brought the boss cool goodies. Rick looked away with a smile, thinking about the fact that they all evolved. Looking at his comrades, he saw that they had already reached level 70. Then, lowering his head, he thought that he did not expect that they would become the same level. The characteristics of one of them will be worse, but in overall strength, and not at the same level. Most likely, this is because he is on the path of an assassin. If he is experimented with better, he will definitely become stronger. The protagonist looked ahead in surprise, hearing someone shouting to let her go. The lizard girl, looking ahead with displeasure, added that she was the wife of the tribe's chief. How dare they capture her? She would make the Lord kill them all to the last one. No one would escape. The goblin squeezed her head, shouting for her to shut up. Then, approaching the protagonist, he added that they had caught these two especially for him, one young, the other older, for every taste. Rick, frowning with displeasure, replied that it was the same for the chief. Where they found them, just let them not tell him that these were members of the clan of the lizard who had been with them during the day. The girl smiled maliciously, answering that everything was correct. Her husband was the lord of the southern lands. Was he really scared? But it was too late. The protagonist, looking ahead, replied that the same chieftain who had threatened him by saying that he would destroy his tribe and kill him. The girl opened her mouth in fear, screaming what he was going to do. The pathetic goblins would die a pathetic death. Rick raised his crossbow and a second later pierced her body with an arrow. She fell to the floor. The protagonist, raising his hand, said that these lizards would go to his servants. The goblins immediately began to rejoice, shouting that they were grateful for such a generous reward. A moment later, they pounced on the girls, laughing loudly. Rick looked away, asking what they did with the rest of the tribe. Did they really only take these two? His subordinate, lowering his head, replied that they had stumbled upon them by chance and decided to hunt them. They had eaten almost all of them, but had left a few alive so that they could reproduce the population. The protagonist looked away in fear, and then turned pale. His subordinates immediately began to tremble. And the protagonist, smiling, laughed, said that it was a great job, he had raised them well, they even knew what he needed to bring to show their respect. The big guy, smiling, laughed, adding that it was his duty, and Rick thought that he would like to see the face of this bastard when he returned to the tribe. The lizard tore the walls apart with his tail. He walked forward menacingly, shouting that they should return his wife and daughter. Then he clenched his teeth. He saw his wife and daughter being eaten by goblins. He stared at their bones for a few seconds in silence. Suddenly the protagonist stepped forward, saying that he was too late. The lizard, opening his mouth wide, shouted that he would kill them all. No one would remain alive. The debt of blood can only be paid with blood. Then he released a green flame. Suddenly one of the goblins released a blue flame, throwing the lizard back. He made a quick dash towards the enemy. And a second later he plunged a knife into his body. The lizard gritted his teeth menacingly. The protagonist thrust his blade forward. The lizard, lowering his head, shouted that he even lost consciousness for a moment. And what was that? Rick answered that he came here to die, so he would help him. He was in the eastern lands, which meant he would not be able to summon monsters. An evil aura began to emanate from the lizard, and he shouted that he would kill him anyway. Then he increased in size, using the growth hormone. His wounds began to heal. A second later, he looked ahead menacingly, shouting that this was the real power, and what they could put at stake. The goblin, looking at his opponent, said that this guy seemed pretty strong, and that he would not be dealt with so easily. Rick, frowning, thought that first he would use the earth element to stop him, then he would need to find a way to deliver the cursed blood into his body. Someone pierced him with a dagger. The protagonist looked ahead in surprise. The lizard opened its mouth wide. Moments later, its body began to glow. A girl with a long sword stood in front of them. Looking ahead, she added that she had finally found him. The big guy, stretching out his hands to her, shouted that a saint had arrived at the camp, let Rick go, and not try to buy him time. The girl lowered her head. A second later, she fell to the floor. The protagonist approached her, saying that she had come a long way and, being completely exhausted, had killed a lizard lord with a rusty sword in one blow. They were lucky that she had passed out due to fatigue. The big guy, approaching her, shouted that they should take advantage of this opportunity and kill her. Grabbing the sword, he added that he was ready to do it for him. Suddenly, he noticed how his comrades had stepped aside. They began to examine the stool, saying that it had an incredible design. Looking at the big guy, he said that she had simply lost consciousness, and he was so afraid of her that he was ready to kill her, and anyway, who said that she needed to be killed. Sitting down, he added that she would be much more valuable alive than dead. He looked at her face for a few seconds, adding that they first needed to tie her up. We are carried to the tents. The goblins look out in surprise and watch the saint. The girl, having lowered herself to her, grabbed her face, saying that she was incredibly soft and elastic. Suddenly the saint began to open her eyes. The protagonist, looking at her, said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The girl, smiling broadly, screamed that she had finally found him. The protagonist, having recoiled in fear, replied that she should not act hastily, she would not be able to defeat them. She tried to jump up, constantly screaming that it was a goblin. Rick, frowning, thought that something was wrong with her. Menacingly looking ahead, he shouted that while his comrades stood aside, he spared nothing for them, raised them as his own children, let them hold her. The big guy grabbed the rope. After a while the girl broke free from the bonds, after which she jumped up to the protagonist. The goblin looked at her, and said that she would now kill their boss because of them. The girl fell to her knees. The protagonist lowered his attentive gaze. The blonde was kneeling in front of the protagonist when she told him that she had not come there to fight him. Haley smiled madly, looking up as she explained that she only hoped that he would give her another child. Bella looked displeased when she said that she really knelt down in front of Rick and asked him for it like that. The goblin leader looked down, confused, assuming that she was joking and asking about how he looked like the goddess of childbirth, Guanyin. The holy swordswoman was shown in profile as she replied that she was serious and that this would help them get rid of the hatred between them, but he had to give her another child or she would not forgive him. The protagonist's mouth dropped open, looking down as he clarified that she really did want to have another child with him. The blonde looked scared when he asked what happened to the first one. Haley clutched her head as she turned to the Almighty Creator and asked for forgiveness for not being able to bear this punishment, exclaiming that those damned villagers prevented her from doing so, and then she began to beg for another chance, promising that she would give birth to another goblin and raise it. The protagonist looked down appraisingly when he realized what was going on, and that because of the cursed blood, she lost her powers, and all of this combined led to problems with her head, so she mistakenly believed that this was a punishment from God, when in reality, she was just trying to distance herself from the fact that she killed a lot of her people. Rick stood in front of the holy swordswoman when he said that God would definitely be angry, since she killed many of her people. However, if she wanted to atone for her sins and have a child with him, she must fulfill certain conditions, and the girl asked what those requirements were, exclaiming that she agreed to everything. The goblin chief looked at her with a smirk, as he replied that she would only have to obey him in everything until she completed her atonement, and that she could consider it another punishment from her god, while thinking that he couldn't ignore such a thing when such a strong warrior was knocking on their door asking them to stay. Haley opened her mouth wide, looking forward as she said that if it was God's will, then she was ready to do anything. The protagonist smiled, replying that it was very good. The goblin stood behind them as the protagonist announced that it was time for them to leave. The holy swordswoman lowered the strap of her dress. She was lying on the hay as she asked Rick to grant her wish. The goblin chief looked pleased as he replied that he would do it if that was what she wanted. The protagonist hovered over the female body, warning that he would not hold back. Haley held her hands above her head, breathing heavily. The girls were standing in front of the tent when one of them exclaimed that she was lying, because they were talking about the strongest holy swordswoman of all time, and that she did not believe a single word she said. Amanda looked ahead in surprise when she cursed. The blonde was lying in front of her when the vampire said that this was indeed a holy swordswoman, and then asked how so. Bella watched the upset brunette when she asked if she believed her now, adding that if this news reached the Empire, then something terrible would happen there. A dense forest stretched out in front of the goblins. Rick looked at Lena standing next to her, who asked the boss about his plans for Haley, to which he replied that she should be near him, but they needed to take care of her, dress her, wash her, and so on. The girl walked away from the leader, answering that everything would be done. The protagonist looked at Lena and asked to wait, and then asked about how many people had died from diseases in the last few days, asking her to cook them, since he had found a worthy use for them, to which she agreed. The protagonist sat on a chair, looking up, when he thought that the death of this lizard could attract the attention of the Lord of the Tomb, deciding that it was time to visit their eagle friend. On the branches of the tree were buildings in the settlement of the tribe of carnivorous eagles. The winged creature was in front of Rick when he asked that he really killed the Lord of the Southern Lands. They stood opposite each other, when Thorn said that he did not need to explain anything to him, and that it was bad, but fixable, and also that if he took the place of the ruler of the Southern Lands, then the tomb would hardly have questions for him. The Goblin chief looked ahead boredly when he asked him again, saying that he was not interested and that he would have one of his subordinates do it. Black Eagle stood up straight when he said that it was not that it was impossible, but it was very risky. The protagonist, looking ahead intently, asked what the risk was. Thorn walked past the protagonist when he told him that the Dream Demon had been dreaming of this title for a long time, and that since the lizard was dead, he would definitely try to take advantage of it, concluding that if it came to a fight, he knew Rick could handle it himself, but his subordinates might lose. The Goblin chief looked away intently when he asked about the Dream Demon. He introduced a dark entity when it was explained that it was a level 8 monster that could control dreams and influence the consciousness of creatures when they were asleep. The Black Eagle spread his wings, standing next to the protagonist when he said that he was not strong in battle, which is why he had never been able to defeat the previous rulers of the South. Then the protagonist asked about whether he controlled dreams, answering that it sounded interesting. Rick touched his chin, looking forward when he thought about how cool it would be if through this demon it was possible to instill in the saint the need to obey him. The head of the goblins crossed his arms over his chest when he asked Thorn if he would show where the evil spirits lived, explaining that he wanted to work with him. Several silhouettes landed near the black trees. The eagle and the protagonist looked ahead when the former told him that he lived there. They were in front of a dark entity, who said that he would now see who had arrived there. The demon in black rags watched the guests when he asked who of them came to him in search of new sweet dreams. Then the system window with his characteristics appeared. The one-eyed monster bared his sharp teeth, smiling when he asked what the carnivorous eagle was doing in the goblin's company. The protagonist took a step forward when he said that he wanted to offer him cooperation, and that the point was that he would help him become the ruler of the Southern Lands, and in exchange for this, he would send certain dreams to people. The dream demon extended his hand to Rick, asking how the little goblin dared to ask him to become the ruler of the South. Then Thorn said that the lizard, which he could not cope with for several years, lost to this guy. The red eye of the evil spirit flashed. The demon opened his mouth wide and laughed loudly, agreeing, and then asked to tell him whose sweet dreams needed to be corrected. The protagonist stood right in front of him as he answered that he was an ordinary person. Thorn leaned towards the protagonist, whispering that he would be going to the Great Tomb to report, asking if he was sure that he wanted to see him as the leader of the Southern Lands, and then warned him not to underestimate the lizard, and that Rick's defeat of him did not mean anything, asking the goblin leader to remember that in his lands, the Lord can call upon powerful monsters as allies. The protagonist turned to the eagle, smiling as he answered that in that case, he asked him to wait a little longer, because he had a new plan. The dream demon raised his hands up as he exclaimed that he would be the ruler of the South. Then Thorn asked the guy what he meant, adding that the evil spirit is a spirit, meaning it does not have a physical body, so he will not be able to absorb his abilities. A system window appeared in front of the protagonist, stating that distorted fusion allowed for a partial merger with the enemy. Rick looked ahead with confidence as he replied that he was right, and that normal goblins would not be able to absorb his abilities, but he was special. The protagonist took a step closer to the demon as he addressed him, offering to discuss the details of cooperation, and saying that he would like to learn the basic principles of dream control in order to understand how to get the most out of it. The one-eyed undead smiled, replying that it was simple, and that if he looked into his eyes, he would not be able to escape the dream trap, and that the only exception was if he himself was significantly stronger than him and was able to recognize that what he was seeing was a dream. A smile appeared on the protagonist's face as he inquired if this was true. Rick held his hand out to the side, standing in front of the enemy as he offered to find out what was faster, the demon's magic, or his blade. Thorn opened his beak wide as he told the goblin leader not to look him in the eye. The red eye had an ominous aura about it. The protagonist looked ahead in shock. The black eagle hovered in the air above his body. Then the dream demon exclaimed that it was a pathetic attempt, and that he overestimated his abilities and was now doomed. The blood vessels in the guy's eyes burst. The protagonist was sitting on a rocky surface. In front of him was an erupting volcano. Rick gritted his teeth, looking down. Lava was seeping through cracks in the ground below him. The lower part of his body was stuck in boiling magma. The evil in black rags opened its mouth when it laughed, saying that he would not escape, and that he would wander in his dreams for eternity, and die, dissolving in it. The one-eyed demon smiled creepily when he asked the head of the goblins if he still wanted to kill him. A beam of light pierced the body of the evil. The demon put his hand on the wound, wondering how so. The protagonist stood in the lava when he said that he had figured out his trap, and that if the creature believed in the reality of its death in a dream, it would die in reality, and then asked about how this is how his ability to control dreams works. His palm was enveloped in blue energy when the protagonist added that it was an excellent technique that could deceive most living beings, but not him. Rick rushed forward, exclaiming that he was rejoicing too soon. The black entity was enveloped in blindingly bright energy. The demon's face was covered in cracks when he asked how this was possible. Shards flew down. The head's pupils narrowed greatly. The evil spirit in black rags was above the goblin when it cursed him and exclaimed that she would never forgive him. The protagonist's hand reached for the weapon. The protagonist shot a stream of flame. The demon fell, raising his hands up. Rick ran, barely touching the ground. The one-eyed monster gritted his teeth. The dream demon turned around, looking back. The goblin leader's teeth were filled with black undead flesh, and a system notification appeared, stating that he had acquired a new skill, dream control. The demon looked at Rick in front of him. The goblin's green flesh swelled. The undead had gotten stuck in the protagonist's overgrown body when the skill, distorted fusion, was realized. Thorn opened his beak in surprise. The man rested his head on the ground. The protagonist stood up straight when his comrade told him that this one looked pretty strong, and then asked what they would do with him. Rick lowered his menacing gaze. The man's body lay on the ground, when the leader thought about how this guy was about level 50, but despite this, his total combat power was about 700 units, and that by the tribe's standards, this was slightly above average. The spiky monster was behind the protagonist, who allowed them to eat it, and then rest and be ready to move at any time. Then they thanked him. 10 days later, clouds were floating above the trees. The goblins were moving forward, surrounding the people. The girls were standing near the protagonist, when he said that it seemed like the workload would be heavier in the future. Rick turned to the ladies, when he asked them if they could handle it, then Lena asked him to leave it to them, exclaiming that they could handle it. Sarah looked away coquettishly, when she turned to the boss, saying that if he satisfied her at least once a day, then she would not get tired of such a load. Sweat was pouring down the goblin leader's face, when he told her that she could not imagine how tired he was today, and he thought that he seemed to have begun to understand the meaning of the proverb that even hail is good in a drought. There were some lopsided tents in the wasteland when someone told the boss that his tribe lived there. A huge monster stood behind the protagonist when he told them that it used to be called the King of Monsters tribe, but now it has a new name, the Mad Sky tribe. The protagonist rested his hand on the dragon's skin. The red lizard rushed up when Rick told them to find a place to spend the night, adding that he was flying out to scout. The monsters were resting near the stone. A purple snake was wrapped around the pillars. The goblin leader lowered his thoughtful gaze, thinking about how this was possible and why so many monsters of the 5th level and above could live in such a small area, concluding that the Great Tomb was truly impressive. A majestic palace was shown a month later. The nuns sat with their hands folded in front of them. The men had their backs to them as the king inquired about how Haley was doing, to which he was told that she had gone into labor 10 minutes ago. The blond man gritted his teeth in anger. The ruler clenched his fists, standing up straight as he cursed, mentioning the goblin. The holy swordswoman lay with her eyes closed. She was surrounded by nuns, who were begging her not to give up. A tall statue of a maiden was shown. The stone statue had a smile on its face. The ceiling and stained glass windows were shown as a loud scream was heard, and words were spoken about getting him. The baby opened its mouth wide. The nuns looked horrified as they recognized the goblin. The elderly novice looked forward in disgust. Someone grabbed her arm. The blonde glared to the side, ordering her not to touch him. In front of them on the bed was a child. Haley looked at her child in confusion as she asked what it was doing. The nun replied that it was probably hungry, adding that it was just born and could already talk, and that it was terrible. The girl wrapped her arms around the child. The holy swordswoman held the baby to her chest, asking her to just look at it, saying that it was hungry. The doors opened as the king walked in and asked the woman in labor how she was feeling. There were novices on either side of the bed as the girl replied that she was fine. The blonde sat with her back to the ruler. The man in the crown looked forward worriedly, wondering what she was doing. Haley looked at her child as she told him that she was breastfeeding it. The king looked angry as he realized that the holy swordswoman was treating the goblin brat like her own child. The ruler was shown in profile as he ordered her to give him the goblin, exclaiming that it was the order of her king. The baby was sleeping in the blonde's arms, who told the ruler that she could not disobey his order, but that it was her lord's will and the punishment she had accepted. The king looked at her in confusion as he asked her what she was talking about. Haley held the baby to her chest as Arnold exclaimed that she had given her all to fight evil for the future of the kingdom, and that God would not punish her for such a thing. The blonde looked ahead with a wild look as she said that she had done something that angered God by killing many soldiers, and that was why he had taken her power and punished her for it. The nun hugged the girl as she protested, saying that it was not a punishment, and that it was only a mistake that anyone could make, so she should not worry about it. Haley pushed the novice away, shouting that she didn't understand, and that none of them understood anything. The blonde looked down in despair as she said that she was no longer a holy swordswoman, and that she was now nothing but a despicable woman who gave birth to a goblin. Haley stood by the bed as she ordered everyone to leave. The king gritted his teeth, looking forward as he called her name, promising that he would help her get her revenge. The man bowed before the throne. Arnold opened his mouth, looking down and asking Klein if he knew why he had summoned him. The young man bowed his head forward as he told the Lord that he could assure him that he would crush the Goblin rebellion and avenge Lady Haley, his grandfather Austin, and all the dead inhabitants of the kingdom. The blonde man in the crown looked ahead intently as he replied that it was fine, and then asked to be allowed to ask something. Arnold frowned deeply when he asked if he was afraid of the Great Tomb. Klein pressed his fist to his chest when he replied that he was not afraid of the monsters that lived there. The Lord placed his hand on the armrest when he said that it was good. The king, standing up straight, extended his hand to the side when he said that he would provide him with 10,000 elite soldiers and 12 holy guards, and that even if he had to enter the lands of the tomb, he should do so, since he was tasked with destroying this tribe at any cost. The red-haired youth opened his mouth in surprise when he realized what the ruler said. Klein closed his eyes, placing his hand on his heart when he exclaimed that he would not let him down. The silhouettes of dragons were visible in the sky. Monsters were watching the settlement. Members of the tribe were walking between the tents. The protagonist stood in front of Sarah when he told her to call the elves, since they needed help with the bandages, to which she agreed. A huge paw appeared next to the protagonist as someone addressed the boss. The green monster stood in front of Rick, who asked how things were going, to which Rick replied that there were more monsters ahead and that they were having a hard time holding them off, and then suggested that he go there himself. The goblin leader raised a menacing glare as he cursed, realizing that they were attracted by the noise of the camp. The undead tiger and the black-scaled horned python advanced. The ghost spider and the bloodthirster walked side by side. The protagonist was sitting on the back of a dragon when he cursed, exclaiming that he had checked the entire area for 10 kilometers ahead, and then wondered where all these monsters had come from. The monsters were walking one after another when the protagonist thought about how he had counted on the fact that if he came to the Great Tomb, they would have time to increase the number of the tribe and build a normal base. The elf was giving birth when Rick thought about how important it was now, because women were giving birth to a new generation, so he could not allow an attack on the camp. The head of the goblins looked down with displeasure when he cursed, realizing that he had been careless. He had a weapon in his hand when he decided that since things had come to this, he had no other choice. The protagonist flew over his brothers on a lizard when he addressed them, ordering them to listen to him carefully and lead the troops to the cliff behind. The protagonist looked away when someone asked about the little goblin riding a dragon. A black eagle soared in the sky when the system window with its characteristics appeared. Rick looked up from under his brows, wondering who it was. The silhouette of a winged creature was visible when he assumed that it was the master of the local lands. Sweat appeared on the face of the goblin leader when he thought about how he remembered that the brother they captured told him about the agreement between the tomb and the church, and how since it was signed, carnivorous eagles have never been seen in the lands of people, and what would happen if he could negotiate with him. Thorn spread his powerful wings, asking the protagonist if he was the ruler of this tribe. The protagonist was sitting on a lizard when he answered in the affirmative. Rick opened his palm in front of him when he asked if the master could help him deal with these monsters. The black eagle opened his beak when he asked why he should help him. The goblin leader was shown in profile when he answered that he would give him 10 human abilities. Thorn looked forward carefully. A shadow fell on his face. The eagle spread his paws to the sides, spreading his wings. Thorn landed behind the protagonist. The carnivorous eagle stood with his back turned when he asked his comrade if he was okay. Thorn and Rick exchanged glances when the former admitted that he was amazed, and then asked how he managed to get out, to which he answered, laughing, that nothing special. A forest was visible in front of the mountains when he added that the dream demon was dead, and that now it was necessary to decide who would rule the southern lands. Then the comrade asked him not to worry, promising that he would put in a good word for him at the Great Tomb. There were green trees growing near the cliff. A tent in a goblin camp was shown. A blonde was lying on a haystack. A cloud of dark energy appeared above her. The protagonist appeared from it. A town square appeared in front of him. People surrounded the holy swordswoman, calling for her to kill her goblin son, punish her and not let her go, and then asked how she, a member of the church of their god, could commit such an unforgivable sin, after which they called her the greatest shame of the church. Rick lowered his serious gaze when he said that she was tormented by a nightmare in which other people condemned what she did. A smirk appeared on his face when he exclaimed that this is what was needed. The townspeople began to cover their faces. A 6-winged angel appeared above them. The people fell to their knees, bowing down when they spoke of this being a divine phenomenon, and that they had seen a miracle, and then asked the Lord to bless them. Haley stood before the townspeople who asked God to punish her, calling her a demoness and explaining that she had sinned against his holy church. People began pointing their fingers at her, calling for the execution of the heretic who had committed the unforgivable sin. The ground beneath her feet began to crumble. The holy swordswoman stood on the edge of the abyss as those around her screamed that this was unforgivable and asked for her to be executed. The girl fell to her knees. Tears flowed from the blonde's eyes as she asked God to forgive her and her sins. Her palm was enveloped in light energy. The people froze, raising their hands. A six-winged creature hovered above Haley as it asked the holy swordswoman if she knew what sin she had committed, to which she replied that she had killed the people she was supposed to protect. The blonde looked up with tears in her eyes as she was told that killing the soldiers who fought alongside her was only the least of her sins and that she needed to give birth to a goblin child and accept her punishment before God would forgive her. Then the girl asked what the greatest sin was. The faceless creature was shown up close as it answered that it covered and protected demons and selfish villains. The six-winged creature was above the humans as it told them that they were overcome by greed and lust for power, and that they were drowning in wine, wicked love and avarice and taking power and all resources into their own hands. Tears flowed from the eyes of the saint as she was told that this was a sin that could not be forgiven. Haley sat on the ground as she said that it turned out that she protected evil and demons. The red monsters surrounded the girl, muttering and growling. Then they explained to her that if it weren't for these demons, she wouldn't have to kill her comrades. Horrible faces appeared in front of the blonde, whose owners began to ask about how she was a saint, saying that she was just a parasite in armor who was in cahoots with that green-skinned spawn, and then began to call for the witch to be burned at the stake and fed to the goblins. The terrible monsters ran forward, screaming that they would kill her and tear her worthless body apart, and then begged for redemption from God by sacrificing this creature. Haley looked ahead with anger. The blonde opened her mouth wide as she told them to be quiet. Streams of energy appeared near her hand. The holy swordswoman swung, holding the sacred weapon, as she called them demons. The girl cut the red flesh, looking forward. Haley slashed at the monsters in front of her, swinging her blade. Blood dripped from the blade. Bodies lay around the blonde as she said that she had killed someone again. The winged creature was in front of the girl when it asked if she now saw what it had told her, adding that they only wanted her to protect them, but none of them had even thought about the fact that she herself might need protection. The messenger of God opened his palm in front of him, saying that once she was excommunicated from the church, these demons would be the first to throw stones at her. Haley looked ahead with empty eyes. Her eyes sparkled as she answered the Lord that she now understood everything. The girl placed her hand in his. The holy swordswoman sat in front of the winged creature, who ordered her to exterminate these demons from now on. Then she asked about how she could get her power back. God was in the air in front of her as he advised her to wait until there was no demon left in the world, summing up that by his will, a messenger would come to her who would help her punish the demons and who would need to be supported. Haley stood with her hand outstretched as God called her a holy swordswoman and asked her not to forget his words.